Dokja was just an ordinary man, living an unremarkable life, yet he carried an unusual obsession. For the past 10 years, his nights were consumed by a web novel called 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. It was an obscure serialized story with over 3,000 episodes, far too daunting for most people. The novel had no fanfare, no recognition, and only a single reader, Dokja. It was a masterpiece in his eyes, a tale that no one else seemed to appreciate. Day after day, year after year, he followed its chapters, leaving solitary comments on its episodes. To him, it wasn't just a story, it was a part of his life. And now, after a decade, the end was finally here. Dokja stared at the screen of his phone, his heart pounding. The notification for the final episode blinked before him. For a moment he hesitated, his finger hovering above the screen. As Dokja tapped into the last episode, all it said was that there are 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Everything is fading and becoming unclear now, but one thing is certain, if you're reading this, you will survive. And with those words, Dokja's world began to change forever. Kim Dokja often introduced himself with the simple phrase, "I'm Dokja," but his name carried layers of meaning. In Korean, Dokja could mean an only child, a reader, or an individualist. Every time he explained his name, it led to misunderstandings. Most people assumed he was referring to being an only child, and while that was true, it wasn't what he intended. His father had given him this name with the hope that Dokja would grow into a strong and independent person. Yet Dokja often felt it was more of a curse. His life had been defined by solitude and detachment, leaving him lonely and single throughout his years. At 28, Dokja was a graduate of a third-rate college and worked as a contractor at a subsidiary of a large corporation. His existence was unremarkable, except for one thing, his passion for serialized web novels, which he read during his subway rides home from work. This particular evening seemed like any other. Dokja was lost in the digital world of his favorite novel, 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, his focus so intense that he barely noticed his surroundings. But then, a voice interrupted his concentration, pulling him back to reality. It was Yu Senga, an HR assistant manager at his company. She greeted him casually, startling Dokja. Senga was well known and admired in the office, her presence always drawing attention. For a moment, Dokja felt nervous. He couldn't believe he had run into her, the most popular girl at work, on the subway of all places. Her pleasant demeanor and the faint scent of her shampoo left him feeling self-conscious. As they exchanged polite conversation, Dokja learned that Senga was heading home as well. She mentioned her team manager was away on a business trip, giving her a rare chance to leave the office early. Dokja's thoughts wandered, imagining the long line of admirers from various departments who would have jumped at the chance to drive her home. When Dokja asked why she was taking the subway, Senga explained that her bicycle had been stolen. Surprised, he inquired further, and she shared how she used her bike to commute, partly for exercise after long hours of overtime and for personal reasons she didn't elaborate on. Dokja couldn't help but notice the effortless charm in her demeanor. As she smiled, he thought to himself about how easily people were drawn to her. Seeing her up close, he understood why so many men at work admired her, but he reminded himself her life and his were worlds apart. He quickly dismissed any notion of connection, knowing their realities were completely different. However, Senga wasn't the reason this particular subway ride stood out. Something else about this evening carried a weight he couldn't yet define. Breaking the silence, Senga spoke again, but this time in Spanish. Her words were foreign to Dokja, and she had to explain that she had said, "Please, lend me some money." He found her dedication to studying languages on the subway fascinating, though he wondered where she might ever use such a phrase. As they continued their conversation, Senga turned her attention to Dokja, asking what he was reading. He felt a flicker of nervousness as he tried to explain, knowing the niche web novel he was engrossed in wasn't something she would likely understand. He awkwardly mentioned that he was studying Korean, a half-truth meant to avoid delving into the specifics. Senga's enthusiasm lit up as she shared her love for novels. She listed her favorite authors, such as Murakami Haruki and Raymond Carver, speaking with a passion that resonated in her voice. Dokja nodded politely, though he felt a growing awareness of how little they had in common. When Senga asked who his favorite author was, Dokja hesitated. He knew that the author of the obscure web novel he was reading would mean nothing to her, so he brushed off the question with a lighthearted remark. Beneath his reserved exterior, Dokja felt the growing contrast between their worlds, hers filled with vibrant interests and social connections, his rooted in the quiet solitude of an obscure story that no one else seemed to care about. Dokja sat quietly in the subway car, his thoughts consumed by a secret hobby he never openly shared. He spent his commutes immersed in serialized web novels, scrolling through chapters on his phone. Though it wasn't something he was proud of, it had been a constant in his life for as long as he could remember. Today, however, wasn't like any other. The story that had been his anchor for the past 10 years, 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, TWSA, was coming to an end. This wasn't just any story, it was a deeply personal part of his life. From his middle school years, when he faced bullying, to the moments of failure that followed, like falling short in his entrance exams and settling for a third-rate college, TWSA had been his refuge. He remembered reading it during his military service, enduring grueling days on the front lines, and even now, as he juggled the instability of being a contract worker, drifting between companies with no clear future. TWSA was a constant, a world he could escape into when reality became unbearable. As he reflected, a bitter realization struck him. He didn't have a single happy memory from all those years, yet this fictional world, which had become his safe haven, was ending. The epilogue of TWSA was set to be uploaded uploaded today, marking the conclusion of a journey spanning 3,149 episodes. It was a monumental saga that began in his late teens and had now accompanied him into adulthood. Dokja thought about how the novel had started with promise, garnering around 1,200 views for its first chapter, but by the 10th chapter, that number had dwindled to 20. By chapter 50, there were only 12 readers left. Eventually, it was just him. TWSA had become a story written for him and only him. He had wanted to support the author, to give something back for the comfort the story had brought him, but his financial struggles made even small donations impossible. Instead, he had left comments to express his gratitude. His attempts to share the series with others had always backfired, with people either dismissing it or accusing him of seeking attention. Some even assumed he was the author trying to promote his own work. People could be cruel, but to Dokja, none of that mattered. His thoughts were interrupted when Senga, sitting nearby, called his name. Her voice jolted him back to the present, and he realized he had almost forgotten she was there. He looked at her, momentarily caught off guard, before attempting to steer their conversation in a new direction. Dokja made a casual remark, reflecting on how quickly time had passed since they both started working at the company. He noted how it felt like just yesterday, but now their contracts were nearing their end. He realized mid-conversation that Senga had already been promoted to a full-time employee the previous month due to her hard work and dedication. Senga responded with a light laugh, reminiscing about how neither of them had truly known what they were getting into when they first started. Dokja chuckled along, adding how it all seemed to have gone by in a blur. Then, with a hint of self-awareness, he apologized for not congratulating her earlier on her promotion. He added a joke about how he should have learned a foreign language too, knowing that Senga was always diligent and had set herself apart with her efforts. Senga brushed off the apology, modestly noting that she hadn't yet completed her performance assessment. However, for Dokja, the difference between them was crystal clear. While Senga had dedicated herself to improving and climbing the ladder, he had spent those same moments immersed in fictional worlds. Internally, he admired her, acknowledging how cool and admirable she was. If life were a novel, Senga would undoubtedly be the heroine, and he knew where he stood. She hesitated for a moment before offering to share the name of the app she uses. For a brief second, Dokja's thoughts wandered. If his life were a different genre, something beyond the mundane nonfiction he was trapped in, could he have been the protagonist? Could things have been different for him? But the fleeting thought dissolved as quickly as it had come. Dokja politely declined her offer, telling her it wouldn't make a difference whether or not she shared the app. Inwardly, he felt a sharp sense of resignation. He understood that the genre of his life wasn't one where he could take center stage. He wasn't destined for heroics or grandeur. He was, and always had been, a reader. Dokja, with quiet resolve, expressed to Senga that he needed to live his own life. His sincere words caught her off guard, but left an impression. Senga, inspired by his determination, agreed wholeheartedly. She declared with enthusiasm that she too would focus on living her life to the fullest. Her energy and optimism lit up the moment, but Dokja's inner thoughts were more pragmatic. He mused that at least his words had stopped her from talking further. Just then, the buzzing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. A notification appeared, a message that immediately piqued his interest. The sender's words were simple: "Thank you." Confused, Dokja wondered if it could be from the author of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, the web novel he had been faithfully following for years. He replied to confirm his suspicion, and the next response left no doubt. It truly was the author. The message was filled with gratitude, explaining that the series had been completed thanks to Dokja's support. The author even mentioned winning a prize in a contest, something Dokja hadn't known about. As Dokja continued reading, the author explained that TWSA would soon become paid content, starting with the release of the epilogue that very day. As a token of appreciation, the author offered to send Dokja a special present and asked for his email address. The idea of receiving a gift caught Dokja off guard. He thought to himself, wondering what it could be. The possibility of a gift card crossed his mind, and he imagined how convenient a $50 gift card would be. Just as his anticipation peaked, a new message notification appeared on his phone. A rush of excitement surged through him. It must be the present. Opening the message, Dokja read its contents carefully. The author thanked him sincerely, stating that starting at 7 p.m., 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse would officially become paid content. The message ended with warm wishes and a cryptic note: "This will help you." Curious about the timing, Dokja glanced at his phone. It was 6:55 p.m., leaving him exactly 5 minutes before the change. Determined to access the novel while it was still free, he quickly navigated to his favorites list. However, to his confusion, the search came up blank. Dokja frowned, wondering if serialized novels were removed without notice when they transitioned to paid content. Just as he tried to rationalize the situation, something unexpected occurred. The train he was riding was plunged into sudden darkness. The floor beneath him began to tremble, the vibrations growing stronger by the second. The atmosphere shifted rapidly. Around him, passengers began to panic. Shouts of fear and confusion filled the air, their voices overlapping in chaos. Someone screamed about a possible terrorist attack, while others called out in terror as the train came to a complete stop. In the midst of the turmoil, Dokja instinctively turned to Senga. She looked shaken but nodded when he asked if she was all right. Though his voice was steady, his mind raced. He reassured her, trying to downplay the situation, but deep inside, unease crept over him. At that moment, the clock struck 7 p.m. Dokja's eyes flicked to his phone, and he felt a strange sense of foreboding. He had no way of knowing that everything was about to change. The world he knew, the life he had lived, were seconds away from a transformation beyond his understanding. A sudden announcement blared through the train. It called for everyone's attention, urging evacuation situation. The words crackled and repeated, growing increasingly frantic. Senga turned to Dokja, her face pale, her voice trembling as she tried to comprehend the unfolding chaos. Dokja's thoughts swirled as he stood frozen, the weight of an unknown future pressing down on him. Before anyone could make sense of the situation, a blinding flash of light erupted from the front gate of the train. It spread through the cabin with an electric surge, its intensity shaking the very ground beneath them. The crowd recoiled in shock, some falling to the floor, others frozen in terror. Then, as if to cement the surreal atmosphere, a new announcement blared from the speakers. It declared that the free service of the 8,612 planetary system had officially come to an end. The message concluded with a chilling proclamation. The main scenario would now begin. Dokja realized the truth. The genre of his life, once mundane and ordinary, had shifted irreversibly into something entirely different. As the tension in the train car grew unbearable, someone suddenly exclaimed, identifying the creature that appeared before them. They called it a dokebi, a mythical being from Korean folklore, akin to a goblin. Dokja's thoughts raced. For reasons he couldn't explain, the term struck a chord deep within him. The subway had come to a halt and darkness enveloped the cabin. While subway stopping wasn't unusual, something about this moment felt different. A sentence from a story, one deeply familiar to him, began to replay in his mind. The absurdity of the situation gripped him. It was impossible. Yet his unease grew. He glanced at Senga, who appeared just as confused as everyone else. Her quiet murmur of disbelief pulled him further into his thoughts. The words of the novel he had read so many times echoed through his mind, describing the downy creature floating in midair. Then it happened. A strange, otherworldly light began to emanate from the train's gate. It was soft, yet unsettling, bathing the cabin in an unnatural glow. The crowd whispered nervously among themselves, their collective confusion and fear palpable. And then Dokja saw it, a creature stepping out of the glow. It had two small horns protruding from its head, its form both eerie and surreal. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. This was exactly what the novel had described. The creature, floating effortlessly, began speaking in a language no one understood. Its voice reverberated through the train car, sounding both melodic and alien. The passengers erupted into frantic murmurs, their voices laced with disbelief. Some speculated it was a trick, perhaps augmented reality. Others expressed disgust at the creature's appearance, unable to comprehend the bizarre scene before them. But Dokja stood frozen, his mind overwhelmed by the convergence of fiction and reality. No one else could grasp what was happening, but he knew. He recognized the dokebi instantly. It was the same creature from the opening paragraph of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. The same being that had set the stage for thousands of chapters of suffering, survival, and chaos. How could this be? The impossible had become real. Senga, staring at the strange creature, speculated aloud that it might be speaking Spanish. She even considered trying to communicate with it, though the idea seemed absurd. Dokja, exasperated, cautioned her against it, sarcastically remarking on the futility of asking an unknown being for help. Senga hesitated but remained unsure, her curiosity battling her fear. The dokebi, floating calmly amidst the commotion, finally spoke again. Its voice rang out clearly, cutting through the chaos. It announced its presence, apologizing for a malfunction with the language patch. Now it could communicate properly, asking if everyone could hear it. One man from the crowd, clearly frustrated, challenged the creature. He demanded to know what it was doing and whether this was some kind of film production. His urgency was fueled by his need to reach an audition. The dokebi, unfazed, chuckled. It found the situation amusing, casually mentioning its research into human habits and the timing of its arrival. It even acknowledged that 7 p.m. was chosen specifically to gather the most customers. Confusion and anger rippled through the passengers. Some demanded answers, others called for the train to restart. They argued against the lack of consent and wondered how this disruption would be addressed. A child's innocent voice broke through the din, asking their mother if the creature was a cartoon, adding a heartbreaking simplicity to the growing panic. As the dokebi encouraged everyone to remain calm and take their seats, its tone turned ominous. It claimed to have something very important to share, its demeanor both playful and commanding. Dokja, however, wasn't paying attention to the creature's words. His mind raced as he observed the scene unfold. The parallels between this moment and the opening chapters of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse were undeniable. He recognized exactly where the story was headed and knew he had to act. Turning to Senga, Dokja urged her not to move. Senga froze, her confusion mirrored by the chaos surrounding them. The dokebi's tone shifted dramatically as it spoke, laughing at the growing commotion. Its lighthearted demeanor turned dark in an instant. Its glowing red eyes narrowed, and it growled with menacing intensity. Then, without warning, a man's head split open, blood erupting from the wound and splattering across the stunned onlookers. Silence gripped the cabin as people froze in shock, unable to comprehend the horrific sight before them. The dokebi, seemingly unfazed, laughed mockingly. Its chilling words cut through the air, dismissing any notion that this was a mere movie or illusion. One by one, heads began to burst in gruesome succession, blood spraying and bodies collapsing lifelessly to the floor. The scene became an unimaginable nightmare, the air heavy with fear and the metallic scent of blood. The dokebi's voice rang out again, commanding attention amidst the carnage. It declared that this was not a dream, nor the familiar reality people had always known. Dokja, watching the horrifying events unfold, felt his skepticism dissolve. He wanted to deny the truth, but the undeniable evidence lay before him, painting the train floor red. His mind reluctantly accepted that this was real. The dokebi continued, mocking humanity's privileged existence. It spoke of life's comforts, breathing, eating, and even reproduction, as luxuries that came without cost. But now, it proclaimed, the era of free living was over. A palpable sense of dread settled over the survivors, their faces pale with terror. Amidst the chaos, one man stepped forward. He was Han from the finance team, a familiar face to Dokja and Senga. Han's trembling voice broke the silence as he offered the dokebi money, his desperation evident in every word. He pleaded, trying to bargain for his life, promising an exorbitant sum, millions if necessary. The dokebi turned its attention to Han, the man who had stepped forward, clutching a wad of cash in his trembling hands. Han, in desperation, offered it to the creature, hoping to bargain his way to freedom. The dokebi seemed amused at first, acknowledging money as a human construct, an agreement of value among people. Han's confidence grew as he affirmed his belief that money could solve anything. But the dokebi's amusement was short-lived. With a snap of its fingers, the cash in Han's hands ignited, the flames consuming it in seconds. Han stared in disbelief, the ashes of his supposed salvation falling to the ground. The dokebi, now with an edge of menace, dismissed the value of money in its realm, explaining its irrelevance beyond human space and time. As a warning, it threatened Han, ensuring no one would attempt such a move again. Han recoiled in fear, his earlier confidence shattered. The dokebi, unfazed, continued with its sinister declarations. It mocked the gathered crowd, hinting at the debt they were unknowingly accruing with each passing moment. Then its horns extended, and with an unnatural burst of speed, it swept through the group, leaving an ominous trail in its wake. A chilling announcement followed, declaring the activation of a mysterious channel number BY7623 and the arrival of entities referred to as constellations. A sound chimed, and suddenly, a translucent screen materialized before everyone. Dokja squinted at the words on the screen. They were cold and unfeeling. Main scenario activated. Prove your value. Kill one or more living organisms. The dokebi's voice rang out again, its tone dripping with cruel delight. It wished the group luck, its sinister laughter echoing through the space as it vanished in a flash of light. Senga, desperate to take action, pulled out her phone and attempted to call the police. Her fingers trembled as she dialed, but no matter how many times she tried, the line wouldn't connect. Frustrated and scared, she turned to Dokja, voicing her fear about what they should do now that the authorities weren't responding. Dokja, though equally unsettled, maintained a calm demeanor. He reminded Senga of the survival game they had discussed before, the one where only a few managed to endure a simulated apocalypse. His words seemed out of place, almost nonsensical given the current chaos, but he pressed on. He explained that this situation could be approached in the same way, as if they were part of a game with rules to follow. Their survival depended on understanding and adhering to those rules. Senga, still grappling with the bizarre events around them, questioned Dokja's reasoning, but his certainty made her pause. To her, the idea sounded absurd, yet there was a strange logic in his approach. Dokja's gaze swept over the scene, taking in every detail. The dokebi with its eerie antennae hovered nearby. The subway cabin was littered with the bodies of those who had perished moments earlier, their blood staining the floor. Office workers crouched in the corners, trembling and covered in crimson splatters. An elderly woman clutched her hands together, praying fervently in her seat. Despite the surreal horror unfolding around him, Dokja's mind worked quickly. He forced himself to accept what had become undeniable. This wasn't just an isolated, strange event. The story of 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, which he had followed for over a decade, was manifesting in the real world. Though it seemed impossible, there was no other explanation. He had to figure out what to do next if he wanted to survive. Before Dokja could act further, a young man stepped forward, his voice authoritative. He called for everyone to calm down, asking the group to stop panicking and pay attention. His commanding tone drew uneasy murmurs, with people questioning his authority. He addressed the chaos, asserting that this situation was akin to a national emergency, and in such moments, unnecessary commotion could lead to even more casualties. Revealing his military badge, the young man identified himself as an Army lieutenant currently serving in Unit 6502. His announcement silenced the murmurs for a moment as the crowd processed this information. He then displayed his phone, showing an official message declaring a Level 1 national emergency. The tension among the crowd grew unbearable as whispers of fear and confusion filled the air. People demanded answers, questioning the young soldier who had identified himself as Lieutenant Hyunsong. Desperate voices asked about the situation, urging him to contact higher authorities, even the president. However, Lee Hyunsong admitted he lacked the clearance to contact the Blue House directly, which only deepened the crowd's anxiety. For Dokja, this chaos was both familiar and disorienting. The declaration of a national emergency didn't surprise him. He already knew it was inevitable, but what caught him off guard was Hyunsong himself. Dokja recognized the name immediately. He was one of the supporting characters in 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, known as Steel Blade Hyunsong. Seeing him in person was surreal, yet something was amiss. This wasn't how Lee Hyunsong's story began in the novel. According to the original plot, he appeared only after the first scenario had ended. Dokja's mind raced to piece together the discrepancies, wondering why events were unfolding differently. Before Dokja could delve further into his thoughts, someone in the crowd shouted that the Prime Minister was giving a speech. All attention turned to their phones as the broadcast began. Senga showed her screen to Dokja, who watched as the Prime Minister addressed the nation. The official statement described the chaos as a series of unidentified terrorist attacks occurring across Seoul and other parts of the country. The government promised to combat the situation with every resource available. For a moment, moment, the crowd found some semblance of hope, though their chatter reflected lingering doubts. Questions arose about the absence of the president, with some speculating that the terrorists had already reached him. Others dismissed it as a baseless rumor fueled by comments on social media. Dokja, however, knew better. The prime minister's speech aligned with the events in the novel, but the absurdity of labeling this as terrorism struck him more forcefully now that he was living through it. Still, he understood that disbelief wouldn't change reality. The moment of fragile calm shattered with a sudden, horrifying bang. The prime minister, visible on every screen, abruptly met the same fate as those before him. His head split open with a sickening crack, and blood sprayed across the space. The broadcast ended in chaos as the signal cut off. The crowd screamed in terror, their panic reignited by the gruesome scene. In the midst of the commotion, the Dokebi reappeared, its sinister presence looming over the survivors. The Dokebi's sinister expression darkened as it observed the panicked crowd. It spoke with an eerie calm, emphasizing its earlier warnings. This was no joke or mere act of terrorism. This was far more sinister. Mocking their disbelief, it hinted at the crowd's familiarity with games and suggested raising the difficulty to force their understanding. Suddenly, a screen materialized before everyone, displaying a timer. The countdown, initially longer, had been drastically reduced. Panic spread like wildfire as the crowd noticed the change. The system message revealed a grim twist. Only 10 minutes remained, and if a death did not occur within the next 5, everyone in the cabin would face termination. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from confusion to hysteria. Voices overlapped in frantic questions and desperate pleas. Some shouted at Hyunsong, begging for instructions, while others cursed the absence of police or any authority capable of intervening. Lee Hyunsong, though clearly shaken, attempted to restore order. He urged everyone to calm down and listen to him, but his words did little to quell the rising tide of fear. Dokja watched it all unfold with a mix of detachment and unease. The events were progressing exactly as they had in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Yet, something about the situation felt wrong. Hyunsong, a major supporting character, had appeared earlier than expected. Dokja's thoughts lingered on the missing piece, an individual who should have made their presence known by now. A sudden noise shattered his contemplation. Loud bangs came from the cabin behind them, followed by gruesome splatters of blood against the door. Screams erupted as the crowd realized someone had been murdered in the adjacent cabin. Panic turned to chaos as they scrambled to block the door, desperate to prevent anyone or anything from entering. One brave soul stepped forward to secure the entrance, but was met with an invisible force. Sparks flared as electricity coursed through the air, throwing him back in a violent jolt. Cries of confusion filled the cabin as others tried to comprehend what was happening. A system message appeared once more, cold and unfeeling. No one may enter or leave the cabin until the scenario is complete. The Dokebi's wicked grin widened as it addressed the terrified crowd, mocking their hesitance and lack of action. It reveled in their fear, calling the stalled scenarios in some cabins boring and deciding to give them a push. With a snap of its fingers, a large screen appeared in the air, capturing everyone's attention. On the screen, a high school classroom came into view. Someone in the cabin recognized the scene and muttered that it was Taipeng Girls High School. The classroom was filled with frightened students, their panic evident as a piercing sound erupted in the space. Then came the system message. The time limit had expired, and the checkout process had begun. Dokja's chest tightened as the gruesome spectacle unfolded. The terrified cries of the students filled the air as their heads were grotesquely split open, blood painting the classroom in horrifying streaks of crimson. The agonizing screams for help echoed in his ears, making the scene unbearable to watch. He shut his eyes momentarily but couldn't block out the chaos. When he opened them again, the carnage had taken an even darker turn. Amid the chaos, one of the girls stood apart, her hands trembling as she grabbed the neck of another student. The victim struggled, but the grip tightened with alarming force. The life drained from her as she collapsed to the floor. The system displayed a chilling announcement. The survivor of the scenario was Jinny Lee, a second-year student from Class B. The Dokebi burst into wild laughter, mocking the scene's brutality as if it were pure entertainment. Its twisted sense of humor left the cabin's occupants trembling in dread. Dokja, though unnerved, couldn't stop his thoughts from racing. Something about this entire sequence felt off. Events he recognized from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse were unfolding, but they seemed jumbled, blending with occurrences that had never been part of the story. He wondered why certain critical characters hadn't yet appeared, their absence making the situation even harder to predict. Instinctively, Dokja reached for his phone, hoping for a lifeline. If he could just reread the story, he might be able to find the missing pieces and understand what was happening. But when he searched for the series, it was gone. The realization struck him hard. 3 ways to survive the apocalypse had been removed. The absurdity of the situation weighed heavily on Dokja's mind. 3 ways to survive the apocalypse had never been popular, making its sudden disappearance baffling. Searching for answers, he went back to the message he received earlier. To his astonishment, he noticed an attached file titled Apocalypse Text. His heart raced. Was this a gift from the author? Dokja wondered if this counted as illegal sharing, though it seemed irrelevant since the sender was the novel's creator. Curiosity overtook him and he tapped the attached file. As soon as he did, his vision was flooded with messages from the system. It announced he had received an exclusive tribute and unlocked a skill slot. The implications of this revelation began to form in Dokja's mind. In 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, each survivor was given a unique attribute and a skill linked to it. The setup resembled a game system, and Dokja knew that discovering his attribute would be crucial. Eagerly, he tried to open the attribute window, but the system denied him access. Panic set in. If he couldn't see his attribute, he wouldn't know the skill he had unlocked. Frustration bubbled within him as he repeatedly attempted to access the window, but to no avail. Left with no choice, he decided to focus on the attached file. As soon as he began reading, another system message appeared, announcing that his attribute had been activated. The notification was followed by a strange sensation rushing through his body. Dokja's mind processed information at an incredible speed. He realized his attribute was related to reading. He could now absorb text far faster than before. In less than a minute, he finished rereading the opening chapter of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. His eyes glowed faintly as comprehension dawned on him. This newfound ability allowed him to recall details with clarity, even fragments he had long forgotten. It all clicked into place. The unsettling differences in events around him made sense. He recalled the specifics of the prologue. Cabin 3707. The reason everything felt out of sync was that the protagonist of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse wasn't in his cabin. They were in the cabin directly behind his, 3807. With this realization, a chilling thought crossed Dokja's mind. In the story, the events that unfolded in cabin 3807 were nothing short of horrific. What could have happened to the people trapped there? Sangha, standing close to him, voiced her concern. She suggested they should intervene, but Dokja, recalling the events of the novel, knew better. From his perspective, it was already too late for the people in 3807. He silently reflected that their fates had likely been sealed. His attention snapped back to the present as Namwoon Kim, a man filled with aggression, grabbed another passenger by the collar. The older woman whimpered and pleaded for release, but Kim's fury knew no bounds. With a savage motion, Kim struck her brutally, causing blood to spatter across the cabin. The sight was horrifying, but Kim showed no remorse, shouting over the commotion and asserting his dominance. Dokja's mind remained detached, his thoughts analyzing the unfolding events. He knew the outcome all too well. Of everyone in this cabin, only 2 were destined to survive. Sangha, despite her efforts, was not one of them. Neither was he. Amid the chaos, Han Myung-go stepped forward. He grabbed Kim's arm, challenging his actions with frustration and anger. But Kim, unfazed, mocked the older man, questioning his understanding of the situation. Kim turned sharply, pointing toward the screen where the carnage in cabin was being broadcasted. The sound of screams and the sight of death filled the air, sending chills through everyone who watched. Kim declared that the army wouldn't save them, and that the scenario required someone to die for others to survive. Han, stunned by Kim's words, stammered in disbelief. He struggled to comprehend the cold logic Kim had accepted. Namwoon Kim stood at the center of the chaos. He spoke of the harsh new rules of survival, explaining that they had no choice but to decide who would live and who would die. The weight of his words crushed any remaining hope of normalcy. He justified his actions by framing them as necessary for survival, asserting that in this new world, morality no longer mattered. With his speech, Kim began unleashing violence with his fists, his blows landing with ferocity on a hapless victim. Dokja watched with a sinking feeling, recognizing this moment all too well. Kim, as described in 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, was one of the first to embrace the brutal world they were now trapped in. He was the one who shattered the remnants of morality, creating a fracture in the fragile structure of society that had held them together. Kim's outburst stirred others in the cabin. Some, driven by desperation, joined him. Others stood frozen, silently watching the scene unfold, unable to act. The cabin became a suffocating stage for cruelty, and Dokja could feel the oppressive atmosphere closing in. In his mind, Dokja replayed the events of the novel. He knew that if no one died within the next 5 minutes, the consequences would be catastrophic. Everyone in the cabin would perish. His thoughts turned to a comparison he had read long ago about executioners pulling the lever of an electric chair simultaneously to obscure the identity of the killer. The scene before him mirrored that idea, a shared responsibility for violence, a collective guilt diluted by desperation, and then it happened. The elderly woman, nameless and defenseless, became the first victim. The sight hit Dokja like a blow to his chest. He knew that her death was necessary to preserve the flow of the story he relied on for survival, but the morality of standing by and letting her die weighed heavily on him. Could he really justify her death just so he could live? Beside him, Sangha cried out in alarm, horrified by the escalating violence. Her instincts urged her to intervene, but Dokja grabbed her, stopping her from rushing forward. He understood the danger too well. If she acted recklessly, she would become the next victim. Sangha, torn between her compassion and Dokja's warning, hesitated, her fear battling her sense of justice. In the chaos unfolding around him, Dokja's thoughts turned to Sangha. Despite the grim situation, he couldn't help but recognize her unwavering resolve and compassion. She was the kind of person who would shine in any story, but this wasn't her story. In this harsh new world, Sangha wasn't the heroine destined to change the course of events. Dokja turned to her and asked her to stay back, pleading for her to trust him just this once. Though she hesitated, her concern etched on her face. She nodded reluctantly. Dokja knew he couldn't let her interfere. It wasn't the right time, and any mistake now could cost them both their lives. He exhaled deeply, steeling himself. The truth was, his hesitation hadn't been out of fear of Kim or the others, nor had it been due to apathy. He had been waiting, biding his time for the perfect moment to act. And now, with tension boiling over, that moment had come. In a burst of speed, Dokja launched himself into the fray. His movement was so swift that a trail of smoke seemed to follow him, leaving the crowd bewildered. Confusion spread among the onlookers as they questioned the sudden appearance of the smoke. Before anyone could react, Dokja crashed into the group surrounding the elderly woman. The impact was explosive, sending Kim sprawling across the floor. Kim groaned as he skidded to a stop, fury flashing in his eyes as he scrambled to his feet. His shout of outrage cut through the cabin, but Dokja ignored him. The crowd hesitated briefly before some urged others to continue continue their savage act, their desperation overriding any semblance of reason. To the onlookers, it may have appeared as though he had intervened solely to save the old woman, but his mind was already calculating his next move. This was only part of his plan. He scanned the cabin quickly, his sharp eyes searching for something or someone. Amid the turmoil, he spotted what he was looking for. A young boy stood silently at the edge of the chaos, clutching a box tightly in his small hands. Without hesitation, Dokja approached him and slid his hands into the box, retrieving its contents. The weight of his plan settled on his shoulders as he turned to the others. The old woman was still being beaten mercilessly, and her cries echoed through the cabin. Gathering his resolve, Dokja shouted, his voice firm and cutting through the madness. His words stopped the attackers in their tracks, drawing everyone's attention. He addressed the crowd, challenging their desperation and their belief that killing the old woman would guarantee their survival. His reasoning was sharp, questioning what they would do after this momentary reprieve. If the scenario was as the Dokebi had described, it wasn't just one death required, it was one death per person. Namwoon Kim, his grin wicked and his confidence unshaken, mocked Dokja's argument. He made it clear that someone like Dokja would likely be next. His words resonated with the crowd, but Dokja had anticipated this reaction. Internally, Dokja steadied himself. He knew Kim's twisted logic well, but this wasn't about matching Kim's brutality. This was about survival without descending into the depths of savagery. Calmly, Dokja redirected their attention, offering them an alternative. He reminded them of the exact wording of the scenario. The requirement wasn't to kill a human being, it was to kill one or more living organisms. With deliberate care, Dokja held up an insect he had found. The realization hit the crowd like a wave. Insects. The answer was so simple and had been right before their eyes all along. The tension in the room shifted and desperation turned into a frenzied determination. The crowd surged forward, their focus now on the insect in Dokja's hand. The unity in their movement was startling, driven not by bloodlust, but by a desire to escape the horror of their predicament without becoming murderers. Dokja felt his heart pounding in his chest, a strange exhilaration coursing through him amidst the chaos. He was smiling, a fact that both surprised and unsettled him. In that moment, he wondered at his own nature. Had he always been this person, someone who could find joy in such precarious situations? Before the mob could reach him, Dokja acted. He crushed the insect in his hand and tossed the box filled with the remaining bugs into the air. The lid flew open, and the insect scattered, fluttering above the frantic crowd. The system message appeared before Dokja, confirming his action. The first kill had been accomplished, and he was rewarded with 100 coins. He quickly glanced at the timer, noting that 3 minutes remained. The crowd erupted into a frenzy, their attention now on the flying insects. Shouts of anger and desperation filled the air as people scrambled to capture the tiny creatures. Some cursed Dokja, others yelled in triumph when they managed to grab one. The scene descended into chaotic madness as they fought for their survival. Kim, however, turned his focus back to Dokja. He questioned Dokja's actions. Dokja's response was simple but deliberate. He pointed out the limited number of insects in the box, a cold reminder that not everyone could survive. Kim's reaction was wild laughter, his voice cutting through the clamor of the cabin. To him, Dokja's reasoning seemed absurd. He dismissed it outright, accusing Dokja of throwing the box not to save anyone, but to relish in the spectacle of their desperation. Dokja, however, knew exactly who Kim was. This was the kind of man who thrived in chaos, someone who delighted in cruelty and reveled in the collapse of order. His rampant nature made him dangerous, but it also made him predictable. As Dokja's thoughts raced, a system message interrupted his focus. His personal skill, character profile, activated, flooding his vision with information about Kim. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing layers of the person before him. In that moment, Dokja reflected on the kind of individual Kim was. He realized Kim wasn't like the many others who had succumbed to despair in the face of this apocalyptic nightmare. Most young individuals, especially those burdened by dark and edgy fantasies, had crumbled under the weight of the unfolding horrors. Many couldn't endure the harsh reality and took their own lives. But Kim was different. His unique mindset set him apart. He had been waiting for a world like this to become real. He was the type who thrived in chaos, adapting with alarming speed to the new rules of this twisted reality. Known later as the delusional demon, Kim embodied his nickname perfectly, a dangerous mix of delusion and capability. Dokja considered the offer. Forming a partnership with Kim could ensure his survival, at least for the immediate future. But Dokja wasn't just another survivor in this world. He was a reader who had consumed the story of 3 ways to survive the apocalypse in its entirety. He knew Kim's true nature and the kind of chaos he would unleash. The timer continued to tick, with less than 3 minutes remaining. Around them, the other survivors scrambled desperately, searching for insects to kill. Their voices were frantic, their movements chaotic. Kim, undeterred by Dokja's silence, continued to press. Dokja, however, declined the offer. He worked best alone. Kim's grip on Dokja's shoulder was firm, not immediately threatening, but laced with a silent warning. His focus, however, shifted back to the elderly woman, his intent unmistakable. He raised his hand to strike her again, but Dokja moved swiftly, intercepting the attack mid-air. The sudden interference seemed to irritate Kim. His expression twisted into one of mockery as he jeered at Dokja, accusing him of playing the hero or suffering from some moral delusion. His words dripped with disdain, reflecting the kind of arrogance that made Dokja despise this character when reading 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Dokja thought about how much he had disliked Kim's personality in the story. To him, Kim epitomized the reckless arrogance of youth, someone who believed his impulsiveness was a shield against the world. A system message flashed before Dokja's eyes that Kim despises you. Your affinity affinity towards Kim has slightly increased. The animosity in Kim's words escalated as he demanded Dokja step aside. Instead, Dokja held his ground, and Kim's irritation boiled over. His first punch came fast, fueled by raw aggression, but Dokja anticipated it and dodged effortlessly. Kim's reaction shifted from annoyance to amusement. He grinned as if impressed, commenting on Dokja's skill. Another punch followed, but Dokja blocked it with precision. Dokja's observations deepened. The way Kim moved, the raw energy radiating from his strikes, it all pointed to something familiar. Dokja realized this was the manifestation of Kim's edgelord attribute, a defining feature of his character in the novel. The tension escalated as Kim charged again. His skill, Grimdark Awakening, activating in the heat of the moment. His next attack carried an entirely new level of power. Dokja, relying on his knowledge and quick reflexes, managed to dodge again, but the force of Kim's fist crashing into the floor was immense. Kim's delight was palpable. The raw strength he exhibited seemed to fuel his excitement as he reveled in the power coursing through him. His confidence and satisfaction explained why the protagonist of TWSA had once considered recruiting someone like him, despite his volatile and dangerous nature. Dokja's mind raced. He wondered if now was the right time to use one of his skills. As he debated, a system message appeared before him. You have unlocked level 1 of your personal skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. The name of the skill caught Dokja off guard. He briefly pondered its implications. What did it mean to possess the perspective of an omniscient reader in a world that had come to life? Meanwhile, the rest of the survivors were still frantically searching for the insects, their desperation mounting with every passing second. However, their focus shifted when the sound of Kim and Dokja's confrontation drew their attention. Confusion spread among them as they turned to witness the chaotic struggle between the two. Kim unleashed a flurry of punches, his arms swinging wildly from every direction as he tried desperately to land a blow on Dokja. His movements grew more erratic, frustration boiling over with each missed attempt. His attacks were fierce, but none of them connected. Dokja remained calm, his focus unwavering. He activated his personal skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, and the system immediately notified him of Kim's next move. The first warning pointed to his right shoulder. Dokja sidestepped, effortlessly avoiding the strike. The next alert was a blow aimed at his face, and Dokja stepped back just in time to evade it. It was as if Dokja could predict Kim's every move. The skill granted him a sense of clarity, almost like reading Kim's mind. He knew exactly where each attack would land before Kim even made the move. The frustration on Kim's face deepened as his relentless swings hit nothing but air. Despite his advantage, Dokja understood his limitations. The skill allowed him to dodge Kim's attacks, but retaliating was beyond his current ability. He resolved to hold out just a little longer, knowing the timer was ticking down. As the tension escalated, Kim's focus shifted suddenly to the elderly woman, his intentions clear. Dokja noticed the change in his gaze and realized the danger. If the old lady died, Kim would clear the scenario and advance. That outcome was unthinkable. Someone like Kim moving on to the next stage would only spell disaster. Without hesitation, Dokja rushed to protect the woman. His movement was swift, but Kim anticipated it, a smirk forming on his face. The fight was no longer just physical. It was a battle of wits and strategy. Kim revealed a knife, pulling it out with a flourish. The system alerted Dokja again, pinpointing the target, his heart. The blade came toward him with deadly intent, but Dokja moved just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike. The knife grazed his shoulder, leaving a sharp sting that made him grit his teeth in pain. The wound burned, the sensation searing through him like fire. Dokja felt the warmth of blood trickling down, but he didn't let it stop him. With determination etched on his face, he scooped the old lady into his arms. The pain was excruciating, but his resolve to protect her was stronger. Dokja felt the weight of his situation pressing down on him. Death was no longer an abstract concept. It was right in front of him, closing in with every passing second. The presence of Kim was a brutal reminder that this world operated on the unyielding law of survival of the fittest. But deep down, Dokja knew this wasn't a new truth. The world had always been like this. The apocalypse had only stripped away the pretense. The strong preyed on the weak, and now that rule was laid bare for all to see. To survive, Dokja realized he had to accept this reality. There was no room for hesitation or doubt. If he faltered now, he would die, and Kim would walk away victorious. Kim taunted him, his confidence unwavering as he loomed over Dokja. He was certain of his impending victory, mocking Dokja's apparent weakness and fatigue. But Dokja's mind was racing, piecing together a plan even in the face of despair. In a moment of clarity, Dokja thought back to the system's rules. He asked a pointed question, one that seemed to confuse Kim. But for Dokja, the answer was clear. He clenched his fist tightly, crushing the insect egg within his grasp. The system immediately responded to his action, bombarding Dokja's vision with notifications. The text confirmed that he had killed a living organism. The sound of alerts filled the air, signaling his success. Kim's surprise turned into anger. He couldn't understand how Dokja had made that move, and he charged forward for one final strike. His knife glinted in the dim light, aimed straight at Dokja's chest. As the blade closed in, another wave of notifications filled Dokja's view. The system informed him that he could use the coins he had obtained, asking if he wanted a tutorial. Dokja had no time for explanations. He skipped the tutorial and made an instant decision, investing 2,700 coins into his stamina. In an instant, Dokja felt a surge of energy coursing through his body. His stamina and physical durability increased dramatically. When Kim's knife made contact with Dokja's chest, it didn't pierce through. Despite all of Kim's strength and effort, the blade stopped short, unable to break Dokja's enhanced body. Kim froze in disbelief, his confidence crumbling as he realized realized something was terribly wrong. His voice faltered, barely managing to express his confusion. But Dokja's gaze turned icy, a cold certainty in his eyes. He had no intention of faltering now. The timer ticked down relentlessly, the seconds slipping away. Kim, panicked and enraged, swung his knife wildly. Each attack was more desperate than the last, yet Dokja remained unharmed. The blows glanced off his reinforced body, leaving Kim more furious and more terrified. Despair consumed Kim. His bravado vanished as he dropped to his knees, pleading for his life. He begged for mercy, his words tumbling out incoherently as fear overtook him. But Dokja's resolve remained firm. This was no longer a world ruled by kindness or outdated ideals. Kim's pleas carried no weight in this new reality. Dokja stood unmoved, his decision final. The timer hit 0. What followed was a gruesome inevitability. A scream tore through the air as Kim met his end. Blood spilled in a violent stream, marking the end of his short and chaotic life. His presence, once dominating and aggressive, was silenced in an instant. The system responded immediately, notifying Dokja that the main scenario, Prove Your Value, had ended. The Dokebi reappeared, its voice carrying a mocking tone as it surveyed the scene before it. The once orderly train compartment was now a battlefield. Bodies lay scattered across the blood-soaked floor, painting a grim portrait of survival. Only 5 remained standing. Dokja's thoughts drifted back to his final moments with Kim. He recalled the desperate pleas, the haunting words that lingered in his mind. Had been right in some ways. There was a similarity between them. Dokja reflected on his own actions and the guilt they carried. He acknowledged the weight of his choices, yet an odd calmness enveloped him. It was as if he were still a reader of the novel, detached from the chaos, observing events rather than truly participating in them. A cold wind blew outside, carrying with it the chill of a world that had changed beyond recognition. The train jolted, then began to move. The survivors' initial relief was evident, especially in Myungo Han, who clung to the hope that the moving train signaled a return to normalcy. But as the train picked up speed, their gazes shifted to the windows. What they saw left them frozen in disbelief. Outside, the world had transformed into a bizarre alien landscape. Towering giant snakes roared into the air, their serpentine bodies twisting through the ruins of what once was. Dokja stood silently. The familiar world they had known was gone, replaced by a nightmarish reality. Yet, amidst the chaos, he possessed something no one else did: knowledge. He was the only reader who understood the course of this story, the only one who knew how this new world would unfold and eventually end. The train came to a halt on an abandoned bridge, its sudden stillness causing unease among the survivors. Looming over the bridge was a monstrous creature, its enormous serpent-like body casting an ominous shadow. Its sharp, predatory eyes scanned the train as though waiting for the slightest movement to strike. This was no ordinary beast. It was an ichthyosaur, a creature that would later be classified as a grade 7 monster in the novel. Inside the train, the atmosphere was heavy with fear. The survivors looked out at the terrifying sight before them, their breaths quick and uneven. Dokja, however, remained calm, his thoughts focused. He recalled the rules of this new world. The scenarios were the governing force, and creatures like the ichthyosaur wouldn't attack unless they were part of a designated scenario. For now, they were safe. Dokja's gaze shifted to the glowing stars that appeared in his vision, each representing a mysterious viewer from beyond. There were 21 in total, an impressive number for a novice Dokaibi's channel. These stars belonged to the constellations, beings of immense power who watched the unfolding scenarios across the universe. They were the architects of this chaos, observing and influencing events for their own amusement. Dokja understood their importance, knowing that their preferences and support could sway the course of his survival. He also realized that his actions had disrupted the original flow of the story. Kim's death had likely angered some of these celestial beings, but for every constellation that loathed him, there were others who found him intriguing. Dokja's lips curved slightly in a sardonic smile as he thought about their attention. They were the spectators now, and he was the centerpiece of their twisted entertainment. In time, they would realize the cost of their fascination. The cold wind blowing through the gaps in the train chilled the survivors, pulling Dokja out of his thoughts. Senga Yu approached him, her expression filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. Dokja apologized to her for not being able to save the elderly woman earlier. Senga hesitated before thanking him for his earlier act of throwing the cage toward her, acknowledging the risk he took. Dokja dismissed her gratitude with indifference, his mind already moving to the next challenge. He reflected on Senga's survival. She had proven herself intelligent and quick to adapt, traits that allowed her to endure the chaos. But for Dokja, the weight of his choices was a constant burden. His actions had determined who lived and who didn't. Gratitude from the survivors felt misplaced to him. He saw himself as the reason for their suffering just as much as their salvation. The Dokebi returned, its glee palpable as it surveyed the aftermath. The creature reveled in the carnage, delighting in the unexpected number of survivors. It expressed its gratitude to the constellations for their sponsorship, thrilled by the attention its channel was receiving. 21 constellations were watching, each invested in the drama that had unfolded. Dokja surveyed the train cabin, counting the survivors. There were 5 of them, more than he had anticipated. Hyunsong stood out as expected. His athletic build and strength made his survival seem inevitable. Then there was Gilyong Lee, the young boy whose determination was evident despite his fragile appearance. defense. Dokja recalled the moment he gave the boy an insect, asking him if he wanted to survive. When the boy nodded, they had formed a silent pact. This wasn't an act of kindness, Dokja admitted to himself. If anything, it was hypocrisy. He too wanted to live, and aligning with others increased his chances. It felt shameless, but in this new reality, survival outweighed all other considerations. The events that would follow demanded attention from the constellations, and alliances, however fleeting, were necessary. His thoughts shifted to Myungo Han, a man whose survival seemed more like sheer luck. Dokja couldn't help but wonder why someone as well off as Han was even taking the subway. It was a detail that nagged at him, though it didn't seem important enough to dwell on for long. Pulling Dokja out of his thoughts, the Dokebi spoke again. The creature praised their survival, even expressing surprise that this particular group had made it through the first scenario. It referred to them as bugs who had somehow proven their worth, a statement that stung. To the Dokebi, they were nothing more than grasshoppers, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Dokja's unease deepened as the Dokebi continued. It spoke of rewards for their success, announcing that they were now eligible to be sponsored by constellations. This, it claimed, was an exciting opportunity, but the survivors, unfamiliar with the term, didn't share its enthusiasm. Only Dokja understood the significance. He was the only one who knew what constellations were or what sponsorship entailed. The Dokebi explained further, painting a grim picture of their weakness. In their current state, they wouldn't survive the next scenario. Even the weakest of creatures, such as ground rats, could end their lives with ease. However, there were powerful beings who pitied them, beings who watched from afar and had the ability to grant them strength. These were the constellations, and their sponsorship was both a lifeline and a contract. Lee Hyun-song's confused reaction was evident, his mind grappling with terms like sponsorship and constellations. However, the Dokebi quickly dismissed their confusion, declaring that experience would be their best teacher. With a snap of its fingers, glowing message boxes appeared before each survivor. The notification announced the process of sponsor selection. It instructed the recipient to choose a constellation, emphasizing that the chosen one would serve as a reliable sponsor moving forward. Dokja examined his options silently, noting the contents of his message box. He wasn't surprised to see 4 constellations showing interest in him as their incarnation. As he mulled over his choices, Senga Yu's startled voice caught his attention. She had received 2 options, an uncommon occurrence for someone new to this system. Her good fortune didn't surprise Dokja. She had always been lucky in subtle ways. Feigning ignorance, he suggested she approach the selection like an aptitude test. Internally, Dokja reflected on the significance of this moment. The constellations were not just powerful entities, they were spectators who observed their struggles through the Dokebi's channels. They chose humans they favored to sponsor, forming a contract that granted power in exchange for entertainment. This pivotal event marked the start of the sponsor selection system, one of the defining features of TWSA. Turning his focus to his own options, Dokja began analyzing the identities behind the cryptic names of the constellations. The first was the Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, a powerful being leading the Black Cloud constellation group. Known for granting a significant boost in power early on, this sponsor was ideal for scenarios requiring physical strength and stamina. However, the cost was severe. Overusing this power led to a loss of sanity, transforming the user into a mindless killer. Dokja knew this sponsor's infamous reputation, having backed a brutal antagonist in the novel. He decided to put this option on hold. The second option intrigued him, the demonic Judge of Fire. Despite the name, this constellation was not demonic, but rather Archangel Uriel, a being of absolute good. Uriel's fiery judgments and righteous aura made her a formidable sponsor. However, Dokja hesitated. The restrictions imposed by such a sponsor could hinder his adaptability in the unpredictable scenarios ahead. The third option stood out as a mystery, the Secretive Plotter. Despite being a dedicated reader of TWSA, Dokja had no recollection of this constellation being an option. It wasn't mentioned explicitly in the novel, making its inclusion both puzzling and intriguing. Without more information, Dokja decided to move on. The final option sent a thrill through him, the Prisoner of the Golden Headband. The title alone hinted at an extraordinary being. Dokja quickly pieced together the identity. The Great Sage, Heaven's equal, Sun Wukong, the legendary Monkey King, bound by his golden headband, was a symbol of raw, unrestrained power. Known for his ability to annihilate countless monsters and crush armies with his staff, Sun Wukong's inclusion as a sponsor was astonishing. In the novel, a character sponsored by him had become a near-invincible force. Dokja couldn't help but wonder why such a powerful being had taken an interest in him. Could he truly wield such immense power to its fullest? As his thoughts raced, a system notification interrupted his deliberations. The sponsor selection had ended, locking in the choices of each survivor. The Dokebi observed the survivors with a smug expression, its playful tone hinting at a deeper amusement. It seemed pleased with the choices made, even calling one particularly unique. While expressing that there would be many more opportunities for selections in the future, it abruptly announced a short break, stating it needed to prepare for the next scenario. With a mischievous grin, the Dokebi vanished, promising to return in 10 minutes. Dokja immediately stepped forward, addressing the group. His calm and composed demeanor gave the others a sense of direction amidst their confusion. Hyun-song approached him, introducing himself formally. The handshake between them was firm, a reflection of Lee Hyun-song's disciplined background. He revealed that he had been in the army but now found himself cut off from his unit. Dokja noted the man's strength and firm grip, a testament to his role as a tanker in the early stages of TWSA. Dokja's thoughts raced as he recognized the importance of recruiting Lee Hyun-song for their survival. Lee Hyun-song expressed his gratitude for Dokja's actions earlier. He acknowledged that without Dokja's intervention, their chances of survival survival would have been slim, and even if they had survived, they would have lost their humanity in the process. As Dokja prepared to respond, a sudden hand grabbed his shoulder. It was Han Mayongo, his former colleague. The man's loud and overly familiar demeanor clashed starkly with the tense atmosphere. Han attempted to assert dominance, insisting Dokja address him respectfully, as though the world had not drastically changed. Dokja, however, had no patience for Han's antics. He responded sharply, his words cutting through Han's bluster. Han's startled reaction revealed his inability to adapt to their new reality. Dokja didn't hold back, pointing out the absurdity of Han's complaints and reminding him of the gravity of their situation. He bluntly stated that Minosoft, the company they worked for, was irrelevant now. Turning his focus to the group, Dokja addressed everyone, his voice steady and firm. He reminded the survivors that the Dokebi's warnings were no joke and that the strange game-like interface, skills, and attributes were now their reality. Lee Hyun-sung admitted that the situation resembled the novels he had read during night shifts, but struggled to believe it was real. Dokja met his uncertainty with a grim confirmation. This was no dream. Lee Hyun-sung acknowledged Dokja's composure and expressed his relief that at least someone seemed to have a grasp of their situation. He asked Dokja what their next steps should be. Without hesitation, Dokja declared that they needed to leave the cabin. The others, however, reacted with immediate fear and disbelief. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the group. Some questioned Dokja's judgment, calling him reckless for suggesting such a dangerous course of action. Lee Hyun-sung, while calm, admitted that he was hesitant to leave, citing the dangers outside and his own desire to check on his unit. Fear of the unknown paralyzed the group, their resistance to the idea palpable. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Convincing Lee Hyun-sung to join him was critical. He couldn't let the tanker, one of the key figures in surviving the early stages, remain in the false safety of the cabin. Suddenly, loud slams against the cabin door shattered the tense atmosphere. The group's attention shifted to the source of the sound. The repeated, forceful impact on the door was unnerving. Dokja's thoughts churned. It was too soon for the next scenario. The Dokebi hadn't returned yet. This could mean only one thing. The person on the other side of that door was the sole survivor of the adjacent cabin, Subway Cabin 3707. For Dokja, the identity of this person was already clear. It was him, the true protagonist of this story. Realizing the urgency, Dokja repeated his call to action, his voice firm and unyielding. They had to leave immediately or they wouldn't survive. Lee Hyun-sung, torn between caution and trust, hesitated but was ultimately swayed when Dokja pointed out the grim truth. The survivor on the other side of the door had slaughtered everyone else in his cabin. This wasn't someone they could afford to meet. With the group finally moving, they began searching for an escape route. Sangha attempted to open one of the cabin doors but found it broken. Han tried another door with similar results. Frustration mounted as one by one, the doors were deemed unusable. Dokja's thoughts were sharp and focused. The invisible force field that had once trapped them within the cabin had vanished after the completion of the first scenario. Among the 8 doors, there had to be at least one that could still function. Yet with each attempt to open a door, their hope began to falter. Each failure increased the tension, and the persistent slamming on the main door only served to amplify their growing dread. Suddenly, Sangha's voice cut through the tense atmosphere as she called out to Dokja. She had discovered a door that showed a small gap, a possible way out. Dokja immediately assessed the situation and decided to act. While Hyun-sung pointed out that the door appeared broken, Dokja insisted it was their best chance. For a moment, Dokja considered using his coins to enhance his strength and force the door open. However, he quickly dismissed the thought, knowing that recklessly spending coins at this early stage could have dangerous consequences later. Instead, he turned to Hyun-sung for help. Hyun-sung was startled by the request to use his skill. Dokja had already confirmed the man's supporting constellation and attributes matched those from the novel, and he was confident in Hyun-sung's potential. Dokja reminded him of the attribute window he must have opened earlier. Surely, as a soldier, there was a skill that could help in this situation. Hyun-sung hesitated, admitting he wasn't sure how to activate it. Dokja guided him, explaining that it only required imagining the action. Trusting Dokja's advice, Hyun-sung concentrated, and a sudden surge of energy coursed through him. A notification confirmed the activation of his personal skill, and Hyun-sung felt the power of his stigma, Great Mountain Push. The energy radiating from Hyun-sung was raw and overwhelming. With renewed determination, he moved to the door and applied his strength. The sheer force he generated was palpable, and the gap in the door began to widen. Dokja observed the scene, noting how effective the skill was. Despite Hyun-sung's simple and earnest nature, his newfound strength was exactly what they needed. However, Dokja's mind was already racing ahead. While the steel door to Subway Cabin 3707 was on the verge of breaking from the relentless assault on the other side, he remembered something critical from his knowledge of the novel. The door itself wasn't the real threat. Without hesitation, Dokja's urgent command to run propelled everyone into action. They exited the train in a rush. However, their escape was interrupted by a voice that reverberated around them, stopping them in their tracks. The Dokebi appeared once more, visibly irritated. It scolded the group, reminding them of the earlier warning to stay put. Its preparation for the next scenario was incomplete, and their disobedience seemed to frustrate it. Han seized the moment to voice his earlier caution, pointing out how he had suggested they remain inside. With a resigned sigh, the Dokebi acknowledged the situation. It declared that they were fortunate to receive an early challenge. Moments later, a system message materialized before everyone. It stated their new objective: cross the collapsed bridge and enter Oksu Station within a time limit of 20 minutes. Dokja wasn't surprised. The scenario aligned perfectly with what he had anticipated. Without wasting time, he began running toward the bridge, urging the others to follow him. Senga felt uneasy, pointing out that the bridge ahead still appeared intact despite the warning in the message. Dokja, though aware of the truth, brushed off her concern and urged her to keep running. His thoughts raced as he processed the situation. The bridge's current state was only temporary. Its collapse was inevitable. The group's early departure from the train had altered the timing slightly, but it would only be a matter of moments before the structure gave way. As they moved, Dokja reflected on how the scenario operated. Success often required bending the rules or exploiting loopholes. He was confident that despite the narrow time frame, they had a chance to make it if they acted quickly. Their progress was abruptly halted by a loud exclamation from Han. Something in the water beneath the bridge had begun to stir. A whirlpool formed, the currents churning violently. With a thunderous splash, a massive creature emerged from the depths. Towering above them was a monstrous sea serpent. Its scales shimmered with a dark, iridescent hue, and its presence exuded menace. Dokja immediately recognized it as an ichthyosaur, though its immense size suggested it might be a sea commander, a far more dangerous variant. The serpent let out an earth-shaking roar, its intent to block their path unmistakable. Dokja's mind worked quickly, assessing the situation. He shouted for everyone to run, urging them forward with desperation. In his thoughts, he calculated the odds. The ichthyosaur wasn't interested in chasing people this early in the scenario. Its appearance here was likely to destroy the bridge rather than attack them directly. With only about 200 yards left, he estimated that at their current speed, they could cross before the bridge collapsed. The group surged forward, their breaths ragged as adrenaline pushed them to their limits. Just as hope began to rise, the Dokebi reappeared, its mischievous grin filled with malice. It mocked the simplicity of their escape, declaring that the game had been too easy. With a snap of its fingers, everything changed. A new notification appeared before them. The difficulty of the scenario had been adjusted, escalating from E rank to D rank. The air around them grew heavy with an ominous energy as black ether seeped from the ground. The evil thoughts of the dead manifested, and the lifeless bodies scattered across the earlier battleground began to rise. The corpses, now transformed into zombies, moved in unison. Senga turned back, her expression one of disbelief as she took in the advancing horde. The groaning of the undead and the pounding of their footsteps added to the cacophony of terror. Ahead of the group, Lee Hyunsung, clutching the child tightly, reached Oksu Station first. He turned, his voice filled with urgency, as he called out to Dokja and the others. However, the remaining trio, Dokja, Senga, and Han, found themselves surrounded. The zombies closed in, their guttural roars signaling their insatiable hunger. As if the situation wasn't dire enough, a sudden chill swept through the air, heralding another threat. Dokja recognized the danger instantly and shouted for everyone to get down. The sea serpent lunged forward with ferocious speed, its massive jaws crushing the bridge in a single devastating strike. The impact sent debris flying in all directions. Dust and rubble filled the air as the bridge groaned under the weight of destruction. When the chaos settled, Dokja struggled to his feet, his body trembling from the shock. He surveyed the scene with wide eyes, his heart sinking. Half of the bridge was gone. The section connecting them to their destination had been obliterated, leaving a gaping void between them and Oksu Station. Senga, supporting Han, rushed to Dokja's side, her voice filled with concern as she asked if he was okay. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The bridge had collapsed, a possibility he had anticipated. However, he hadn't expected Senga and Myungo to survive the chaos. Hyunsung and Gil-young had made it to safety, but now they were stranded with no clear way forward. A notification appeared before Dokja, its message both a relief and a challenge. Someone had received the blessing of a constellation, activating the phenomenon known as Deus Ex Machina within the scenario. A bridge of light shimmered into existence ahead, but it came with a critical rule. It could only support an even number of people at a time. If an odd number attempted to cross, the bridge would collapse instantly. Senga's voice broke through Dokja's thoughts as she explained the strange occurrence in her mind. Her supporting constellation had clearly intervened, creating this bridge. Dokja's thoughts turned analytical. This type of intervention was exceedingly rare, even in the ways of survival. What kind of constellation could be supporting Senga? He tried to activate his character profile skill to find out more, but it was blocked. This left Dokja puzzled. Why couldn't he access her profile? Did Senga possess a special constellation, or perhaps the mental barrier skill? But it seemed implausible for her to already have such an advanced skill. His curiosity was interrupted by her sudden scream, warning him of danger. A fist came hurtling toward Dokja from behind. Reacting instinctively, he countered with a powerful blow, sending the attacker flying. The impact dragged the zombie several feet before it came to a halt. As Dokja turned to face the creature, his gaze narrowed. This wasn't an ordinary zombie. The black ether had mutated it into a tier 9 humanoid demon. These creatures were far more dangerous than regular zombies, especially if the host had once been a powerful individual, and this one was no random host. It was Namwoon Kim. Dokja activated his skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, hoping to gain insight into Kim's movements. However, as Kim swung his massive fist, the blow narrowly missed Dokja, proving his skill was ineffective against this opponent. The situation was dire, and Dokja's thoughts raced. They needed to cross the bridge, but the rule of even numbers meant one person had to stay behind. With Dokja, Senga, and Han still on this side, someone would have to sacrifice themselves. Dokja turned to shout instructions to Senga, but his words caught in his throat as he noticed Han acting swiftly. Han had hoisted Senga onto his shoulders and was already bolting bolting toward the bridge. Senga struggled against him, screaming Dokja's name and demanding to be let down, but Han didn't stop. His movements were incredibly fast, almost unnaturally so, as he sprinted away from the chaos, leaving Dokja behind. Dokja's mind reeled at the betrayal. Han had abandoned him to certain death. As he attempted to use his skill to analyze Han's character profile, the system denied his access, blocking his view. Dokja quickly deduced the truth. Han's exceptional speed was likely the result of a stigma, lone-legged, swift foot, granted by the constellation Lipping Trickster. However, this didn't explain why Dokja's skill failed on Senga and Han earlier. Then it struck him. They weren't characters from the 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. The system wasn't failing. It was simply working as intended. Before Dokja could think further, Kim roared, his monstrous form lunging at him. Dokja reacted instinctively, delivering a sharp elbow strike that momentarily stunned Kim. Yet the danger didn't subside. More humanoid demons infused with black ether closed in around him, their hunger palpable. Dokja fought to keep them at bay, his mind racing for a solution. The thought of using a demon as a partner to cross the bridge briefly crossed his mind, but he dismissed it. The rules of the scenario were too strict for such loopholes to work. With only 15 minutes left until the scenario ended, time was running out. Amid the chaos, the Dokebi overseeing the scenario appeared, grinning with amusement. The creature teased Dokja, sarcastically calling out for a constellation to bless him, but no response came, leaving Dokja to fend for himself. As the fight dragged on, Dokja's body began to give out. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him and his movements grew sluggish. At one point, he slipped near the edge of the shattered bridge, barely catching himself before falling into the dark, swirling waters below. Breathing heavily, Dokja realized he was reaching his limit. His body couldn't handle much more, and the prospect of death loomed closer with every passing second. Frustration filled him as he cursed his lack of combat skills. If he had even one surviving this ordeal wouldn't feel so impossible. A notification flickered before Dokja's eyes, signaling the activation of a skill called Bookmark. He read the description carefully. It was a skill that could copy the combat abilities of characters from his designated bookmark list. Dokja's heart raced. This was completely new. Even after reading all 3,000 episodes of the 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, he had never encountered such a skill. Before he could fully process its potential, Kim, along with the other zombies, roared and charged at him. Instinctively, Dokja understood how the skill worked. Summoning his courage, he activated bookmark number 1. In an instant, a surge of raw energy coursed through his body. The power of the skill, Grimdark Awakening level 1, flooded him, sharpening his senses and bolstering his strength. Dokja gripped the knife tightly as Kim lunged at him, jaws wide open. Moving like a blur, Dokja slashed through Kim with a single precise motion. Blood sprayed from the wound as Kim crumpled to his knees, groaning in anguish. Despite his monstrous form, Kim whimpered, his voice weak and desperate as he succumbed to the attack. But Dokja couldn't stop there. One by one, he brought down the other zombies, his movements swift and calculated. By the end, his breath came in gasps, exhaustion overtaking him. As he steadied himself, a thought crossed his mind. Someone was supposed to appear soon, someone crucial. Before he could ponder further, a deafening explosion shook the ground beneath him. The air thickened with tension as the remaining zombies froze in place. Gripping his knife, Dokja prepared for the unknown. Emerging from the shadows, a figure strode forward with deliberate, steady steps, parting the horde of undead as if they were insignificant. Dokja's heart sank as he recognized the figure. The aura alone was enough to unsettle him. This was a man unlike any other, someone whose presence radiated authority and danger. The system window appeared, displaying the character profile. The information was overwhelming, almost too much to process at once. The name was Yu Jungyok, with the title The Regressor. His most notable skill, Eyes of the Sage level 8, highlighted his unmatched perception and battle prowess. Jungyok wasted no time. With a swift motion, he grabbed Dokja by the throat and lifted him effortlessly off the ground. Dokja struggled against the iron grip, gasping for air, but Jungyok's strength was unrelenting. As the world blurred around him, Dokja's thoughts turned inward. He knew who this man was. Jungyok, the Regressor. This was the man who had lived countless lives, the one destined to navigate the apocalypse again and again. In that moment, Dokja understood that this encounter was no coincidence. Jungyok was the catalyst, the figure who would ignite the chain of events to reshape the world into chaos and tragedy. From a distance, Lee Hyunsong tried to assess the situation, but his efforts were in vain. The view was completely obstructed, as if a barrier, similar to the one encountered in the subway, was in place. Frustration mounted as he strained to see through the impenetrable scene unfolding beyond. Meanwhile, Dokja clung precariously to the edge of the bridge. Yu Jungyok maintained his relentless grip around Dokja's throat. Dokja's fingers ached as they pressed against the edge, his strength waning under the crushing pressure. Jungyok demanded his name, his voice firm and commanding. Begrudgingly, Dokja answered, though his thoughts betrayed his contempt for the man's attitude. Jungyok responded with a mocking observation about Dokja's name, before abruptly driving his fist into Dokja's gut. The impact left Dokja gasping for air, his body trembling from the force. Pain shot through him, but Jung-hyuk showed no sign of relenting. He coldly assessed Dokja, noting his physical resilience and the way he had already utilized the coins from their earlier trials. Dokja barely had time to process the statement before another punch landed, sending fresh waves of agony through his body. As he fought to remain conscious, Dokja's mind raced. He recognized the stark difference in power between himself and Jung-hyuk. It was incomprehensible how Jung-hyuk had grown so strong when they had only cleared one main mission and were still in the process of tackling a submission. The disparity was monstrous, almost inhuman. Jung-hyuk issued his next demand, his tone brooking no argument. Dokja realized there was no point in wasting energy on defiance. Jung-hyuk wasn't interested in a conversation. He was interested in control. Internally, Dokja cursed the unfolding events. This encounter was his worst fear come to life. In the early chapters of the 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, Yu Jung-hyuk was depicted as the most dangerous individual in existence. Having regressed 3 times already, Jung-hyuk had shed much of his humanity, his moral compass eroded by the weight of repeated failures and survival. The Jung-hyuk standing before Dokja now was a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. Yu Jung-hyuk stood with an imposing presence. He demanded an answer. Dokja, struggling to maintain composure, finally gave in, deciding it was better to concede than provoke further wrath. Jung-hyuk, dissatisfied with Dokja's casual demeanor, insisted on respect, but Dokja, unyielding in his defiance, questioned why he should offer such courtesy. This only fueled Jung-hyuk's irritation, and without hesitation, he delivered another devastating punch. The impact sent Dokja reeling, pain coursing through his body as he struggled to stay upright. Despite the physical toll, Dokja couldn't help but retort. He pointed out that, as someone older, Jung-hyuk should be the one showing respect. Jung-hyuk, clearly unimpressed, demanded to know if Dokja understood who he was. To this, Dokja gave a calculated response, claiming to work for a gaming company and admitted of being a fan as he is very famous. Of course, this was a lie. To Dokja, Yu Jung-hyuk was nothing more than a fictional character, a creation of the novel. Yet now, he stood as a tangible and fearsome reality. Dokja's mind raced as he chose his words carefully. He admitted to being a fan, a statement that carried layers of truth and deception. While Jung-hyuk's fame in the novel was merely a plot device, Dokja wasn't lying when he claimed to have followed his journey. He had indeed been with Jung-hyuk through the character's arduous 3,000 episode story, experiencing a myriad of emotions: admiration, frustration, resentment, and even hope. Jung-hyuk's reaction softened momentarily, a flicker of nostalgia passing over his face. He acknowledged Dokja's claim but made it clear that it wouldn't change his stance. Whatever leniency he might feel, it would not alter the situation. Dokja, reading the tension, steeled himself for the inevitable question. He knew what was coming and braced for it. Jung-hyuk asked how Dokja had managed to survive the subway incident. Dokja's mind spun, considering his options. The question was a test, one that required a delicate balance of truth and strategy. He posed his own question in response, asking if revealing the answer would grant him his life. Jung-hyuk's response was measured, stating that it depended entirely on the answer Dokja provided. But Dokja wasn't easily fooled. He could read Jung-hyuk's intent like an open book, thanks to his deep understanding of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. In his mind, Dokja labeled Jung-hyuk a liar. His experience as a devoted reader of the novel gave him insight into Jung-hyuk's every move. But now, in this life or death scenario, he had to craft a response that might save his life. Suddenly, a notification appeared in Dokja's vision. His understanding of Jung-hyuk had increased, unlocking the 2nd level of his personal skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. The system prompted him to activate the skill, and Dokja's hesitation was brief. In that moment, Jung-hyuk's inner thoughts were revealed. He considered the irregularities of the current scenario. Only Lee Hyun-sung and Namun Kim were supposed to survive this part of the story, but Namun was dead, and others had survived instead. Suspicious and wary, Jung-hyuk resolved to gather more information. If he determined Dokja to be a threat, he would kill him without hesitation. Dokja, now aware of Jung-hyuk's train of thought, smirked to himself. The timer for the scenario had only 5 minutes left. This slight advantage emboldened him as he finally answered Jung-hyuk's question. He claimed that he had survived due to luck, explaining how the boy with the insects had fallen into view after an explosion rocked the subway car ahead. Jung-hyuk's mind raced at the revelation. The future he knew was shifting. The explosion, the insects, these elements didn't align with his previous regressions. He glanced at the pile of bodies around them, piecing together the discrepancies. Was it his own actions that had caused this deviation? Perhaps the explosion he had triggered this time had altered the outcome. Still, something about Dokja unnerved him. Jung-hyuk scrutinized Dokja's calm demeanor. For someone new to a world turned upside down, Dokja was far too composed. This lack of panic, paired with his earlier actions, suggested he was not an ordinary survivor. Jung-hyuk deduced that Dokja might have been the one who killed Namun Kim, an act that required more than mere luck. His usefulness was undeniable, but so was his potential danger. Dokja, sensing Jung-hyuk's internal conflict, decided to shift the focus. He suggested they move on to Oksu Station together, noting the time ticking away. However, Jung-hyuk's sharp gaze intensified as he activated one of his most formidable abilities. Without warning, the atmosphere grew heavy as Jung-hyuk unleashed his SS-grade skill, Eye of the Sage. This skill wasn't just any detection ability, it was the pinnacle of analysis, capable of revealing not only surface-level attributes, but also hidden information about its target. For a moment, moment, Dokja froze, his thoughts racing. He recognized the significance of the skill immediately. Dokja had always wondered why Junghyuk hadn't used it earlier, yet amidst his unease, a sliver of opportunity presented itself. If Junghyuk's skill revealed Dokja's own abilities, it would mean that Dokja could learn about them too. Before Dokja could dwell further on the implications, a series of notifications chimed in his vision. The system alerted him that his personal skill, Fourth Wall, had activated. This unique ability had detected the Eye of the Sage and acted immediately to counter it. Junghyuk staggered, visibly shaken. His sharp eyes crackled with energy as his skill faltered. The disruption left him bewildered, and he struggled to comprehend what had happened. The system confirmed it. The Fourth Wall had successfully blocked the Eye of the Sage. For a moment, Junghyuk faltered, his balance unsteady. His confusion shifted into a rare glimpse of frustration as he glared at Dokja, demanding to know what kind of person he was. Dokja, still processing the turn of events, realized the magnitude of his skill. The Fourth Wall wasn't just a defensive tool, it was a game changer. Combined with the earlier discovery of Bookmark, his abilities were proving to be far more potent than he had anticipated. But this newfound strength also painted a target on Dokja's back. Junghyuk's thoughts darkened as he came to a chilling conclusion. If Dokja posed such a significant enigma, he could not be left alive. Junghyuk's intent to eliminate him became clear. Dokja's mind raced, knowing he was out of time to explain himself in any logical way. His earlier plans were useless now. Junghyuk wouldn't trust him, and the situation was spiraling out of control. In desperation, Dokja shifted tactics, appealing to Junghyuk's pragmatism instead. He presented himself as a necessary ally, someone Junghyuk could not afford to discard. Dokja emphasized the impossibility of clearing future scenarios alone, referencing the infamous Scenario 46 as proof. Junghyuk, still wary, questioned Dokja's knowledge. The possibility of Dokja being another regressor crossed his mind, deepening his mistrust, but Dokja deftly avoided the trap, dismissing the focus on his identity. What mattered was his usefulness in the trials ahead. Junghyuk realized if Dokja were a regressor, he would have known him from one of his countless loops. Instead, a more unsettling thought emerged. Could Dokja be something else entirely? Dokja's confidence didn't waver. He declared that he knew a future Junghyuk couldn't possibly foresee. Almost instantly, a system notification appeared before Dokja's eyes, revealing that Junghyuk had activated his lie detection skill. The skill confirmed that Dokja was telling the truth. Junghyuk's thoughts raced. The possibility of another prophet existing, particularly one outside the well-known Anna Croft, was unthinkable. The prophet attribute was unique, rare, and incredibly powerful. In 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, it was the only attribute that allowed someone to passively neutralize detection skills and foresee future events. According to Junghyuk's knowledge, there had been just one individual with this attribute in the story he knew. Junghyuk finally questioned Dokja's abilities, probing whether he possessed future sight. Dokja gave a vague acknowledgement, avoiding revealing too much, but confirming enough to pique Junghyuk's interest. Dokja further stated that he had anticipated Junghyuk's presence there. Dokja acknowledged that Junghyuk had a unique understanding of the future, but it was inherently flawed. A regressor's knowledge came from repeating past timelines, but any deviation in the present would inevitably lead to unknown outcomes. Dokja explained how this incomplete knowledge would eventually leave Junghyuk vulnerable to unforeseen events. Offering himself as an ally, Dokja made his case. Internally, Dokja reflected on the situation. For Junghyuk, the idea of having a prophet as a companion would be immensely appealing. Dokja could fill that role, not because he had supernatural foresight, but because he was the sole reader of TWSA. He had seen every twist, turn, and resolution across the thousands of chapters of the story. Junghyuk considered Dokja's proposition carefully. The allure of having a prophet by his side wasn't just useful for the current scenario. It could prove invaluable for the many battles ahead, including the confrontation with Zarathustra, but trust was a different matter entirely. Junghyuk couldn't dismiss the risk of betrayal, even as time ticked away relentlessly. The scenario's clock was running out, leaving only 40 seconds to make a decision. He declared Dokja Kim as his companion, but his actions were far from gentle. Grabbing Dokja by the throat, Junghyuk began dragging him forward without hesitation. Dokja, gasping and struggling to keep up, barely managed to keep his footing. As they advanced, the fragmented bridge ahead revealed itself. The gap had been formed by the Deus Ex Machina system, aptly named the Bridge of Even Numbers. Behind them, a swarm of zombies closed in, their groans growing louder with each passing moment. From a safe distance, Yu Senga and Lee Hyunsong watched the scene unfold. Yu Senga's concern for Dokja was evident as she questioned his fate, but Lee Hyunsong remained cautious, knowing they could only wait and see how the situation developed. Dokja, while being dragged forward, found a moment of clarity amidst the chaos. Relief washed over him as he realized he had managed to convince the regressor to accept him as an ally. The system chimed in, notifying Dokja that his personal skill, Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint, had been deactivated due to his exhaustion and overuse of concentration. The deactivation of his skill left Dokja uneasy, but he reassured himself that he had done everything within his power. He had managed to secure Junghyuk's trust, or so he believed, and now they could cross the bridge together. Just as Dokja's thoughts began to settle, Junghyuk abruptly stopped. Without warning, he turned and tightened his grip on Dokja's throat, dragging him closer to the edge of the precarious bridge. Junghyuk's piercing gaze bore into Dokja, his suspicions still lingering. He demanded proof of Dokja's abilities as a prophet, challenging him to predict his own immediate future. With his grip tightening, Junghyuk pushed Dokja to the very edge of the bridge, dangling him over the churning waters below. Before Dokja could respond, the waters erupted with violent energy, quickly. The sea serpent surged upward once more. Its monstrous form loomed over them, its jaws open wide, ready to devour Dokja whole. Panic coursed through Dokja as he realized the peril he was in. Junghyak's question echoed in his mind. Whether he would be let go or saved depended entirely on Junghyak's next move. Dokja's thoughts raced, fueled by anger and frustration. He knew this man better than anyone else could. If Junghyak was the same relentless and unpredictable character from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, then his actions were never driven by simple logic. Summoning his courage, Dokja met Junghyak's gaze with defiance. He demanded mutual respect, assuring him that he would cooperate only if Junghyak did the same. Dokja knew that despite his distrust, Junghyak's valued strength in those he considered allies. Junghyak's expression flickered with intrigue, his grip loosening slightly. Then with unsettling calm, he asked Dokja for his final answer. In that moment, Dokja smirked, his defiance unwavering. He gave his response with sharp wit, knowing it would provoke the regressor. Junghyuk, after a long moment of consideration, finally released his hold. Dokja plummeted toward the waiting jaws of the massive sea serpent below. The wind rushed past as the world tilted, and the sea serpent's massive form surged upward. Its jaws opened wide to claim its prey. Junghyuk, with a glint of mockery in his eyes, spoke words laced with irony. He claimed to believe Dokja, calling him a prophet, but the sneer in his voice betrayed his true thoughts. The serpent's jaws snapped shut around Dokja with a sickening crunch, swallowing him whole in an instant. The impact was overwhelming, and everything went dark. The system's cold notification flickered in Dokja's fading consciousness. You have failed to clear the scenario. Deep underwater, Dokja Kim lay still, desperately holding his breath. The crushing weight of the water and his body's burning need for air tested his endurance. He couldn't afford to give in. Survival demanded every ounce of his willpower. With immense effort, Dokja pushed himself upward through the dense, suffocating water. Finally, his head broke the surface and he gasped for air, his lungs burning as he coughed and retched. As Dokja steadied himself, he realized he had made it into the monster's stomach intact. Despite the sea serpent's immense power, he had neither been torn apart nor digested yet. Switching on the flashlight of his phone, he surveyed his surroundings. The sight was grim. Floating corpses surrounded him, and even a car bobbed eerily among the wreckage. It was a grotesque scene, but for Dokja, it was just another trial in a world gone mad. Swimming to a nearby slab, he climbed onto it, his body trembling from exertion. His thoughts turned to Yu Junghyuk, the man who had thrown him into this situation. Dokja's frustration bubbled over. Was this some twisted test to prove his worth as a companion? Despite his anger, Dokja understood Junghyuk's reasoning. As a regressor who had failed in his first timeline, Junghyuk had learned to rely on no one but himself. His overwhelming power and the reverence others showed him had isolated him, turning him into a lone wolf. For Junghyuk, people were either tools or threats. This trial was likely his way of testing whether Dokja deserved to be treated as an equal. As Dokja caught his breath, he opened the system message log. The notification was harsh that you have failed to clear the scenario. Proceeding with checkout as 100 coins have been deducted for the channel usage fee. Yet there was more. The constellations watching his plight had reacted. The prisoner of the golden headband appreciated Dokja's boldness and gifted him 100 coins. Meanwhile, the secretive plotter expressed disappointment at his flippancy. Before Dokja could process the implications of these reactions, the water around him began to stir. The stillness was gone. The serpent was on the move. Dokja's mind raced. According to 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, the stomachs of creatures like this began secreting digestive acid approximately 3 minutes after swallowing their prey. Time ticked relentlessly, each passing moment tightening the noose around Dokja Kim's survival. Then, out of the blue, the Dokebi materialized with a mischievous grin. The creature, brimming with amusement, remarked how disappointing it was for the scenario to end prematurely, just as things were getting interesting. Dokja had been expecting this moment. His calm demeanor caught the Dokebi off guard. Inside his mind, Dokja's resolve hardened. He swore silently that not only would he escape the clutches of this sea serpent alive, but he would gain the strength to stand as an equal to Junghyuk. He was determined to force recognition and acceptance from the regressor who had so arrogantly discarded him. The Dokebi, intrigued by Dokja's confidence, inquired further. Dokja pointed out the obvious. There were coins to collect from him as penalty for failing the scenario. This statement, laced with certainty, seemed to confuse the Dokebi momentarily before amusement flickered across its face again. Dokja's deductions came swiftly. If death were the penalty for failing, the system would have explicitly stated so. Instead, the unclear notification left room for negotiation. The Dokebi, now thoroughly entertained, admitted the validity of Dokja's interpretation. It revealed that failed sub-scenarios could indeed be bypassed for a price. That price, however, was steep, 5,100 coins. The exorbitant demand hung in the air like a blade, but Dokja wasn't fazed. Inside, he boiled with frustration, knowing the Dokebi was pushing its advantage. Even so, he refused to show weakness. When the Dokebi dismissed his hesitation as a refusal to pay, threatening him with death as an alternative, Dokja called its bluff. With unwavering resolve, he challenged the creature to carry out its threat. The Dokebi hesitated, clearly unsettled by Dokja's boldness. Dokja's thoughts raced as he sized up the situation. The Dokebi wouldn't dare harm him, not when he was such a valuable source of entertainment. The constellations were captivated by the unfolding drama, and Dokja knew he was pulling in a significant audience for the Dokebi's channel. If death was truly the outcome, the Dokebi wouldn't have bothered to appear in person. This was a game of leverage, and Dokja held more than the creature realized. surprised. Amusement turned to frustration on Dokebi's face, and it demanded to know Dokja's intentions. Yet, Dokja remained calm, his strategy carefully unfolding. He addressed the creature by its name, Bihyong, deliberately shocking it into silence. The Dokebi froze, its arrogance shaken by Dokja's unexpected knowledge. Dokja pressed on, pointing out that Bihyong's career as a streamer wasn't thriving. The constellations he noted hadn't been particularly generous lately. Each remark struck deeper into Bihyong's insecurities, its composure slipping with every word. A notification from the system confirmed the growing intrigue of the watching constellations. Suspicion swirled, but their attention only made Dokja's position stronger. Among them, the secretive plotter's curiosity shimmered, its approval of Dokja's calculated moves evident. Leaning in, Dokja suggested a private conversation. Bihyong, clearly rattled but compelled by the situation, reluctantly turned off the livestream. Now alone, Bihyong demanded answers, its voice edged with desperation. How could a mere human possess such detailed knowledge about the Starstream, the system that connected constellations across galaxies to humans like him? Dokja's understanding of the Starstream was clear. He knew it served as a galactic broadcast system, where humans acted as performers, and Dokebis, like Bihyong, served as storytellers, streamers bridging the gap between mortals and the divine constellations. But Dokja brushed aside the question, steering the conversation towards something far more critical. With unwavering confidence, Dokja made his proposal. He offered Bihyong an opportunity unlike any other, the chance to rise above all Dokebis and become Dokebi King. He spoke of surpassing legendary figures like Dokak and Gildal, igniting ambition within the stunned creature. Extending his hand, Dokja sealed his pitch. He proposed a partnership, a contract that would reshape both their fates. However, Bihyong erupted into laughter, finding Dokja's audacity absurd. The creature mocked his seemingly insane plan, pointing out how Dokja had rejected offers from constellations earlier, an unusual move for any participant in the scenarios. Dokja acknowledged Bihyong's observation. Indeed, during the sponsor selection phase before the sub-scenario began, he had made the unconventional choice of not aligning with any constellation. This, he realized, only added to the intrigue surrounding him. Bihyong, however, dismissed the proposal outright, explaining that as a Dokebi and not a constellation, it lacked the ability to sponsor him. Dokja remained unfazed. Calmly, he clarified that he had no intention of seeking sponsorship. His goal wasn't to gain power from Bihyong, but something much more strategic, its channel. The Dokebi, caught off guard, questioned Dokja's intentions. Dokja explained further, laying out his ambitious plan. He didn't seek the usual power exchange offered by constellations. Instead, he proposed an exclusive contract with Bihyong's Starstream channel, an arrangement unheard of for a mere human. Dokja knew the implications of a stream contract well. Typically, such agreements were forged between constellations and Dokebi. In this setup, the Dokebi would host the incarnation of a constellation on its channel in exchange for a share of the coins earned by the incarnation. Incarnations, despite their roles, had little say in these contracts, essentially becoming tools for the constellation's entertainment and profit. Bihyong couldn't contain its laughter, mocking Dokja's suggestion as ludicrous. The very idea of a human daring to mention a stream contract without even securing a supporting constellation was unheard of. It was the ultimate display of arrogance, or so it seemed. Dokja, however, pressed on. His argument was precise and logical. He highlighted the true nature of Starstream's audience. The viewers could be divided into two groups: thrill seekers who craved entertaining content, and incarnation seekers who scouted for worthy individuals to sponsor. For a channel to thrive, it needed to appeal to one of these groups. Either it had to provide unmatched entertainment or host an incarnation compelling enough to attract attention. The Dokebi, while mildly impressed by Dokja's knowledge and cunning for a human, it still dismissed his boldness as irrelevant. But Dokja, unbothered by the Dokebi's condescension, retaliated sharply, pointing out Bihyong's lackluster subscriber count and the mediocrity of its channel's appeal. His words were blunt, crafted to provoke. Then, without hesitation, Dokja elaborated on his plan. He proposed an idea that would reshape the Starstream's dynamics, a channel capable of captivating thrill seekers and simultaneously showcasing extraordinary incarnations. Such a concept, Bihyong thought, was impossible. No incarnation could meet both demands, especially without the backing of a supporting constellation. But Dokja countered with precision. He explained that constellations seeking incarnations often abandoned channels once they had made their selection. However, he posed an intriguing question. What if there existed an incarnation who deliberately refused to choose a supporting constellation, yet still outperformed all others? This revelation left Bihyong speechless. It began piecing together Dokja's actions. His earlier refusal to align with a constellation wasn't an act of foolishness, but a calculated move. Dokja confirmed this, adding that the constellations were likely in an uproar, desperate to see the individual brave enough to defy the system and challenge the regressors' dominance. For a fleeting moment, Bihyong's thoughts raced. Dokja's insights were unsettling. It wondered if Dokja could foresee the future, or if he was genuinely a prophet. How had this human survived the horrors of the ichthyosaur without divine backing? The possibilities were unsettling. Despite the doubt clouding its mind, Bihyong lashed out defensively, rejecting the notion that a mere human could stand against incarnations supported by constellations. It declared the impossibility of Dokja's claims, insisting that the established hierarchy couldn't be overturned. But Dokja's voice carried unwavering conviction. He intended to prove otherwise. From that moment forward, he vowed to shatter the system's expectations, to demonstrate that true power lay beyond the constellation's grip. He urged Bihyong to follow his lead, promising to elevate it to the status of Dokebi King. Bihyong, caught between intrigue and disbelief, hesitated briefly, realizing Realizing it still held some leverage, it redirected the conversation, bringing up Dokja's failed scenario. The cost to avoid consequences was 5,100 coins, a steep price. Dokja, standing with newfound confidence, dismissed the notion that he had failed. The certainty in his voice was resolute, catching Baehyung off guard. Rising from the water with a splash, Dokja declared that the conditions for his success must have been met by now. He urged Baehyung to open the channel, hinting that something significant was about to unfold. A notification sound echoed, confirming Dokja's intuition. A hidden scenario had arrived, its presence surprising even the seasoned Baehyung. The details of the scenario appeared on Baehyung's screen, listing the task. Commander Slayer. The objective was clear yet daunting, to slay the Sea Commander Ishthiosaur and escape within 10 days. The reward was substantial, offering 9,000 coins, but the penalty was as unforgiving as always: death. Baehyung's face twisted in shock as it read the scenario. Hastily, it scrambled to address the constellations watching the stream, who were undoubtedly demanding explanations for the abrupt shutdown of the channel. With its screen flickering with complaints, Baehyung pleaded with the constellations for patience, blaming the disruption on a server error and emphasizing its innocence. It assured them that no preferential treatment had occurred, knowing well the punishment for breaking such sacred rules. Meanwhile, Dokja, unaffected by the chaos around him, accessed his inventory with practiced ease. His focus shifted to the limited items available for purchase, prompting him to search for what he needed. Yet, the Baehyung continued its frantic monologue to the unseen constellations, attempting to restore order while also maintaining its composure. Dokja observed this with mild amusement, recognizing the Baehyung's desperation as it balanced appeasing its viewers and managing the unfolding scenario. Dokja silently commended himself for manipulating Baehyung into opening the Starstream's cash shop. This exclusive feature, only accessible when a channel was active, was now within his grasp. As Baehyung flailed to handle the chaos, Dokja seized the moment to prepare. With a calm yet pointed request, Dokja asked for assistance navigating the shop. Baehyung, still overwhelmed, managed to point him toward the search function. Dokja's mind noted the greed inherent in the Baehyung system. Despite their otherworldly powers, they shared striking similarities with humans, driven by profit and self-preservation. With calm precision, Dokja searched the shop, starting with a query for an item associated with great power, the ancient dragon. His words startled Baehyung, who seemed baffled by how a human could know of such a rare item. Dokja, maintaining a casual tone, brushed it off as a coincidence, likening it to the naming conventions found in games. Yet within his thoughts, Dokja reflected on the reality. According to 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, the heart of the ancient dragon belonged to an incarnation in Italy, a fortunate individual backed by an incredibly wealthy sponsor. Moments like these made Dokja briefly regret his decision not to choose a constellation, though he knew his reasons were sound. Continuing his search, Dokja focused on other obscure items, such as the Archdemon's Eyeball and the White Star weapon aura. Baehyung grew increasingly agitated, struggling to comprehend how a mere human could know about these rare treasures. But as the search concluded, Baehyung's confusion turned to disbelief when Dokja selected seemingly mundane items: 4 bags of mucus and 4 thorns. Baehyung's frustration was evident, questioning the purpose of these trivial purchases. Dokja, keeping his motives hidden, merely hinted that the answer would soon become apparent. Baehyung, irritated yet resigned, reminded Dokja that the shop allowed no refunds, to which Dokja replied with unwavering confidence. Notifications flashed in the air, signaling the reactions of constellations watching the unfolding events. One, titled The Secretive Plotter, expressed curiosity about Dokja's actions, while another, The Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, showed clear disapproval. The stream for channel BI 7623 abruptly closed, marking another step in Dokja's calculated plan. Baehyung, however, reminded Dokja of an important detail. While their discussion had progressed, no contract had been finalized. The Baehyung emphasized that terms would only be negotiated after Dokja successfully cleared the current scenario. Dokja agreed, unfazed, his confidence intact. Baehyung, though skeptical, acknowledged the agreement and prepared to leave, stating that it wouldn't be monitoring Dokja constantly. With a parting remark wishing Dokja luck, Baehyung snapped its fingers, reopening the channel to the watching constellations. In a flash of light, Baehyung vanished, leaving Dokja alone with the ominous challenge ahead. Inside the suffocating darkness of the sea serpent's stomach, Dokja prepared himself for the critical moment. He knew time was running out. The acidic fumes had already started to fill the chamber, signaling the imminent danger. Holding tightly to the thorns he had purchased from the shop, he steeled his resolve. This was his only chance to survive. As the serpent swam calmly amidst the chaos of the burning city above, a sudden disturbance caused it to thrash violently. Something within its body was troubling it. A whirlpool of water mixed with its own acidic fluid surged inside, creating unbearable discomfort. The serpent let out a deafening roar of agony. Inside the monstrous creature, Dokja clung to the walls of its stomach. The thorns he wielded pierced deeply into the soft, pulsating flesh, anchoring him in place. He gritted his teeth as the serpent's bodily fluids splashed around him, each moment a fight against the searing acid. His body trembled, but his grip on survival remained unyielding. Breathing heavily, Dokja reflected on his situation. The time he spent here here felt like an eternity. Exhaustion clawed at his mind, and doubt crept in. He thought of his insignificance. Just a reader, someone who had always stayed on the sidelines of life, observing instead of acting. Memories of his mother crossed his mind, her strength and resilience giving him a sliver of hope. He longed for this ordeal to be a nightmare, but the pain and danger were all too real. Amidst his struggle, the Baehyang reappeared, its presence cutting through the oppressive environment. It seemed impressed by Dokja's resourcefulness. Notifications flashed in his vision, confirming what he had accomplished. Several constellations acknowledged his survival skills, their interest piqued by his performance. By the fourth day of the hidden scenario, Dokja's strength was nearly depleted. His body trembled, and his grip on the thorns faltered. With a final exhausted effort, he lost his hold and fell, hitting the fleshy ground with a heavy thud. As he lay there, another notification chimed in his mind. The hidden scenario had concluded. Dokja had successfully hunted a tier 7 sea monster, becoming the first to achieve such a feat. He earned 9,000 coins as a reward, and an additional 1,000 coins for his achievement. Baehyang analyzed Dokja's methods with astonishment, remarking on the unusual way he had utilized the Stonehog's thorn. Typically, these creatures inhabited coastlines and preyed on small sea creatures, using their specialized thorns to pierce and dry their targets. But for Dokja to repurpose such a thorn for survival was beyond expectation. As the system chimed with notifications, several constellations began to understand Dokja's earlier actions, their complaints mingling with curiosity. They demanded clarity, wanting him to narrate his intentions in advance so they could follow along more closely. Baehyang, still marveling at the ingenuity of Dokja's survival techniques, mentioned the hammer seahorse's mucus, a substance even the Baehyang hadn't known could shield against the ichthyosaur's stomach acid. Dokja's mind replayed the desperate steps he had taken. Before activating the Stonehog's thorn, he had smeared himself with the remnants of the hammer seahorse's mucus. Knowing its natural defense against predators like the ichthyosaur, he had counted on its protective properties to shield him from the acidic environment. To stave off hunger, he had consumed the diluted bodily fluid of the ichthyosaur funneled through the thorn. It had been a grueling trial, demanding relentless willpower and a high tolerance for pain. His explanation to the Baehyang felt almost dismissive, as if helping it narrate to the constellations was more out of necessity than obligation. Though irritated, the Baehyang begrudgingly acknowledged the brilliance of the survival display and turned to the constellations, portraying the events as an awe-inspiring drama of endurance. Dokja's patience, however, was wearing thin. He demanded access to Dakabi's shop, his tone firm and unwavering. While the Baehyang hesitated, Dokja acted decisively, gripping the Stonehog's thorn and striking it into the intestinal walls of the sea serpent. The force of the blow cracked open the walls, revealing a glowing core, the ichthyosaur's nucleus. Grabbing the nucleus with resolve, Dokja's plan was already clear. He intended to trade this rare and valuable item on the Baehyang auction house. His demand was specific: broken faith, an item of legendary significance. His resolve was met with astonishment from the Baehyang, who couldn't fathom how Dokja or anyone could possess such intricate knowledge. Baehyang expressed doubt, wondering aloud if anyone even owned the item Dokja requested. Dokja, however, remained unfazed and quickly pivoted to his next purchase. But before he could continue, the Baehyang interrupted. With dramatic flair, it paused the channel and prepared for advertisements, leaving Dokja momentarily waiting. When the broadcast resumed, Baehyang presented Dokja with a formal contract. It admitted to initial hesitation, but explained that watching Dokja successfully clear the hidden scenario had solidified its decision to work with him. The gesture surprised Dokja, as the contract was more detailed and favorable than he had expected. Still, he scrutinized the document and immediately noticed a glaring omission. The most critical aspect, the profit ratio, was absent. While Baehyang dismissed the need for formality, suggesting a verbal agreement was sufficient due to the soul-bound nature of stream contracts, Dokja firmly pointed out the importance of clearly defining the terms. Baehyang, flustered and eager to finalize the deal, proposed an even split, 50-50, on the coins, generously waiving channel usage fees. However, Dokja was not one to be easily swayed by surface-level agreements. He immediately rejected the offer, his tone sharp and unyielding. Baehyang, caught off guard, stammered, trying to justify that this was the standard rate within the industry. But Dokja was already several steps ahead. He thought carefully about how the system worked, how a constellation's incarnation typically earned coins through gifts from other constellations, splitting the rewards with Baehyang managing the channel. This arrangement wasn't applicable to him, though. Dokja didn't have a supporting constellation, and coins gifted directly to him incurred a significant commission for Baehyang. It was clear Baehyang had already profited significantly thanks to his survival and ingenuity. Without hesitation, Dokja demanded to keep all the coins for himself. Baehyang's face contorted with frustration at such an audacious request. It argued fiercely, calling the demand absurd and unreasonable. Yet Dokja remained calm, countering with the suggestion that Baehyang would still earn its share through commissions. His demeanor left no room for negotiation. When Baehyang attempted to salvage the situation, offering 70% to Dokja, he held firm. The threat to move his talents to another channel, mentioning Gildal's rising success, forced Baehyang into a corner. Begrudgingly, it raised the offer to 80%, its voice tinged with desperation. But Dokja remained unyielding. It was all or nothing. Time was running out as the advertisements were nearing their end, and the impatient murmurs of constellations grew louder. Realizing it had no choice, Baehyang clenched its teeth, furious but resigned, finally conceding to Dokja's terms. It asked him if he would sign the contract now that all his demands were met. Dokja, unbothered, added one final condition. He insisted on a contract fee, 5,000 coins up front. Baehyang's frustration peaked. leaked, but with little room to argue, it had to comply. The massive body of the sea serpent lay lifeless. Its form sprawled across the shore as waves crashed against its remains. Dokja emerged from the water, his body weary but his determination intact. Swimming through the tides, he finally reached the sandy beach, inhaling deeply. It was the first time he had tasted fresh air in 4 days. He had initially thought his escape would take 2 days, but 4 days wasn't bad considering the circumstances. Dokja reflected on his progress. Yu Jung-hyuk, the protagonist of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, had taken 4 days to complete the same ordeal during his 4th round. For Dokja, matching that feat on his first attempt felt like an accomplishment. In addition to surviving, he had successfully signed a stream contract with Baekhyun and earned a respectable number of coins. These achievements marked a solid start to his journey. The thought amused him. Once just an ordinary reader, he now found himself wielding extraordinary knowledge and skills simply because he had read 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. A soft chime echoed in his mind as the system's notification appeared. Dokja's personal skill, the 4th wall, remained active, offering him a peculiar sense of comfort. However, the situation wasn't without complications. When he tried to access his attributes window, nothing happened. Baekhyun, noticing the anomaly, seemed perplexed by the system error and attempted to investigate. Yet even its efforts couldn't override the block. Dokja moved on, unfazed. Baekhyun's inability to interfere further reassured him of the unique advantage his skill provided. The realization brought a wry smile to his face. His invisible attributes window could make him an excellent con artist, as no one could discern his true potential. Soon, Dokja arrived at the area designated for the second main scenario. A system alert immediately warned him of the highly contaminated atmosphere. The air was thick with a poisonous fog, forcing him to hold his breath and search for underground shelter. Each step grew heavier as the toxic air seeped into his system, his body resisting but struggling against the creeping weakness. The system notified him of the exposure, accompanied by a sinister message. The constellation, Abyssal Black Flame Dragon, watched with an insidious smile, finding amusement in Dokja's plight. Despite the suffocating fog and mounting challenges, Dokja gritted his teeth, pushing forward. The weight of the scenario bore down on him, but it only fueled his resolve. This was no longer a story confined to the pages of a novel. This was his reality. And as he braced himself for the trials ahead, one thought rang clear in his mind. The real area around Dongho Bridge was eerily desolate, a stark reminder that survival in this new world was not exclusive to humans. Monsters too were engaged in a relentless battle to protect their territories. Amid the ruins, Dokja moved swiftly into a convenience store. The shelves were in disarray, but he wasted no time. Grabbing several plastic bags, he swept in whatever food he could find. He worked quickly, knowing the dangers that lurked. A notification appeared in his vision that the Elaine Monkey's lungs item was now in use. This was an item he had prepared beforehand, a life-saving artifact that acted as a temporary air purifier, allowing him to breathe in the highly contaminated environment for only 20 minutes. The system issued a warning. The scenario was marked as highly toxic, urging him to hold his breath and find shelter underground as soon as possible. Dokja muttered to himself, determined to move quickly. The effect of the Elaine Monkey's lungs was temporary. He had to find safety before it wore off. Just as he was about to leave, a faint sound reached his ears. It was a plea for help, weak and desperate, cutting through the stillness. He turned sharply, scanning the area, and his eyes landed on a woman crawling towards him. Her figure was frail, her movements sluggish, but her desperation was evident. She was alive, a rare sight in the chaos that surrounded him. Without hesitation, Dokja made a decision. He hoisted the trembling woman onto his back, her weight barely noticeable amidst the adrenaline coursing through him. Dokja sprinted with all his might, the woman clinging weakly to his back. The supplies rattled in the bags he carried, but he didn't stop. He ran through the ruins, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. He realized Oksu Station had been destroyed because it was above ground, leaving it vulnerable. The closest underground station to his current location was Gyeomho Station. Without slowing down, he adjusted his route and pushed forward. As he reached Gyeomho Station, he was met with frustration. The entrance was blocked, the shutters firmly closed. He quickly glanced around for alternatives, his thoughts scrambling for a solution. That's when the woman on his back weakly spoke, her voice barely audible but clear enough to guide him. Exit 4. Following her directions, Dokja carried her toward the indicated exit. However, as they approached, he noticed 2 men hastily closing the shutters of the space. Just as the shutters slammed shut, loud banging erupted from the other side, startling the men. It wasn't just the monsters outside, it was Dokja, determined to get in. Inside, the men hesitated, fear and desperation written on their faces. They refused to open the shutters, claiming the space was overcrowded and couldn't accommodate any more people. But Dokja wasn't deterred. The safety of the injured woman on his back took precedence over their excuses. Their refusal struck him as odd. Overcrowding in this station hadn't been mentioned in 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Something about this scenario was different, but there was no time to dwell on it. Determined, Dokja grabbed a sharp thorn, an item he had prepared in advance, and inserted it into the bottom of the shutter. With a swift and powerful motion, he forced it open. The men inside froze in shock, their disbelief quickly turning into panic. Without another word, they fled, disappearing into the shadows of the station. A notification flashed in Dokja's vision, confirming that he had entered a safety zone. The environment around him immediately felt less oppressive, but his attention remained on the woman. She was still weak, her condition worsening from the contaminated air. Reaching into his supplies, Dokja retrieved the Elaine Monkey's lungs. He carefully handed it to her, instructing her to use it. Though it wouldn't heal her her completely, it would neutralize the poison in her system, giving her a chance to recover. Dokja's thoughts wandered as he carried the injured woman. He questioned her identity, wondering if such a character had existed in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. It was likely she never survived this far in the novel. His curiosity pushed him to consider checking her character profile, but his musings were abruptly interrupted by a loud commotion. Voices echoed through the station, growing louder as a group approached. The men who had fled earlier had returned, but this time with reinforcements, armed with weapons like bats. Their intentions were clear. At the front of the group, their leader stepped forward, exuding hostility. His voice was sharp and demanding as he questioned Dokja's presence. A notification appeared in Dokja's vision, alerting him to the displeasure of a constellation observing the situation. The prisoner of the golden headband was frowning at the turn of events. Unbothered, Dokja identified himself calmly, but his response only seemed to aggravate the leader further. It became apparent that the leader wasn't interested in his name, but rather his purpose and identity. The tension escalated as the group's attention shifted to the woman Dokja was carrying. Their surprise was evident, and murmurs spread among them. Recognition dawned on their faces as they connected her to a minor group they knew. She had supposedly been with others who were part of their faction, yet she had reappeared with Dokja instead. The leader's eyes narrowed, and his expression twisted into a cunning smirk as he turned to one of his subordinates. The truth behind her appearance started to unravel. He accused his subordinates of acting without his permission. One of them tried to excuse himself with a weak grin, suggesting Cholsu should have been involved first. In his mind, Dokja reflected on the stereotypical villains often portrayed in post-apocalyptic stories. Cholsu, an unfamiliar name, seemed insignificant in the grander narrative. To Dokja, the concept of lawlessness in such worlds often felt cliché, yet reality had proven that humans could be far worse than the stories implied. The group's focus shifted to the supplies Dokja carried. Greed flashed in their eyes as they demanded the woman and the food. Cholsu, grinning wickedly, attempted to assert his authority, offering Dokja a chance to leave if he surrendered everything. Notifications suddenly filled Dokja's vision, reflecting the discontent of observing constellations. One was enraged by the group's injustice, while another demanded retribution. A new scenario was triggered, a bounty hunter scenario, setting the stage for confrontation. Dokja felt the tension in the air but remained composed. In his mind, he acknowledged the inevitable outcome, not for him, but for the group in front of him. Cholsu, trying to intimidate him, smashed his knuckle-brace fists together, promising violence if Dokja didn't comply. Before Cholsu could finish his countdown, Dokja moved first, landing a swift and powerful punch to his cheek. The impact sent Cholsu flying out of sight, crashing into the wall with a loud thud. The group was stunned, their leader incapacitated in an instant. Their disbelief was evident as they hesitated, questioning how Dokja could remain unfazed and still standing after the blows he had taken. Some began to suspect that he might have a supporting constellation aiding him. As the group tried to retaliate, they found themselves overwhelmed. Dokja's strikes were calculated, aimed precisely at their legs, leaving them bruised and unable to move effectively. The difference in strength was apparent. Dokja reflected on the importance of stats like strength, agility, and stamina in determining the outcome of a battle. His combined stat total of 33 far outmatched theirs, which were mostly in the single digits. Even with a supporting constellation, their low stats made them no match for him. Stepping closer, Dokja accessed Cholsu's character profile and discovered that he was backed by a constellation called the Monarch of the Small Fries. The revelation amused Dokja. Of all the possible supporters, Cholsu had one with little influence. In his thoughts, Dokja recalled that Cholsu had been a minor character in TWSA, meant to die early at the hands of Junghyuk, yet here he was, alive and causing trouble. Cholsu, battered but still defiant, smirked as he spoke to Dokja. He claimed to recognize a similarity between them, insinuating that Dokja had likely killed others to survive. Dokja's mind briefly wandered, flashing back to his encounter with Namwoon Kim. The memory stirred a pang of regret. He wondered if, back then, he might have saved others. The haunting words from that time echoed in his thoughts. A sudden notification brought him back to the present. The system informed him that the fourth wall had blocked Cholsu's attempt at bluffing. Snapping out of his reflection, Dokja acted swiftly. He stabbed Cholsu's hand with a thorn. Cholsu screamed in agony, his confidence now shattered. The system announced a reward from Cholsu's supporting constellation. Amused by the events, it gifted Dokja 100 coins. Dokja processed the information, recognizing the irony. The Monarch of the Small Fries was infamous, not for aiding its incarnations, but for taking pleasure in their misery. Its support meant little, as it delighted in seeing its chosen suffer at the hands of others. With only 2 minutes left before the scenario ended, Dokja unleashed a merciless assault on Cholsu. Each blow was calculated, each strike a reminder of the pain Cholsu had caused. Cholsu's group, witnessing their leader's humiliation, begged Dokja to stop, pleading for his mercy. As the fight came to an end, Dokja turned his gaze to the woman who had been a victim of Cholsu and his gang. Her pain mirrored that of the old woman in the cabin from earlier, a cruel reminder of the darkness lurking in humanity. Dokja's mind raced with conflicting thoughts as he stood over Cholsu. Humans are weak, he reflected, but how can they be so cold-blooded and cruel? The apocalypse seemed like an excuse for their actions, but deep down, Dokja wondered if such cruelty was ingrained in human nature. Grabbing Cholsu by the collar, he demanded an answer, but Cholsu's response was bitter and defiant. He cursed the world and urged Dokja to end it all. For a moment, Dokja saw the despair in Cholsu's eyes, a reflection of something that had existed even before the world collapsed. In that despair, Dokja saw a part of himself. himself, realizing that perhaps they weren't so different after all. With only 10 seconds left before the scenario ended, Dokja made his decision. He raised his foot and brought it down with finality, ending Cholsu's life in an instant. The group that had once followed Cholsu screamed in shock and horror, accusing Dokja of being cold-blooded. But Dokja remained resolute, his thoughts clear. The world has ended, and I have to adapt to this new reality. He picked up the injured woman and carried her on his back, turning to Cholsu's group with a calm command. They reluctantly agreed to lead him to the rest of the survivors. Gumho Station, a place destined to become the region's stronghold, loomed in the distance. As Dokja followed the group, the station came into view, bustling with survivors. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as they noticed the Cholsu gang returning. People pointed and whispered, asking for help as they saw the injured woman on Dokja's back. Among the crowd, familiar voices broke through the noise. Yu Senga's voice trembled with relief as she called out to Dokja. Beside her, Lee Gilyong sprinted to Dokja, throwing his arms around him in an emotional embrace. The boy clung tightly. Senga couldn't contain her emotions, expressing her disbelief that Dokja was okay. Behind her, Lee Hyunsong approached. He apologized profusely for leaving Dokja behind. Dokja, however, reassured him with a calm demeanor, accepting his actions as necessary in the face of the chaos. Hyunsong mentioned Junghyuk's prediction. He explained that Junghyuk had confidently stated that Dokja was likely still alive. This comment piqued Dokja's curiosity, and he asked about Junghyuk's whereabouts. Hyunsong revealed that Junghyuk had left the station the previous day, heading off to pursue his own goals. Dokja's thoughts began piecing together the situation. Junghyuk, the regressor who relived his life repeatedly, was now in his third round. In this iteration, he had become a relentless and calculating individual, intent on monopolizing power and resources to achieve his ultimate goal. Dokja realized that the survival of the Cholsu gang was unusual. According to the events in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, they should have been killed by Junghyuk. However, it seemed Junghyuk had left the station in a hurry, leaving loose ends, a rare occurrence for someone as thorough as him. Hyunsong, puzzled, asked what he meant, but Dokja dismissed it as a habit of talking to himself. Before they could continue their discussion, a loud voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Han Myungo stepped forward, his tone filled with anger and disdain. He pointed at Dokja, accusing him of being dangerous and unfit to remain with the survivors. Han's accusations caused a stir, and several individuals armed with makeshift weapons began to surround Dokja, their hostility apparent. Han, his frustration boiling over, demanded that Dokja be removed from the station. He labeled Dokja as evil and untrustworthy, his voice filled with righteous indignation. The tension was palpable as the crowd hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Just then, another voice broke through the commotion. Calm yet commanding, it belonged to Inho Cheon, a man who exuded authority and charisma. He stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Han's shoulder to steady him. With a disarming smile, Inho addressed Han, urging him to remain calm and rational. Turning his attention to Dokja, Inho introduced himself with a polite yet calculated demeanor. His tone was friendly, but there was an underlying sense of control in his words as he asked for Dokja's name. Dokja's mind worked quickly, recalling details from the novel. The name Inho Cheon wasn't unfamiliar. He knew that Inho had a supporting constellation and was likely the leader of this group. The Cholsu gang, now under Inho's command, had likely reported the earlier incident to him. Dokja realized that Inho was a man who would not let such actions go unaddressed. Dokja, preparing for the inevitable, squeezed the thorn in his hand, steeling himself for what was to come. Inho broke the tension by addressing Dokja with a surprising announcement. He mentioned that the people who had come with Dokja spoke of his bravery, how he had fought the monsters and saved Inho's men. This caught Dokja off guard. It seemed that Inho had already heard about his actions, and rather than confront him aggressively, Inho turned it into an opportunity. Inho called for everyone's attention, directing the group to gather around. He announced that this new member, Dokja Kim, had brought food for them. The atmosphere shifted as the survivors around them broke into excited chatter, murmuring about the food they would get to eat. The desperation and relief were palpable. Inho's chuckle filled the air. Dokja, still trying to process the rapid shift, a message blinked in his vision. It came from the constellation Secretive Plotter, whose excitement was apparent in the notification. With his group, Dokja moved to the other side of the area, trying to make sense of everything unfolding around him. Hyunsong gave him a brief overview of the station's population. There were 86 people at Gumho Station, 87 including Dokja. It was fewer than Dokja had expected. Hyunsong continued, explaining that only those who had been in the cabin and near the station had survived the initial onslaught. He hesitated before mentioning that everyone here had cleared the first scenario. Dokja silently observed his surroundings with a grim realization. Everyone here had survived by killing others. Every single person was a murderer in their own way. Hyunsong spoke calmly, providing insight into the fractured dynamics of the station. He explained how the survivors had split into 2 factions, the major group holding most of the power, and the minor group struggling to maintain their dignity. In the distance, Han was addressing a group of people, his voice filled with false confidence. He shouted that they just needed to trust him, assuring everyone that the chairman was doing his best and that rescue was imminent. Nearby, others added to the illusion of hope. Someone praised Han, calling him the young master of the Hangyang Corporation. A child's soft voice broke through the chaos as he told his mother he was hungry. The mother, holding holding back tears, reassured him that they would be rescued soon. Inho, ever the opportunist, stood tall and confident, echoing similar sentiments. He reminded everyone that the government would intervene and ensure their safety. Dokja silently observed, his thoughts cutting through the veneer of optimism. Even when 100 murderers gathered, they instinctively divided themselves into the strong and the weak. This was the essence of human nature. Did everyone truly believe there was no other way to survive? Inho continued, explaining the grim reality of their food situation. The major group controlled the distribution of rations, but supplies were running dangerously low. In an attempt to manage resources, they had started assigning people to scavenge for food outside the station. Among those tasked with this dangerous mission was He-Won, the woman Dokja had saved earlier. Senga, standing beside him, quietly clarified her identity. She mentioned that a few others had also been sent out, but none of them, those from the minor group, had returned. Dokja turned his attention to Hyunsong, his calm demeanor masking his curiosity. He acknowledged Hyunsong's decision to stay with the minor group instead of aligning with the more powerful major group. Hyunsong responded with a quiet honesty. He admitted that while the major group had likely wanted him, he had chosen to remain with the minor group. He wasn't sure if it was about morality or ethics, but something about the major group's approach felt wrong. Even so, he couldn't ignore the hypocrisy in his own actions. Worrying about right and wrong seemed almost laughable after everything that had happened. Dokja placed his hand on Hyunsong's chest, a subtle yet firm gesture. He emphasized the importance of worrying about right and wrong, even as a hypocrite, urging Hyunsong not to forget it. Hyunsong's eyes welled up, his emotions raw, but he managed to hold back his tears. Dokja's thoughts lingered on the situation. Just because the circumstances were unavoidable didn't mean the actions taken could be ignored. The events that transpired could never be justified, and they must never be forgotten. Inho approached, flanked by members of the major group. He directly asked Dokja to join their group, offering him a high position and suggesting they could lead the survivors together. Dokja silently processed Inho's proposition. He understood the intent behind the words. Inho wasn't offering help, he was seeking to use him. Inho continued, justifying his offer as cooperation for the survival of everyone at the station. He pointed to the suffering around them, appealing to Dokja's sense of responsibility as someone with power. Dokja declined without hesitation, leaving Ino to retreat with a confident parting remark, suggesting Dokja could reconsider and find him if he changed his mind. Hyunsong questioned Dokja's decision, his mind replaying Inho's last words. Dokja responded with a smirk, dismissing the idea of ever reconsidering the offer. Yet, he acknowledged the uncertainty of the situation, knowing things could change in unexpected ways. Dokja glanced at Hyunsong, agreed with the sentiment, stating they would see what happened next. Shifting focus, he mentioned it was time for dinner and handed out food to the others. Gil-yong's face lit up with excitement as he asked if they could really eat it. Just as the atmosphere started to ease, a loud voice echoed across the station, disrupting the moment. A group of people approached, their expressions filled with anger and frustration. They began to accuse Dokja, claiming he was hoarding food for himself while others went hungry. The accusations grew louder, with the group questioning why he would monopolize the food that others had helped collect. Some demanded that Inho take charge of the food distribution, arguing it would be fair for everyone to get their share. Dokja froze for a moment, stunned by the sudden hostility. He quickly realized what was happening. In his mind, he identified the true danger in this apocalyptic world. It wasn't individuals driven by despair, like Chol Su-bang. No, the real threat came from those who thrived on the despair of others, using it to cultivate their own power. His thoughts sharpened as he recognized the man behind this manipulation. Ino Cheon, the self-proclaimed leader of the major group, was orchestrating the crowd's anger. This was a calculated move, one designed to corner Dokja into submission. The accusations continued, each word building pressure. Ino stood among the crowd. He presented Dokja with a false choice: become a hero by sharing the food, or a villain by keeping it for himself. Dokja's frustration boiled over, his teeth clenched in anger. Inho's name echoed in his mind as he grappled with the manipulation. Just then, a notification flickered in Dokja's vision, signaling that he had entered the second scenario area. The message urged him to find and move to the location where the scenario would activate. The protests from the crowd didn't stop. They demanded Inho take control of the food and redistribute it fairly. The pressure mounted as their voices grew louder. Meanwhile, a small grin formed on his face. For him, this was all part of the plan. He knew exactly how to manipulate these people and force Dokja into compliance. Inho stepped forward, raising his hands to calm the angry crowd. He spoke with an air of authority, assuring them that there had been a misunderstanding. He claimed that Dokja had already agreed to join their group and that the food would be collected and redistributed as usual. Inho's expression remained calm, but inside he was confident in his ability to control the situation. He believed Dokja would have no choice but to play along. Inho continued, adding that Dokja had also promised to cooperate with their group moving forward. Dokja, however, interrupted. He announced that he would share the food, but it wouldn't be free. The crowd murmured in confusion and disbelief, questioning what he meant. Some speculated he intended to sell the food, their voices laced with suspicion. A notification appeared in Dokja's vision. The eyes of a few constellations sparkled with excitement, while the constellation's secretive plotter scoffed in amusement. Dokja confirmed their suspicions, stating he wasn't running a charity and didn't trust everyone blindly. Inho's frustration showed for a brief moment, his grin tightening as he struggled to maintain his composure. The murmurs grew louder as the crowd began to ask how much the food would cost. Some even suggested paying with money, desperate to strike a deal. Dokja dismissed the idea of currency, declaring he would only accept coins as payment. The crowd grew uneasy, some questioning whether this was a good idea. Dokja remained firm, setting the price at 10 coins per food item from that moment onward. A notification flickered in his vision, revealing that a few constellations were relieved by his decision and had gifted him 100 coins. Hee-won stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. She agreed with Dokja's terms, stating that it was only fair. Without hesitation, she offered to pay immediately, refusing to accept free food. She introduced herself as Jung Hee-won and thanked Dokja for helping her earlier. Dokja extended his hand and shook hers, acknowledging her gratitude. Hee-won addressed Sanga and Hyunsong directly, urging them to regain their composure. She reminded them that Dokja had risked his own life to retrieve the food and criticized them for even considering acting like the others who expected to leech off him. Her words struck a chord. Sanga, flustered, quickly apologized. She admitted she wasn't thinking clearly and insisted she didn't want any handouts. Hyunsong followed suit, promising to pay immediately. Dokja agreed, asking if they knew how to trade coins. Sanga confirmed she had learned a few days ago and explained the process, touching index fingers and thinking about the amount to exchange. A notification appeared as Gil-young transferred 20 coins to Dokja. Surprised, Dokja asked why the boy had sent 10 extra coins. Gil-young explained it was for the chocolate from earlier that morning. Hee-won remarked how Gil-young seemed more honorable than the shameless adults around them. She then shifted her focus to the major group, pointing out their hypocrisy. They were monopolizing food, feeding others just enough to keep them alive, and then sending them off as scavengers, like disposable cattle. Hee-won mentioned her own experience from earlier that day, highlighting the grim reality. Hyunsong agreed with her, acknowledging the significance of Dokja's decision to sell food. However, he questioned whether the high price of 10 coins per item would attract any buyers. Dokja remained calm, saying they would wait and see. Hyunsong suggested Dokja should rest while he kept watch, but Dokja declined. He mentioned having other matters to take care of, which piqued Hyunsong's curiosity. Suddenly, Hee-won exclaimed in frustration. She realized that all the food had been sold overnight and cursed the two-faced nature of the others. Dokja observed her, noting that she wasn't as fragile as she initially seemed, but it wasn't just the minor group that had secretly bought food during the night. The next morning, Inho addressed the gathered crowd. He announced a new rule. Food distribution would now be limited to 3 biscuits per person. The people erupted in murmurs of disbelief and outrage. They questioned how they were supposed to survive on such a small amount and called out the unfairness, pointing out that the search party received much more food. Inho didn't attempt to deny the accusations. Instead, he addressed the crowd with calculated calm, stating that anyone was welcome to join the search party if they wanted more food. The response was immediate and loud. People voiced their frustrations, pointing out that almost no one who joined the search party returned alive except for members of the Cholsu gang. They accused him of practically sending them to their deaths. Inho's demeanor remained unbothered as he suggested an alternative. If they were unwilling to join the search party, they could always scavenge for food themselves. His tone carried an edge, forcing the crowd into silence. Inho then shifted his strategy, his smile widening as he addressed the group with mock humility, claiming there was another way to gain more food without risking their lives. He mentioned that he had learned a valuable lesson from Dokja the previous day. Dokja, watching from a distance, thought to himself about the irony. It had been the major group that bought over half the food he had scavenged, though they had paid for it in full. Dokja's memory shifted to the interaction with Inho, recalling the man's warning. Inho had confidently stated that Dokja was digging his own grave and would regret his actions. Now, as Inho addressed the crowd, his words carried a malicious undertone. He explained that nothing in the world could be free and that everyone had to prove their worth to eat. He announced that the major group would exchange food for anything they deemed valuable, presenting it as the natural order of the world. With a sinister smile, he credited Dokja for teaching them this lesson, placing all the blame for the new rules squarely on Dokja's shoulders. As Inho spoke, a notification appeared in Dokja's vision, revealing that Inho had activated the skill Insight. Everything made sense now. The irrational behavior of the people wasn't just due to desperation, it was Inho's skill manipulating their emotions and actions. Hee-won, standing nearby, spoke up, her frustration evident. She pointed out that the major group was still monopolizing food, directly opposing Dokja's goal of encouraging people to trade and weaken the group's control. Dokja acknowledged her insight silently, recognizing her sharp understanding of the situation. Hee-won, however, wasn't done. She criticized Dokja for selling food to the major group, arguing that nothing had changed. Dokja, unfazed, responded calmly, knowing the truth. The situation had changed. He had earned more coins. As he reviewed his gains, a notification displayed the exact number, 1,450 coins. Hee-won's surprise was evident as she demanded to know his plan. Turning to Senga, she sought reassurance, asking if Dokja could truly be trusted. Senga chuckled softly, her response showing quiet confidence. Hee-won pressed further, asking if Dokja had kept any food for himself. Dokja's reply was straightforward. He had sold it all. Hee-won's disbelief grew, her bewildered expression reflecting her unease. Gil-young, standing nearby, poked Dokja gently and offered him his own food. Dokja shook his head, declining the offer with a faint smile, telling the boy to keep it. He then turned his attention to the others and made an unexpected announcement. He recommended that everyone who had purchased food the previous day should finish it by the end of that day. His tone was firm, leaving no room for argument. Meanwhile, protests erupted on the other side of the station. The people, frustrated and desperate, were arguing with members of the major group. The major group had raised the price of food to 200 coins each, an amount far beyond the reach of most. The protesters shouted in anger, insisting they couldn't afford such exorbitant prices. The response from the major group was cold and dismissive, ordering them to leave if they couldn't pay. Moments later, Dokja stood alone on the station tracks, his posture steady and purposeful. Hee-won, watching him, voiced her concern. She reminded him that everyone who had ventured in that direction had died, whether they were gangsters or not. Her words carried a warning, but Dokja's focus remained unchanged. Before leaving, Hee-won spoke again, her tone softening. She expressed her gratitude once more, thanking Dokja for saving her life the previous day. Dokja acknowledged her thanks, his reply calm and measured. As Hee-won shifted her gaze, her expression darkened and she pointed toward a man walking with a limp. Her voice hardened as she revealed his identity. He was the one who had tried to harm her, the source of her pain and anger. She made it clear to Dokja that the man was hers to deal with. Dokja observed Hee-won silently and reflected on her situation. She was someone who would have already met a grim fate if not for his intervention. He knew she was the kind of person who would attract the attention of constellations. Curious, Dokja decided to check her character profile. His suspicions were confirmed. 3 constellations were currently showing interest in her. Before Dokja could ponder further, Hee-won's sharp gaze caught something in the distance. Without hesitation, she bolted towards the scene, her urgency drawing his attention. She shouted in alarm, pointing out that the major group had taken the women and the elderly. Her voice was filled with anger and concern as she processed the injustice. Dokja stepped forward, asking what Hee-won planned to do. Her response was immediate and determined. She intended to stop them. She couldn't stand by and watch them join the search party, knowing they wouldn't survive. Dokja's response, however, was more practical. He reminded her that staying behind wasn't a solution either. If they remained, they would only starve to death. Hee-won's frustration was evident, but Dokja's mind was elsewhere. He had just discovered her personal attribute, crouching figure. It seemed unremarkable at first glance, but Dokja knew better. This attribute, while seemingly common, had immense potential. In TWSA, it was known as a rare super-evolutionary attribute capable of transforming into something extraordinary. He recalled that one of the top 100 incarnations in the story, the Berserk Butcher, had also started with this same attribute. Hee-won wasn't satisfied with Dokja's response. Her frustration boiled over as she asked if he expected her to just stand by and do nothing. Dokja, however, remained composed. He told her that stopping them now wouldn't change the underlying problem. The food shortage was the root cause, and unless that was addressed, the same situation would repeat itself over and over again. As Hee-won processed his words, Dokja's thoughts deepened. Initially, he had considered her to be just another extra in the grand scheme of things, but now he was beginning to see her true potential. She wasn't just anyone, she was someone worth having as a companion. However, one detail about her profile lingered in his mind. Along with the crouching figure attribute, she also possessed the demon slaying skill. This combination, while powerful, carried a dangerous implication. If left unchecked, Hee-won could evolve into an indiscriminate killer, blinded by rage and vengeance. Dokja turned to Hee-won and pointed out that the root of the current problem lay in the scarcity of food. Hee-won agreed hesitantly, but her confusion grew when Dokja suggested eliminating the root of the issue altogether. He glanced at his phone, noting the timing, and prepared for what was about to happen. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupted and a dokebi appeared in front of the gathered survivors. Panic spread quickly through the crowd as they screamed in fear at the sudden presence. The dokebi stammered awkwardly, explaining that the one previously in charge of the scenario, Byung, was currently being disciplined. It introduced itself as the new overseer of the scenario, though it was clearly unsettled. Dokja immediately realized this dokebi was not Byung. Unlike the one he was familiar with, this one exuded a chaotic, unpolished demeanor. As the dokebi looked around, it seemed irritated by the calmness of the people and blamed Byung for the state of the scenario. Then, with a snap of its fingers, the dokebi unleashed a new penalty. A flurry of notifications filled everyone's vision, stating that food could no longer be stockpiled and all existing food supplies would be removed. The people watched in horror as their remaining food floated into the air, leaving them helpless. The dokebi mocked them cruelly, calling them worthless and lazy for not working harder to complete the scenario. Its disdain for the survivors was evident, and with another snap of its fingers, all the food vanished entirely. The crowd erupted into frantic murmurs and cries of despair. Meanwhile, the dokebi gleefully announced the start of a new stage in the scenario, adding that it was time for things to get more exciting. A new message window appeared in everyone's vision, confirming the transition to the second scenario. Dokja observed the unfolding chaos with a faint smile. This situation, though dire, felt more aligned with what he knew from 3 Ways to Survive in an Apocalypse. The notification confirmed the details that they had entered the area of the second scenario, and the next task was to find and move to the location where it would be activated. Ino gathered the survivors and announced a critical decision. He declared that due to the current circumstances, only those who joined the search party would be provided with food. His words sent murmurs rippling through the crowd, their uncertainty and concern palpable. Dokja watched the scene unfold. He hadn't anticipated this additional penalty on top of the food restrictions. He speculated whether Inho might have foreseen it, but quickly dismissed the idea. Inho's actions were likely rooted in suspicion, but he couldn't confirm that Dokja knew about the penalty beforehand. Hee-won turned to Dokja, questioning if he had predicted this situation. Dokja admitted that he had considered what measures the dokebi might take to make survival harder. As he reviewed the notifications, Dokja realized the survival penalty wasn't part of the original novel, 3 Ways to Survive in the Apocalypse. He wondered if his contract with Baekhyung had somehow altered the story. Lee Hyun-sung, clearly uneasy, sought Dokja's guidance. Dokja firmly decided against joining the search party, explaining that going above ground was too dangerous, even for food. Instead, he proposed finding an alternative food source. When Hyun-sung looked confused, Dokja hinted at his plan to hunt monsters, something Hyun-sung pieced together by examining the map. He realized Dokja's intention was to follow the rails. Inho, observing from a distance, called out to Dokja with a faintly mocking tone, acknowledging his intention to form a separate team to complete the scenario. Dokja felt a wave of irritation at Inho's behavior. He noted that Inho's response wasn't as confrontational as expected. Instead of lashing out for not joining the search party, Inho seemed content to let Dokja operate independently. As Dokja analyzed the situation, he recognized an intriguing pattern. Each time he earned a character's trust, made a favorable impression, or correctly guessed their thoughts, his understanding of them deepened. This increased understanding now allowed him to sense Inho's suspicions. A notification confirmed this, revealing that Inho Cheon was wary of Dokja's intentions. Inho approached Dokja with another request, revealing his true intentions. He asked if a member of his group could join Dokja's party, and also inquired about the method to clear the scenario. Dokja, already anticipating such a move, wasn't surprised. He knew Inho wouldn't let them go so easily without keeping an eye on them. As the group moved into the tunnel, Han Myung-go's voice rang out in fear. He noticed corpses scattered along the path and frantically tried to reassure Senga, but it was clear he was more terrified than she was. Senga remained calm, pointing out his fear, but Han Myung-go denied it in an attempt to save face. Lee Hyun-sung, ever cautious, asked Dokja if allowing Inho's member to join was wise. Dokja reassured him that the new addition posed no threat. Hyun-sung then shifted his concern to Hee-won, reminding her that she hadn't fully recovered. However, Hee-won brushed off his concern, stating that Gil-young needed more care than she did. Lee Senga voiced her worries about the dangers ahead, wondering if they were simply charging into the unknown. Hyun-sung agreed, suggesting that Gil-young and the women should return to safety. Hee-won, however, firmly responded, reminding Hyun-sung of her capabilities. She revealed her experience in kendo, emphasizing that she wasn't as defenseless as he might assume. Despite this, Hyun-sung remained hesitant. Dokja, observing the discussion, decided to intervene. He reminded everyone that the world they knew had changed, and old prejudices like associating weakness with women and children were no longer valid. He explained that anyone could grow stronger by increasing their stats. To demonstrate, he turned to Lee Gil-young and asked him to showcase his abilities. Gil-young nodded and moved to the tunnel floor. Extending his hand, he connected with a cockroach in the distance using a faint, solid line. The insect responded to Gil-young's control, disappearing into the darkness. After a moment, Gil-young shared the information he received. The path ahead was clear for about 100 steps. Hee-won, amazed by Gil-young's abilities, couldn't hide her surprise. Han Myung-go, on the other hand, was horrified at the sight of the cockroach, cursing under his breath. Gil-young calmly introduced his attribute, Bug Collector, explaining that it allowed him to communicate with insects. With quiet determination, he assured the group that he had no intention of being a burden and had joined them to contribute meaningfully. Hee-won, momentarily surprised by Lee Gil-young's confidence and unique ability, nodded in acknowledgement, recognizing his value to the group. Gil-young added another observation, pointing out that the corpses scattered around were not just human, but also of something else entirely. The group noticed that the path ahead appeared ominously dark, almost as if a wall of shadows blocked their way. A sudden notification appeared before their eyes, announcing a new sub-scenario titled Hunting for Food. The tension thickened as Han Myung-go stumbled across a monstrous corpse, recoiling in fear. Hee-won, more composed, questioned how such a beast could have been killed. Dokja silently examined the scene, identifying the creature as a Tier 9 subterranean ground rat. He recalled their nature from the story he knew. They were pack hunters, highly persistent and dangerous in confined spaces like these tunnels. He was certain that only one person could have handled such monsters, Jung-hyuk. Hyun-sung suggested that the remains might suffice to clear the scenario, but Dokja quickly dismissed the idea, explaining that they were required to hunt actively, not merely scavenge. Hyun-sung then wondered how they were supposed to cook the meat, musing about the primitive conditions. Dokja, however, had other priorities. He turned to Hee-won, referencing her kendo experience, and handed her a task to assist with the weapons. Without hesitation, Dokja began tearing apart the carcass of the ground rat, methodically removing its spine to create makeshift weapons. Hee-won watched, half impressed and half amused, remarking that their situation felt like a step back to the Stone Age. Soon, each member of the group held a crude weapon fashioned from the monster's remains. Realizing their weapons needed refining, Dokja instructed the group to sharpen their tools on nearby rocks. His precision and guidance stemmed from his prior knowledge of the world in TWSA, which had dedicated chapters on the art of survival, including butchering monsters for tools. Hee-won, observing Dokja's resourcefulness, acknowledged his unexpected competence. Finally, Dokja reminded everyone to invest their remaining coins wisely. He emphasized the importance of enhancing their strength, stamina, and agility while reserving enough for the survival fee. His words were blunt and pragmatic, acknowledging the grim reality that not all of them might survive the trials ahead. Yet he urged them to fight for their survival with everything they had. With their preparations complete, the group resumed their journey through the dark tunnel. The ground rats, drawn by the presence of intruders, crawled closer, their low growls echoing ominously. Without hesitation, the group charged charged forward, weapons raised. Hyunsong drove his makeshift weapon deep into the body of the ground rat. The creature's blood sprayed out, painting the tunnel walls in crimson, but the attack provoked the rest of the pack. Several rats turned on Hyunsong, their sharp teeth bared. Before they could reach him, Hee-won intercepted, her movement sharp and precise. She managed to take down one of the rats with a clean strike, but another evaded her assault, disappearing into the darkness. Frustrated, she shouted her failure to the group. Gil-yong stepped forward, his confidence unshaken. Wielding his weapon with precision, he brought it down on another rat, the heavy thud signaling its end. Beside him, Sangha panted heavily as she stabbed her weapon into a rat, her determination outpacing her fear. Finally, Dokja ended the skirmish, slashing through the last of the creatures. The group stood amidst the fallen rats, blood pooling beneath their feet. As the chaos settled, Dokja observed the others, noting their progress. Despite their inexperience, they weren't performing badly. Hee-won approached him with a mix of curiosity in her eyes. She asked how many he had managed to kill, and he responded honestly. 4. Hee-won, competitive as ever, grumbled about her own count that she had taken down 2, whereas Hyunsong proudly declared that he took down 3. Dokja was stunned. His count was only 1 less than his, and he had spent considerable resources on increasing his stats. He turned his attention to Hyunsong, opening the man's character profile. The details surprised him. Hyunsong had access to a starter pack, a premium package for incarnations with lower than average stats. It enhanced all his stats by a level and granted a skill called Weapon Proficiency, invaluable in the early stages. Dokja realized that the Master of Steel constellation must have taken a particular liking to Hyunsong, which explained his strength and effectiveness. Sangha voiced the practical concern that lingered in everyone's mind. How would they cook the meat from the ground rats? It was obvious they couldn't eat it raw, but the solution wasn't immediately clear. Dokja assured them they'd find a way, but his calm tone left the others looking at him with suspicion. Had he sounded too indifferent? Hyunsong broke the silence with a direct question. He asked Dokja if he knew more about the situation they were in. The group's gazes intensified, awaiting his answer. Internally, Dokja compared this moment to the experiences of regressors in the novel he had read. They often claimed intuition or crafted careful lies to maintain their advantage. As he pondered his response, a notification flickered in his vision. The constellation, secretive plotter, was watching intently, eager to see his next move. Other constellations also awaited his decision. As the group caught their breath, a sudden scream tore through the air. Han Myung-go shouted in terror as a ground rat latched onto his foot, dragging him with surprising force. Dokja watched the scene unfold, a sharp thought forming in his mind. Han Myung-go once again had found a way to create chaos and avoid scrutiny. Internally, Dokja couldn't help but note the irony of Han's consistent knack for trouble. A notification flickered before Dokja's eyes, acknowledging his observation. The constellation's secretive plotter silently approved of his thoughts. The ground rat tugged Han Myung-go into a tunnel, its grip unrelenting. Sangha, being the closest to him, tried to free him, but her attempt backfired as Han grabbed onto her in desperation. The situation escalated further when Lee Hyunsong extended his spear, but the effort was too late. The ground rat, Han Myung-go, and Yu Sangha disappeared into the depths of the earth. The group stared at the spot where a deep hole marked their disappearance. Lee Hyunsong, visibly concerned, turned to Dokja and questioned his decision to go alone. Dokja's reasoning was clear. Gil-yong's unique ability would help track the ground rat and the others. His calm demeanor contrasted with Hyunsong's worry, but Dokja added a note of reassurance. He asked Hyunsong to keep an eye on Hee-won, subtly pointing out that she wasn't in her best condition. Hyunsong hesitated but eventually agreed, albeit reluctantly. He announced to Hee-won that they should wait for Dokja's signal if anything happened. Hee-won, though exhausted, quietly mumbled her dissent, but her words lacked conviction. Dokja and Gil-yong ventured deeper into the tunnels, the oppressive darkness pressing against them. The area, known as the Dark Fold, was infamous for its uncanny ability to absorb all light, making it nearly impossible to distinguish directions. The air was thick and disorienting, but Gil-yong moved with certainty, guiding Dokja with quiet confidence. Gil-yong's unique skill, interspecies communication, was their beacon in the abyss. Without it, Dokja knew he would have been forced to spend coins just to navigate. His reliance on the boy's ability reinforced how essential Gil-yong was to their survival. As they walked, Gil-yong's voice cut through the silence with unexpected clarity. He questioned Dokja's earlier actions, his sharp observation revealing a depth beyond his years. Gil-yong had noticed that Dokja had deliberately let the ground rat escape with Han Myung-go and Sangha. Dokja hesitated, realizing the boy's perceptiveness left little room for deceit. He decided honesty was his best option. Dokja explained the habits of the ground rats. These creatures hoarded their prey and stored valuable items in their lairs, making their nests a treasure trove for those daring enough to venture in. The only way to locate these lairs was to follow the tunnels dug by the rats. Admitting he had expected Han Myung-go to be taken but not Sangha, Dokja noted how the plan had partially gone awry. Gil-yong listened carefully, then responded with an insight that caught Dokja off guard. The boy remarked that if Dokja were only after the items, he wouldn't have saved him back in the subway. His unwavering faith shone through as he gripped Dokja's hand, a simple gesture of trust that resonated deeply. The notification flickered in Dokja's vision, announcing that a few constellations had been moved by the moment. They gifted 200 coins as a sign of their emotional investment. Dokja, however, felt conflicted. Gil-yong's trust was touching, but also burdened him with the weight of responsibility. Inwardly, he couldn't help but think that the boy's faith stemmed from naivety. Gil-yong was still a child, unaware of the harsh realities of a world filled with deceit deceitful adults who might exploit his maturity. As they pushed further into the tunnels, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten. Gil-young's quiet voice broke the silence. He wanted to understand Dokja's place in this world. Was he a god or perhaps the protagonist of this grim tale? Dokja admitted that he was neither, confessing that he had always envied protagonists, the central figures of stories who carried the weight of their worlds. Gil-young's follow-up questions delved deeper, as he wondered if clearing all the scenarios would grant them a wish, as such stories often promised. Dokja pondered the boy's hopeful optimism, which stood in stark contrast to the harsh reality of their situation. Those who managed to adapt to this new, cruel world suffered in unique ways. Some were driven to madness, others clung to blind faith, and a few found solace in unyielding optimism. Gil-young's question embodied the latter, a fragile hope clinging to the idea of a brighter end. Despite his inner turmoil, Dokja responded with reassurance. Tapping Gil-young lightly on the shoulder, he affirmed the boy's belief, even though his heart wavered under the weight of the lie. In the pitch darkness of the tunnel, his expression remained hidden, a small mercy that allowed him to conceal the guilt he felt. Dokja silently acknowledged his own flaws, calling himself a despicable adult, but he also recognized Gil-young's determination to survive in this world, despite its harshness. The path became treacherous as they progressed. The ground grew slick, forcing them to slide carefully along the slippery surface. They finally came to a halt as the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. A notification suddenly appeared in Dokja's vision, announcing that the sub-scenario had been updated. The message confirmed that they had entered the ground rat's treasure trove. Gil-young's voice cut through the silence in disbelief, his words revealing his shock. Dokja quickly silenced him, placing a hand over Gil-young's mouth to prevent him from speaking any further. There was no time for words now, not when danger loomed so close. He warned Gil-young to stay quiet, emphasizing that the treasure was not the only thing the rats stored in their lair. The ground seemed to tremble as loud growls echoed throughout the cavernous space. The ground rats began to crawl in, their numbers increasing rapidly. Dokja and Gil-young quickly found cover, hiding in the shadows, carefully watching the creatures from a safe distance. The tension in the air heightened with every passing moment. Then, amidst the growls, the faint murmur of voices reached their ears. It was Han and Senga, tied up and seemingly trapped. Their argument broke the uneasy silence. Han's voice rose with frustration as he blamed Senga for their predicament, accusing her of dragging him into the chaos. Senga, confused and defensive, didn't understand what she had done wrong. Han's irrational anger only deepened the rift as he lashed out with wild accusations. Dokja listened intently, piecing together the strange details of their situation. He reflected on the conversation, the strange reasoning behind Han's actions. Han, always unpredictable, had somehow found himself on the subway, not in his usual Z-Class Benz. The truth slowly unraveled, and Dokja realized that Han had stolen Senga's bike, an action that had set off a chain of events that led them here. The bickering between Han and Senga continued, their exchange escalating as they shouted at each other over petty grievances. Dokja's focus shifted, his instincts sharpening. He wasn't quite ready to act, but there was no time to waste. Han's irrationality and the danger closing in made the decision for him. Dokja reached for the thorn, gripping it tightly in his hand, and without hesitation, he threw it with full force. The thorn shot through the air like a bullet, its trajectory precise and deadly. Han, startled by the sudden attack, flinched in terror, his eyes wide with fear as the thorn passed right by him and slammed into the wall with a deafening crack. Senga, on the other hand, was filled with relief, a look of delight crossing her face as she finally saw the figure who had come to their aid. The cracks on the walls spread rapidly, a clear sign that something dangerous was approaching. The deep tremors in the ground seemed to resonate with the fear of the ground rats, who trembled as they sensed the impending threat. Dokja could feel the weight of the moment, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows, and he whispered to Gil-young that something was coming. The air grew heavier, the footsteps echoing in the distance, making the tension even more palpable. Senga and Han were terrified, their anxiety rising as the approaching danger drew near. Dokja took in the atmosphere, noting the overwhelming presence of black ether, which overflowed to the point of manifesting as black flames. The force was rooted deep within the dark fold, and it was no surprise that it came from the very dark roots themselves. It was there that the Warden of the Dark was known to appear, a being tied to the dark forces of this world. As the eerie quiet enveloped them, a notification flashed in Dokja's vision, confirming that the Warden of the Dark had appeared. The sub-scenario had been updated that defeat the Warden. The fight was now inevitable. Suddenly, Gil-young doubled over, his body trembling as he collapsed to the ground, his face contorting in discomfort. The mental strain from the insects connected to him had clearly taken its toll. Dokja reassured Gil-young, telling him it was fine to let it out. As Gil-young continued to struggle, Dokja's mind raced. The damage was clear. Gil-young's powers had a significant mental toll, and even with his ability to communicate with other species, there were limits to how much he could handle. As Senga and Han screamed in panic, Dokja was quick to act. He rushed towards them and swiftly slashed the stems that had bound them. The blade cut cleanly through, but as Dokja thought, the blade had already started to lose its edge. The force behind the demonic species was becoming evident. The Warden of the Dark, a tier 7 demonic species, was a formidable opponent. Dokja recognized the power of this demon, noting that the demonic species were unique and that they held an upper hand even over other monsters. The treasures the ground rats collected were essentially sacrifices made to the demonic species. The Warden of the Dark turned towards Dokja, its gaze filled with malice. Dokja, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, immediately told Senga and Han to stay back, understanding that the situation had escalated beyond their control. control. Another notification popped into Dokja's vision, confirming that the Warden of the Dark had received the Demon King's blessing. The situation immediately grew worse. Dokja had hoped to avoid any confrontation with this creature, knowing the dangers it posed. The Warden spoke in an incomprehensible language, its guttural words reverberating through the air. Dokja strained to make sense of the sounds, but couldn't decipher them. A dark, suffocating aura emanated from the Warden, filling the space with an overwhelming sense of fear. However, Dokja's personal skill, Fourth Wall, nullified most of the fear's effects, allowing him to remain composed. The Warden roared again, the sound shaking the area. Dokja clenched his fists, realizing how precarious the situation was. He had no idea what the creature was saying or what it wanted, and he had no clear strategy to deal with it. Amidst the tension, Senga suddenly spoke, her voice trembling as she repeated a word the Warden had uttered. Startled, Dokja turned toward her and questioned why she hadn't retreated as he had instructed. Senga hesitated but explained that the monster seemed to be saying mother. Her words only added to the confusion. Dokja tried to mimic the Warden's language, but his attempts were clumsy. Senga, on the other hand, seemed to instinctively understand the sounds. She corrected his pronunciation, and the Warden responded with a loud affirmative roar. Dokja observed in disbelief as Senga managed to communicate with the creature. A notification confirmed that Senga had activated her skill interpretation. Dokja couldn't help but marvel at her adaptability. Even in the chaos of the apocalypse, her talents shone through. She had proven herself useful in an unexpected way. Senga hesitated for a moment before explaining the Warden's words. According to her, it was asking for a mother. The absurdity of the situation left everyone momentarily stunned. Senga, flustered, muttered that she wasn't even married yet. The Warden, undeterred, turned its gaze toward Han. With a growling repetition of mother, it seemed to be extending its bizarre request to him as well. Han's reaction was immediate, his voice filled with indignation as he declared that if anyone should assume such a role, he should be the father. The Warden's tentacles writhed menacingly before one shot out with alarming speed, like an arrow loosed from a bow. The appendage surged forward and forced itself into Han Myung-go's mouth with a sickening thrust. Senga and Dokja stood frozen, horrified by the grotesque sight unfolding before them. Han struggled, muffled sounds of resistance escaping as his throat convulsed. The vile creature's intent became disturbingly clear. Dokja's thoughts raced as he pieced together what was happening. The Warden wasn't asking for a mother in the traditional sense. It was attempting to implant its offspring into Han. Without hesitation, Dokja rushed forward. His blade slashed through the writhing tentacle, severing it cleanly and halting the grotesque process in an instant. The Warden screeched in agony, its cries echoing through the air as black ichor spurted from the wound. Before Dokja could reposition, another tentacle lashed out toward him with ferocious speed. He raised his weapon just in time, blocking the attack, but the Warden didn't relent. It thrashed violently, unleashing a barrage of tentacles from its grotesque form. Dokja countered each strike, but the relentless assault began to wear him down. Cracks appeared on his weapon, a crude tool made from ground rat materials. Dokja cursed under his breath as the weapon shattered in his hands. He knew the Warden wasn't placed here as an easy target, unlike the ichthyosaur. Defeating this creature was beyond him. His original plan had been simple: wait for the Warden to leave and claim the treasure it guarded. But Han, the fool, had ruined everything. Dokja, however, was always prepared with a backup plan. As the Warden prepared another attack, Dokja raised his voice, demanding the attention of a Dokebi. His gamble paid off when Beryu, the observing Dokebi, appeared, startled and caught off guard. Dokja reminded Beryu that an item should have arrived in his possession by now, pressing the Dokebi to hand it over. Beryu flustered, hesitated, claiming it wasn't his responsibility, but Dokja, sharp as ever, pointed out that Beryu was here to manage in Bahyong's absence. Beryu hesitated under the mounting pressure from the constellations. Notifications continued to flood Dokja's vision, reflecting the displeasure of the Watchers. The prisoner of the golden headband was relentless in browbeating Beryu, and the demonic Judge of Fire added its own ominous threats. He begrudgingly complied, muttering excuses about doing it only for the sake of making things interesting. Meanwhile, Dokja was already moving. As he maneuvered, a notification confirmed the arrival of an item from the Dokebi auction house. Earlier, after defeating the ichthyosaur, Dokja had acquired its nucleus, a valuable resource. Instead of trading it for something mundane, he had specifically sought out the weapon known as Broken Faith. Now, the payoff for his calculated gamble was in his hands. The item materialized before him, and a streak of light formed into his grasp. A broken blade took shape, its edges jagged and incomplete, glowing faintly. Dokja swung the weapon immediately, cutting through the approaching tentacles with precision. The Warden froze momentarily, its many eyes locked onto the broken sword in Dokja's hands. Beryu, still observing, scoffed at the sight. He dismissed the weapon as useless, emphasizing its broken state and lack of compatibility with ordinary users. Dokja, however, paid no mind to the Dokebi's taunts. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a random purchase. A system notification confirmed the weapon's worn state, warning that its durability was insufficient for effective use. But Dokja was prepared. He activated the Archdemon's eyeball and the White Star weapon aura, 2 items he had previously acquired. Their synergy began to work instantly. The broken sword in Dokja's hand emitted a violent burst of light. The jagged edges glowed brightly, and the weapon began to reconstruct itself as if responding to his magic power. The transformation was stunning, and even Bear Yu, who had been mocking moments earlier, was left speechless. The notifications flickered rapidly. The system acknowledged that the White Star weapon aura had been activated. The broken faith, infused with Dokja's magic, reacted violently, its incomplete form evolving into a radiant blade of power. The Warden of the Dark roared in rage and charged at Dokja with renewed fury. Its tentacles lashed out, aiming to overwhelm him. Dokja gripped the glowing sword tightly, his stance unwavering. With a single precise swing, the radiant blade cleaved through the oncoming tentacles. The severed appendages fell to the ground in pieces as the Warden howled in pain, its monstrous form writhing in agony. Dokja evaluated his situation. This weapon, designed specifically to combat demonic species, was his best chance at survival. However, it came at a cost. The blade consumed an enormous amount of mana with each use, leaving Dokja painfully aware of his limitations. Unlike those blessed with innate combat skills like blade proficiency or combat sense, he was not a swordsman, but Dokja didn't need to be. He was a reader. The memories of the novel 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse resurfaced in his mind with vivid clarity. The system's notification confirmed that his attribute was enhancing his memory of the text, allowing him to recall the intricacies of events he had read. This was his edge, knowing the enemy's patterns before they happened. As the Warden's tentacles struck out with deadly force, Dokja dodged each attack with precision. Activating his personal skill, Bookmark, Dokja selected the second slot, invoking the abilities of Lee Hunsung. A surge of strength coursed through his body, enhancing his stamina and reflexes just as he needed them most. With everything he had, Dokja pushed forward, weaving through the storm of tentacles. The battlefield became a blur of motion, the ground a canvas of chaos. Yet through the whirlwind of attacks, Dokja focused only on his objective. His blade flashed like a streak of white lightning, cutting through the tentacles with unerring precision. The Warden's attacks followed a predictable rhythm, something Dokja had already memorized. After every 2 strikes, there was a momentary pause. Exploiting this brief window, Dokja struck again, severing the remaining tentacles in a blinding arc of light. The Warden howled in agony. Its words were incomprehensible, but Senga, using her interpretation skill, translated. The creature was questioning how Dokja could anticipate its moves with such accuracy. Dokja's response, simple yet profound, resonated in his mind. This wasn't about strength or skill, it was about understanding, about reading. The Warden collapsed, its severed tentacles sprawled lifelessly on the ground, leaving only the battered form of the Dark Keeper, its heavy breaths the sole indication of its lingering life. Bear Yu, the Dokebi, was visibly shaken. His disbelief was palpable as he muttered to himself, marveling at what he had just witnessed. Notifications flooded the air once more. The abyssal Black Flame Dragon was astonished, its surprise evident. Other constellations were equally stunned, questioning their own perceptions. The prisoner of the Golden Headband, ever excitable, reacted with unrestrained enthusiasm, pulling at his hair in exhilaration. Bear Yu, regaining some composure, whispered in awe about the appearance of the Ether Blade so early in the scenario. However, Dokja knew better. The Blade of Faith was not a true Ether Blade. It was a shadow of the real thing, far less powerful than its genuine counterpart. Bear Yu reluctantly explained the mechanics of the weapon Dokja had used. The Blade of Faith, combined with the White Star weapon aura, formed a temporary blade by absorbing magic power. However, its durability was fleeting. A system notification appeared, confirming that the durability of Broken Faith had run out and that it could no longer be used. Bear Yu expressed frustration, lamenting the peculiar individuals drawn to Baehyung's channel, but Dokja, focused and composed, demanded the completion of the sub-scenario reward. A flurry of notifications confirmed the fulfillment of the scenario's conditions, granting him 500 coins. Several constellations acknowledged Dokja's strategic brilliance, their interest piqued by his calculated approach. Bear Yu, however, was baffled by Dokja's next move. The Warden of the Dark, though defeated, was still alive. Bear Yu questioned why Dokja didn't finish the creature off, emphasizing the potential reward for killing it. Dokja, outwardly calm, claimed he didn't believe in killing unnecessarily or taking lives carelessly. Yet, inwardly, he admitted to himself that this was a lie, a mask to hide his true thoughts. Bear Yu pressed further, revealing the immense reward at stake. Killing a tier 7 demonic species would grant a first kill bonus of over 7,000 coins, a staggering sum in this world. But Dokja, brushing off the Dokaibi's insistence, shifted his focus, declaring his intention to open treasure chests instead. Before Dokja could act, Han Myungo made his move. Without hesitation, Han drove a weapon into the fallen Warden, delivering a fatal blow. The Warden of the Dark let out a final guttural sound as its life was extinguished. Notifications erupted immediately. The tier 7 demonic species had been slain, an impossible feat had been achieved, and a first kill bonus of 8,000 coins was awarded. The contribution was divided between Dokja and Han Myungo, but Han's wild laughter filled the air. Consumed by a mix of triumph and madness, Han reveled in his deed. He mocked Dokja openly, ridiculing his earlier stance on sparing the creature. Han declared that a world like this demanded ruthlessness, not idealism. He scoffed at the idea of mercy, proclaiming that Dokja's so-called principles would lead him to failure and obscurity in this brutal reality. Suddenly, a new set of notifications blared into the air. The system announced that the tier 7 demonic species, the Warden of the Dark, had been slain. However, the price of victory trajectory was steep. The Demon King, the god of wrath and lust, had taken notice of the act. A dark message followed, a warning that the Demon King would hunt down the one who delivered the finishing blow. The murderer, Han Myung-go, had been cursed by the wrathful god. Han's triumph shattered instantly. Fear gripped him as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was marked, his name tied to the warden's death, and now cursed to face his worst nightmare. Dokja stood silently, his calm demeanor unchanged as he watched Han's panic unfold. Inwardly, Dokja reflected on his decision not to kill the warden himself. He knew that demonic species monsters were connected to the demon kings they worshipped, inheriting fragments of their master's power through the dark roots. Killing such creatures brought not just rewards, but also the inevitable wrath of the demon kings they served. The curse of the god of wrath and lust would force Han Myung-go to confront something unimaginably horrific. As Han trembled under the weight of his fate, another notification flickered. The constellation known as the Secretive Plotter had recommended Dokja's scenario to the Starstream, further cementing his growing reputation. Dokja allowed himself a faint smile, his calculated actions paying off in ways only he could foresee. Turning his attention away from Han, Dokja shifted focus to the task at hand. The treasure chests scattered in the aftermath of the battle. He suggested they open them, his voice calm and composed. After a brief search, Senga uncovered a small bracelet identified as a magic power recovery bracelet, while Gilyong found a rusty iron shield. Dokja, however, was less impressed by the finds. He thought to himself that the treasures seemed underwhelming, likely because the protagonist of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse had already been here and claimed the best items. Nevertheless, Dokja assured the group that there was still one more chest left. Opening the final box, Dokja uncovered a unique item, a mana brazier. The artifact glowed faintly, its presence exuding an aura of untapped potential. Dokja activated the mana brazier, channeling magic power into it. A soft hum resonated as the brazier ignited, radiating a gentle warmth. Without hesitation, Dokja picked up the leg of a dead ground rat, a greasy and unappetizing piece of meat, and placed it over the magical flame. The scent of roasting meat soon filled the air, a welcome change from the harsh, suffocating environment they had endured. Senga hesitated, drawn by the aroma but unsure of its safety. Her curiosity mingled with hunger, a need amplified by the 3 days they had gone without a proper meal. Gilyong, barely able to contain his excitement, watched as the meat cooked, his mouth watering at the sight. Dokja, without a word, grabbed the cooked hind leg and tore into it, testing its safety himself. The greasy texture and unfamiliar taste weren't exactly appealing, but it was edible. Seeing Dokja eat without issue, Senga and Gilyong rushed to join him, their hunger overriding any hesitation. As they ate, Dokja reflected on the stark difference between reading about scenarios like this in a novel and living through them. The taste of survival was far more visceral than he had imagined. Han Myung-go, having recovered slightly, approached the group hesitantly. The earlier confidence he had displayed was now replaced by a cautious demeanor. He began to speak, attempting to apologize for his earlier actions. Dokja, however, dismissed the tension. He gestured toward the food, urging Han to eat. Han, surprised by the gesture, didn't hesitate long and joined the others, grateful for the unexpected forgiveness. As they ate, Senga broke the silence, her voice tinged with curiosity. She marveled at Dokja's ability to navigate their dire circumstances with such precision. She couldn't help but wonder how he seemed to know so much, from cooking a monster they had never encountered to understanding the intricacies of their situation. Dokja, ever guarded, deflected the question with a casual explanation. Senga, however, attributed his knowledge to his extensive reading, her admiration for him evident. She expressed her gratitude, feeling inadequate in comparison to his contributions. Dokja, ever perceptive, reassured her. He acknowledged her efforts, pointing out her ability to understand the monster earlier due to her diligent study of foreign languages. Senga smiled at his words, finding comfort in his acknowledgement of her worth. Senga noticed Dokja staring intently at the black box. Curious, she leaned closer and pointed out the faint writings etched on its surface. Her sharp observation revealed a detail that even Dokja hadn't fully processed. She deciphered the text aloud, calling it a random item box. The revelation startled Dokja. He hadn't expected her to read the ancient language so effortlessly. He quickly composed himself, acknowledging her contribution with feigned surprise, praising her for deciphering the words. Inwardly, Dokja's mind raced. He recalled from the novel that this seemingly innocuous black box was the true treasure hidden in the scenario. Even Jung Hyuk, the protagonist, wouldn't uncover its significance until his 6th regression. The first known discovery of the box was by a character called the Flying Fox, and it had been regarded as a game-changing artifact. For Dokja, this was an opportunity to wield a powerful advantage far earlier than anyone else. Senga, unaware of the box's true potential, encouraged Dokja to use it, assuring him that he deserved to keep any items they found. Dokja opened the box. He carefully placed the Tier 7 demonic species monster core, which he had obtained from the Warden of the Dark, into the box. Alongside it, he added Broken Faith, the shattered weapon he had wielded in the earlier battle. Bearyu, who had been silently observing until now, suddenly grew alarmed. The Dokebi's expression shifted from detached interest to outright panic as he realized the box's significance. He muttered nervously about how such a rare item could still exist in the early scenarios, claiming that it had been removed from circulation long ago. Dokja ignored the Bearyu's ramblings and closed the lid of the box. A tense silence followed, broken only by Bearyu's frantic warnings. Bearyu's voice rose as he tried to explain the box's function. Low-grade items placed within it could be transformed into high-grade items with guaranteed success. Moments later, a dazzling light erupted from the sealed box, illuminating the room. The intensity of the light was almost blinding, and its brilliance filled the area with an air of anticipation. Bear Yu, now thoroughly panicked, mumbled something about ending the stream. His voice trembled as he hastily shut down his channel, unable to handle the implications of what had just happened. A notification appeared before Dokja, confirming the outcome. The system declared that the resulting item would be a bladed weapon, influenced by the fact that Broken Faith had been placed inside. Moreover, the probability of an item associated with a powerful constellation appearing had significantly increased due to the unique components used in the process. Dokja silently hoped for something extraordinary, anything beyond an A-grade item. The sound of the system notification echoed in his mind as it announced the emergence of a high-grade item. The box trembled slightly before releasing a soft click, signaling that its contents were ready. Dokja opened it cautiously. Inside lay a silver guard and a pristine white blade. Both emanated an otherworldly glow, their craftsmanship radiating power and significance. The system provided a detailed description of the blade. Unbroken Faith, a constellation artifact of immense rarity. It had once belonged to the hero Kaizenix, who had led the Grusiad during the Great Demon Age. The blade, imbued with fire, darkness, and divine power, was forged through Kaizenix's unparalleled ether dominance, which allowed him to create the legendary Blade of Faith. The weapon also carried an additional enhancement, boosting the wielder's strength and physique levels by 2. Senga, still standing nearby, was visibly awestruck. Even without in-depth knowledge of the Starstream's mechanics, she could tell this weapon was extraordinary. Her amazement mirrored Dokja's internal disbelief. Dokja marveled silently at his luck. A constellation artifact was leagues beyond anything alphabetically graded. It was a game-changing item, far exceeding his expectations. After confirming with both Senga and Gil-young, who nodded in agreement, Dokja decided to claim the artifact. With the treasure secured, Dokja suggested they return to their base. There were plenty of ground rats back where they came from, and the mana brazier could make their meals far more palatable. He also noted that with Gil-young's interspecies communication skill, gathering food would be easier. As they prepared to leave, Gil-young suddenly stopped. He pointed out something unsettling. There were no insects around. Dokja considered this, wondering if the Warden of the Dark's death had caused all the insects in the area to explode. Still, it seemed strange that not even one remained. Gil-young then admitted there was one insect nearby, but didn't elaborate further. Instead, he closed his eyes and began concentrating. His small frame trembled slightly as his focus deepened, and then blood began to drip from his nose. Alarmed, Senga noticed the change and called out, drawing Dokja's attention to the boy. Dokja's voice cut through the tense atmosphere as he tried to reach Gil-young, but the boy didn't respond. Before Dokja could react further, a deafening vibration shook the ground. Dust rained down from above, and the tremors grew more intense. The source of the disturbance was coming from the surface. Dokja's instincts screamed as he assessed the situation. The monsters above ground were no ordinary creatures. They were incredibly dangerous, with many high-grade beasts roaming the area. Among them was the Insect King, a terrifying monarch species that spelled disaster for anyone it encountered. Dokja realized what was happening. Gil-young was attempting to channel the Insect King. A surge of urgency coursed through Dokja. He grabbed Gil-young's shoulders and shook him. The boy blinked, his focus breaking, and his eyes slowly met Dokja's. Gil-young seemed dazed but conscious. Dokja firmly told him to stop using the skill, recognizing the catastrophic consequences if Gil-young succeeded in summoning such a dangerous creature. The danger passed, but not without a cost. Dokja placed a reassuring hand on Gil-young's head, warning him to avoid using the skill again until he explicitly allowed it. Gil-young nodded, his expression filled with guilt and exhaustion. Turning to the situation at hand, Dokja noted that moving forward immediately wasn't an option. The Black Tide, an unpredictable and hazardous zone, was too dangerous to navigate in their current state. They needed to wait until a smaller, less threatening insect appeared to guide them safely. Before Dokja could finalize a plan, Senga stepped forward. Her face was calm but determined as she explained that she might have a way to help. From her fingertips, a faintly glowing thread began to form, stretching out in the direction of the exit. Dokja watched as the thread connected her to something outside. Senga revealed that she had tied the thread to something earlier when she had been kidnapped. Her quick thinking had provided them with a chance to escape the labyrinth safely. Dokja felt a mix of admiration and curiosity. He asked her about her personal attribute, knowing it might hold the key to understanding her abilities. Senga hesitated, visibly uncomfortable with the question. Realizing his mistake, Dokja reassured her that she didn't need to share anything she wasn't comfortable disclosing. However, Dokja's keen mind pieced together a few clues. It seemed Senga's Starstream contract included an additional pledge that prevented her from leaking any information about her attribute. If she broke the pledge, it would cost her life. The skill she displayed, a thread to escape labyrinths, hinted at the influence of a particular constellation. Dokja couldn't confirm which constellation had chosen her, but it was clear that they had begun training her for something greater. Curiosity gnawed at him, prompting Dokja to activate his character profile skill to gather more information. A notification appeared in his vision that this character does not have a registered character profile, currently collecting information about the corresponding figure. As expected, the skill provided no immediate insight. This was strange. Dokja had never seen such a message before, and it left him unsettled. Something was off. Suddenly, a notification flashed across his vision, signaling that channel BI7623 had reopened. The channel's return brought with it a familiar presence. Baehyung, a figure Dokja knew well, though his methods were far from conventional. Baehyung wasted no time, greeting the others with a wink, and questioned how they all have been while he was away. As the group ventured out of the lair and back to the station, Hee-won couldn't help but munch on the rat meat they had gathered. Her eyes lit up as she savored the taste, commenting on how delicious it was. Dokja, with his usual pragmatic mindset, informed her that the meat would help recover some health. Baekhyung's voice echoed in Dokja's mind, acknowledging the remarkable feats he had accomplished during his absence. Dokja immediately recognized the method of contact, dokebi communication. What intrigued him most, however, was Baekhyung's awareness of his actions despite being away. The situation was growing increasingly strange. Dokja wondered aloud whether Baekhyung had been recalled because of his actions. Baekhyung's response was far from clear. He admitted that his return was indeed related to Dokja, but the reason had more to do with a warning from the management due to his abrupt shutdown of the channel and the extended advertisement. He dismissed it casually as though it were just a minor inconvenience. Dokja's curiosity grew and questioned him that how did he knew about the random item box. Baekhyung sighed, revealing that the box had been a remnant of an embarrassing past. In his greed, he had created the item box only to regret it later. Meanwhile, Hee-won had noticed the abundance of new items Dokja had obtained, including the mana brazier. She remarked on it with genuine interest. Dokja, never one to hide his achievements, acknowledged that he had indeed acquired a few new items. As the conversation continued, Lee Hyun-sung picked up the shield and began polishing it. His face lit up as he worked, clearly pleased with the item. Dokja couldn't help but notice the shift in Hyun-sung's demeanor. A notification chimed in his vision that Hyun-sung has begun to show some loyalty towards you. As Hee-won surveyed the items in Dokja's possession, a sense of envy crossed her face. She seemed desperate to find anything useful to help her survive. However, Dokja was clear in his decisions and firm in his refusals. She glanced at the sword in his hand, but it was clear that he had no intention of parting with it. Hee-won noted his selfishness as she observed his unwillingness to share even the meat, which he intended to sell for coins rather than distribute among others. She couldn't help but think how frugal and calculating he was. Dokja, unfazed, remarked on his survival skills as they approached the station once more. The atmosphere inside was tense and agitated. People murmured anxiously, their voices blending into a cacophony of desperation. Dokja immediately noticed the growing unrest and began to assess the situation. Notifications flickered into his vision, and the cause of the commotion became clear. The message was a stark reminder. There were only 20 minutes left until the mandatory survival fee collection. Each person was required to have 100 coins, and failure to pay would result in death. This collection would continue until the second main scenario was cleared. Realization struck Dokja like a lightning bolt. The urgency of the checkout time loomed over him. Around him, the noise of panicked voices grew louder. A woman clutching a small child pleaded tearfully with the crowd. She begged for spare coins, promising to repay anyone who helped her. Meanwhile, another man offered exorbitant sums of money, millions of won, for just 100 coins, trying to buy his way out of this apocalyptic scenario. A frantic man pushed his way through the crowd, calling out for his sister. She had joined the search party earlier, promising to share her coins with him upon return. His desperation turned into despair as he confronted a group of people who had been part of that search. They responded with indifference, mocking him and questioning whether she had ever really volunteered. Their callous laughter stung like a whip. Hee-won's anger boiled over as she observed the group mocking the man who was frantically searching for his sister. The cruelty and indifference of those around them made her clench her fists tightly. Just then, Dokja heard a familiar voice. Inho approached him with an exaggerated cheerfulness, his tone tinged with false friendliness. He recalled that Dokja had the most coins among them and eagerly pointed this out, his words carrying a clear intent to stir the crowd. Inho's grin widened as he activated his skill, Insight, sending a ripple of tension through the already chaotic atmosphere. Dokja's mind sharpened with awareness. Coins were power in this world, and as the person with the most coins at Gyumho Station, he had become a target. He could feel the weight of the crowd's stares as they turned their attention to him. Whispers spread quickly, and the murmur of the word coins grew louder. A desperate woman broke through the crowd and ran toward Dokja, her voice trembling as she pleaded for help. She needed just 100 coins, her survival depending on his generosity. Her desperation was mirrored in the eyes of others who had begun to inch closer, their hopes pinned on the idea that Dokja might be their savior. Inho, ever the manipulator, capitalized on the moment. With a mocking tone, he made it clear to everyone that while he lacked the coins to help, Dokja had plenty to spare. His words were carefully chosen to paint Dokja into a corner, framing him as the only one capable of saving these people. The crowd grew more agitated, their pleas turning into a cacophony of demands. Internally, Dokja's frustration mounted. Inho's cunning strategy had effectively turned the crowd against him. As people surrounded him, desperation and greed filled their eyes. Dokja calculated the potential loss. If he gave each person 100 coins, he would lose around 2,000 coins, a significant portion of his resources. Yet, if he refused, he would become the villain in their eyes. The situation was complicated further by the theme of the first scenario, original sin. These people, who had already taken lives to survive, now begged for help instead of taking responsibility for their own survival. Dokja weighed the morality of his choices against the brutal logic of this new world. Above them, Baekhyung observed the unfolding drama with gleeful delight. The countdown continued, with only 10 minutes remaining until the survival fee would be collected. His laughter echoed in the air, further emphasizing the dire stakes of the moment. Closing his eyes briefly, Dokja tried to center himself, his vision filled with flickering notifications. Messages from the constellations appeared, their cryptic yet intense focus pressing down on him. The secretive plotter, the prisoner of the golden headband, and the demon-like judge of fire were all watching his decision with interest. Opening his eyes, Dokja surveyed the desperate crowd. crowd. Their frantic energy swirled around him, a mix of anger, fear, and greed. He weighed their desperation and their accusations. He questioned, why should he play along with their demands? Dokja had no intention of bending to Inho's manipulative games. His cold demeanor reflected this resolve. Inho, however, burst into laughter, his voice booming across the station, as though relishing the spectacle he had orchestrated. His amusement emboldened the crowd, and they began shouting accusations. The crowd was furious, accusing Dokja of greed and selfishness. Some claimed he had exploited them by selling food at high prices, depriving others of their survival. A few demanded refunds, their desperation escalating into rage. Senga and Hyunsung tried to intervene, their voices standing out amidst the shouting. Senga pleaded for calm, and Hyunsung defended Dokja's actions, arguing against the crowd's portrayal of him, but their voices were drowned out by the mounting hostility. Inho, his tone oozing false sincerity, gave Dokja an ultimatum: return the coins to the people or face the consequences. The veiled threat hung in the air, stirring the mob further. Dokja, however, was unfazed. His eyes glinted coldly as he dismissed Inho's warning. The crowd surged forward, their desperation boiling over into violence. Armed with metal pipes and makeshift weapons, they charged at Dokja, their rage fueling their steps. With a calm precision, Dokja unsheathed his sword. The blade gleamed as he moved swiftly, countering the first attacker. A man swung a pipe at him, but Dokja retaliated with a decisive strike, severing the man's arm. Blood sprayed as the severed limb hit the ground alongside the weapon. The man's scream of agony echoed through the station, halting the mob in their tracks. The crowd froze, horrified by the sudden brutality. Dokja stood firm, his voice cutting through the silence. He coldly questioned their actions, challenging them to reflect on their blame. How pathetic it was that they chose to hold him responsible for their situation instead of taking accountability for themselves. In the momentary calm, Dokja quickly checked the character profile of the man he had just disarmed. The information confirmed his suspicions. The man's name was Minsang Han, and his stats were unusually high for an ordinary person. His background as a gangster explained his boldness and his willingness to resort to violence. Dokja addressed the crowd with cold clarity, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. The people around him were terrified, not just of him, but of the unknown forces manipulating them. He pointed out the truth they were too afraid to acknowledge. They weren't angry at him for his coins or his actions. They were terrified of the Cholsu gang. The gang had more coins, higher stats, and the strength to dominate them all. Inho, ever the manipulator, laughed mockingly, attempting to undermine Dokja's words. But Dokja pressed on, directing the crowd's attention to the harsh realities they had ignored. Why did the gang have more coins? Why were their stats so high? It wasn't simply because they were gangsters. The answer lay in something much darker. Notifications flickered in Dokja's vision. The incarnations around him were growing increasingly agitated. One man in the crowd hesitated, his voice shaking as he questioned how the Cholsu gang had amassed such wealth and power. Dokja didn't hesitate. He pointed out the stark reality. When he arrived, there had been 87 people at the station. Now only around 50 remained. The crowd's collective denial surfaced as someone stammered that the missing people must have been killed by monsters during patrols. But Dokja shattered their fragile illusion. He asked them why no one from the Cholsu gang had ever died. Why was it that the gang always returned from patrols stronger than before? His words pierced through the crowd's ignorance, forcing them to confront the truth they had refused to see. As his reasoning unraveled the lies, the notifications in his vision multiplied. The secretive plotter nodded in agreement with Dokja's deductions, while the prisoner of the golden headband grew increasingly excited, pulling his hair in anticipation of what would happen next. The crowd's fear shifted, their anger now turned towards Inho and the gang. A man, his voice laced with rage, demanded answers. Had the gang been killing survivors to steal their coins? Inho tried to deny it, shouting that Dokja was lying, but the cracks in his facade were clear, and the crowd was no longer willing to listen. Their agitation escalated, and they began to surround the gang, their voices trembling with betrayal. Bahyong's voice cut through the chaos, gleefully reminding everyone that only 7 minutes remained. The crowd's tension reached its peak as they turned on the Cholsu gang, their trust shattered and their survival instincts driving them to action. Dokja's voice rose above the chaos. He demanded that they take action, urging them to reclaim their dignity and fight for their survival with their own strength. His words, sharp and unwavering, ignited something in the hearts of the people. The crowd roared in agreement, their anger turning into determination. They rallied together, shouting in defiance against the Cholsu gang. Even a mother armed her young child Daeong, instructing them to follow her lead. With weapons raised, the emboldened crowd surged toward the gang, ready to fight. The Cholsu gang members, seeing the tide turning, rushed toward Dokja in desperation, seeking to eliminate him as the source of their problems. But they underestimated him. With precise movements, Dokja's blade struck and a brilliant white light filled the space. The gang members fell, their screams echoing as their arms and legs were severed. The incapacitated gang members begged for mercy, their arrogance shattered. But before Dokja could respond, a figure stepped forward, a presence both fierce and resolute. It was Hee-won. Her blade struck swiftly, finishing off the fallen gang members without hesitation. She told Dokja to step back, claiming the remaining gang members as her responsibility. Hee-won's transformation was undeniable. A radiant brilliance surrounded her as the conditions for her attribute were fulfilled. The notifications confirmed it. The dormant attribute, crouching figure, had fully evolved. Hee-won's attribute blossomed into Judge of Evil, a rare and powerful attribute among the judges. Dokja recognized its significance immediately. quickly. The Judge of Evil was the most formidable among the 3 judges, a role destined to deliver justice without compromise. Notifications flooded Dokja's vision, confirming his role in aiding Hee-won's evolution. His contributions had earned her unwavering loyalty. She would not hesitate to become his sword in the future. As Hee-won activated her exclusive skill, Time of Judgment, the entire atmosphere grew suffocating with its sheer intensity. The absolute good constellations had granted their approval, and the skill unleashed its full power. Hee-won's figure became enveloped in a bloody aura, her movements fluid yet precise. Her blade cut through the air with a haunting grace, leaving trails of crimson wherever it passed. Her kendo strikes were both swift and devastating, slicing through the members of the Chulsu group with lethal efficiency. Blood sprayed in all directions, painting the battlefield in red. It was a scene of absolute carnage. While others fought valiantly, including Senga, Lee Hyunsong, and even the young Gil-young, none displayed the ferocity of Hee-won. Her attacks were relentless, her movements unyielding. If Dokja disarmed an opponent, she finished them without hesitation, striking with precision at vital points. The battlefield seemed to bend to her will, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. Blood pooled beneath her feet, and the lifeless bodies of the Chulsu group members piled around her. One by one, they fell until only Inho Cheon remained. Inho's laughter broke through the eerie silence as he locked eyes with Dokja. His voice trembled with disbelief and desperation, but before he could finish his words, Hee-won's blade descended in a single decisive motion, splitting him from top to bottom. For a moment, Dokja observed the aftermath. It was almost surreal to think that just moments ago, these people were sharing food and laughter. The battlefield, now painted in blood, served as a harsh reminder of the brutal reality they faced. The constellations watching from the channel were ecstatic, their collective excitement reverberating through the notifications. Then came the dreaded notification that the survival fees will now be collected. The sound of popping filled the air as those without coins began to vanish, their lives extinguished without fanfare. Hee-won, now drained of energy, collapsed onto the blood-soaked ground. Her breath came in heavy gasps, and her eyes seemed distant, as if grappling with what she had just done. Amid the grim silence, Dokja stepped toward Hee-won, extending his hand to her. His gaze was steady as he helped her rise. The weight of the moment settled on everyone as Dokja's voice broke the silence. He reminded them that the scenario had only just begun. The following morning, Gyumho Station bore the marks of change. After the events of the previous night, the station was quieter, its once crowded space now noticeably emptier. Most of the survivors had chosen to leave, their paths diverging as they moved toward their own uncertain futures. Only 5 people remained aside from Dokja and his group. They were strong enough to have endured the trials of the night, and Dokja was certain they would manage on their own with the coins they still possessed. The atmosphere was different now, quieter but heavier with the weight of what lay ahead. Among the group, Hee-won stood out, having seamlessly integrated herself as their newest ally. Han Myung-go, on the other hand, had disappeared without a trace, his absence raising no questions and leaving no void. For Dokja, it was simply time to move forward. As the group prepared to leave, Dokja took one last look around the station that had served as their refuge. With a single word, he signaled their departure. Together, they stepped out, their journey toward the next destination beginning. As they moved, Hee-won approached Dokja, lightly punching him on the arm. A notification flickered in Dokja's vision that you have received 1,500 coins from the character Hee-won. The gesture caught him off guard. Hee-won had distributed the coins from the previous night's battle, giving everyone their fair share, and now it was Dokja's turn. She explained that she had earned the most coins and would have felt guilty keeping them all to herself. Dokja couldn't help but think that he wouldn't have done the same if their roles were reversed, but Hee-won's actions reflected her character, one of fairness and camaraderie. As she lightly smacked him again, she teased him with her usual good-natured energy. Dokja grumbled about the pain, though it was clear the exchange had lightened the mood. The constellations were delighted as they observed the growing bond among these individuals. Dokja reflected quietly on the situation. The group had gained a significant number of coins after the intense battle from the previous night. As expected, Dokja himself had received the largest share, partly due to the constellation's interest in his actions. That morning, Baehyung, though reluctant, had handed over his share of the gifted coins. The total in Dokja's possession now stood at 23,050 coins, as indicated by the notification window that flickered before him. He couldn't help but think about how quickly the coins were spent. Just recently, he had invested a substantial amount, 4,400 coins, to increase his stats. Some were used to boost his mana, ensuring that he could continue utilizing the weapon aura of the White Star weapon. The process of spending coins felt far easier than earning them, a fact that weighed on him as he considered his next move. His strategy now involved increasing the level of Baehyung's channel to attract more constellations. If his plan worked, their interest would bring in additional coins. The group's next destination, the second main scenario, seemed like the perfect stage for this. As the group stepped into the tunnel that marked the second scenario, their visions were suddenly filled with a new message window. The objective was simple but foreboding: get through the tunnel and meet with the survivor of the first shelter zone. There was no time limit attached, but the clarity of the task left no room for doubt. out. The group paused briefly, processing the details. E1 questioned the meaning of a shelter zone, and Dokja explained calmly. Their next destination was Chungmuro Station, the primary shelter zone for this scenario. However, they hadn't traveled far before their path was blocked by a swarm of ground rats. The creatures came in waves, their numbers seemingly endless. The tunnel, dark and stifling, echoed with the sound of weapons striking flesh and the labored breaths of the group. Hee-won, covered in sweat and visibly fatigued, expressed her frustration aloud. 3 stations didn't sound far, but with the onslaught of monsters underground, the journey was anything but easy. After what felt like an eternity of fighting, Dokja decided it was time to rest. He noticed signs that other people had once been in this part of the tunnel, a few scattered belongings and marks of hastily abandoned supplies. He pointed this out to the group, suggesting they search for anything useful while catching their breath. Lee Hyun-sung voiced a suggestion to push forward without stopping. He reasoned that they only had one more station to go before reaching their destination. However, Dokja insisted on taking a rest, pointing out that they couldn't be certain they'd have the chance to rest once they arrived. His cautious nature urged him to prepare for the unexpected. The group advanced further, and at long last, a new platform came into view. The scene before them was grim and unsettling. The station they had just left, Yaksu, had been overrun with ground rats and littered with the corpses of the dead. But it wasn't just the rats that had caused the devastation. Observing the wounds on the bodies, Dokja deduced that the deaths weren't solely the result of fighting the creatures. This was undoubtedly the work of Junghyuk, a clear reminder that in this harsh new world, monsters weren't the only threats. Upon reaching the new platform, Lee Hyun-sung immediately offered to scout the area for anything useful. Dokja appreciated his practicality and reliability, silently acknowledging how invaluable Hyun-sung's military background was in situations like this. Meanwhile, Senga and Hee-won exchanged glances and seemed to agree on something. Dokja watched them with a hint of surprise as they prepared to head off together. When Hee-won noticed his expression, she questioned whether Dokja wanted to join them. Feeling slightly awkward, Dokja declined and encouraged the 2 women to go ahead without him. Hyun-sung, inspired by the idea of a break, announced his intention to visit the washroom, and Gil-young quickly followed suit. The 4 of them left in pairs, heading toward the facilities. Dokja remained behind, briefly watching their retreating figures before making a decision of his own. After some time, Hee-won looked around and noticed that Dokja was no longer with them. She questioned Hyun-sung, who casually informed her that Dokja had gone to check the area outside the tunnel. Alarm flashed across Hee-won's face as she remembered a critical detail. The air outside was still poisonous, and Dokja seemed to have ignored that fact entirely. Dokja moved swiftly through the suffocating poisonous fog, his eyes locked on his destination, Dongguk University. The toxic air burned his lungs, but his resolve remained unshaken. This was no impulsive act. Dokja hadn't suggested resting at Dongguk University Station merely because the others were fatigued. There was another purpose, one rooted in his deep knowledge of the world's unfolding scenarios. According to the details he remembered, the next step in their journey lay just beyond exit 6 of Dongguk University Station. As he pressed forward, his eyes caught sight of something in the distance. His pace quickened. There it was, the statue of the great monk Samyang-dang, a towering figure of stone standing in quiet vigilance. A message flickered in Dokja's vision that a constellation wearing a robe is looking forward to the next action you will take. Back in the station, the others were left to speculate about Dokja's sudden departure. Hee-won questioned his reasoning, and Lee Hyun-sung relayed that Dokja had gone on what he called a pilgrimage. Hee-won's disbelief was evident, but there was no immediate way to follow him. Meanwhile, Dokja reached the base of the statue. The area was eerily silent, devoid of any signs of life. He stood before the imposing figure, clasping his hands together in a gesture of reverence. Messages began to light up his vision that a constellation wearing a robe is delighted with your actions. 100 coins have been sponsored. Without hesitation, Dokja summoned the purest sword force, channeling the energy into the blade of faith. With precision and determination, he struck the statue of Samyang-dang. The blade carved through the stone with terrifying force, shattering the once magnificent monument into rubble. Another notification appeared in his vision. A constellation wearing a robe is stunned by your actions. From above, Bi-hyung let out a frantic bellow. His disbelief at Dokja's actions was almost tangible, yet Dokja remained indifferent to the chaos he had just unleashed. The destruction of the statue was a calculated move, one that would undoubtedly shift the trajectory of the scenario. Minutes later, Dokja re-entered Dongguk University Station. He sat down and ate a ground rat he had prepared earlier, replenishing his energy in silence. Bi-hyung was fuming, his voice echoing with frustration. Dokja had just destroyed the idol of a powerful constellation, a bold and reckless act that sent shockwaves through the unseen realm. Bi-hyung's anger was palpable as he questioned Dokja's sanity, warning him of the potential consequences. Destroying the idol wasn't a small matter. It was a direct affront to a constellation's dignity and power. The Dokebi's concerns about his channel's reputation being ruined only heightened the tension, but Dokja remained unfazed, dismissing Bi-hyung's outburst with casual indifference, more focused on the task at hand than the consequences of his actions. Inwardly, Dokja reflected on the importance of his decision. Every idol held the sealed power of the constellation it represented. Breaking the seal could grant skills or items associated with the constellation. The skill he sought was critical for their next destination, Chungmuro. While the usual method of unlocking an idol's power required patience, Dokja had chosen a shortcut, a method revealed in the novel, bypassing the prolonged process entirely. Bi-hyung continued to rant, accusing Dokja of jeopardizing his channel's standing, especially with a powerful constellation like the bald leader of the peasants' army. army, but Dokja retorted calmly, pointing out the hypocrisy in Baehyung's words. Messages flashed in Dokja's vision, one from the constellation wearing a robe, outraged by his actions, and another from the prisoner of the golden headband, amused by the chaos. Returning to the group, Dokja was met with curiosity and concern. Lee Hyun-sung greeted him with relief, while Hee-won, ever sharp-tongued, teased him about his so-called pilgrimage. Her questions about whether he had visited a cathedral or temple carried a mocking undertone, but Dokja remained composed. Instead of engaging in the banter, Dokja presented Hee-won with an item, the robe of the great monk Samyang. The robe, imbued with the power of justice and will, was a relic of immense significance. Hee-won examined it skeptically, remarking on its tattered appearance and doubting its value. Dokja then introduced the history of the monk, though Hee-won seemed unimpressed, dismissing the name as unfamiliar. Next, Dokja handed the praying beads of the monk to Senga. These beads carried a powerful effect, enhancing the recovery of mana. Senga's eyes lit up with recognition as she spoke of the great monk Samyang, recounting her knowledge of him from her studies of Korean history. She explained that he was a monk from the mid-Joseon dynasty who played a pivotal role in defending Korea during the Japanese invasions. She mentioned his victories at the battles of Nowonpyeong and Ugwandong. Dokja nodded, using her enthusiasm to build on his story. He explained that the items he had presented, the robe and the prayer beads, were imbued with the power of the great monk Samyang. Senga's initial skepticism gave way to curiosity as she examined the relics, and Hee-won's interest deepened as she held the robe, sensing the power within it. Dokja continued, spinning his tale with shameless confidence. He told them that he had offered a prayer at the monk's statue out of curiosity, and the items had seemingly fallen from the sky. His words were accompanied by a flicker of a message in his vision. Some constellations were impressed by his audacity. Building on the narrative, Dokja claimed that the relics had been sent down by the great monk himself, as a divine gesture to protect Korea in its time of need, much like he had done during the invasions centuries ago. His tone was calm, but carried a conviction that made his words difficult to doubt. The group listened intently, their expressions shifting from surprise to agreement. Senga nodded thoughtfully, considering the parallels between the past and their current situation. She suggested that the great monk Samyang could very well be a constellation himself, her voice carrying a sense of wonder. Lee Hyun-sung, ever the patriot, stiffened in respect, referring to the monk with reverence as though addressing a superior officer. Meanwhile, Baehyung watched the interaction in stunned silence, clearly disbelieving the brazenness of Dokja's fabrication. But as Dokja glanced at the system messages in his vision, he knew his gamble had worked. A new message revealed that the constellation wearing a robe had forgiven his earlier transgression. The same constellation had also revealed his nickname, the bald leader of the peasants' army. Internally, Dokja reflected on the nature of constellations. Their power and influence were closely tied to their fame and the reverence they received from others. Although his actions had been reckless, Dokja knew no constellation would pass up the opportunity to have their name praised and remembered. Hee-won briefly repeated the name of the great monk Samyang, committing it to memory as the group pressed forward. Dokja reminded everyone to prepare themselves. They were nearing Cheongmuro. Hee-won remarked on how the group had not encountered any ground rats so far, attributing their safe passage to Gil-young's ability to communicate with other species. Dokja acknowledged her observation but urged everyone to remain vigilant. He knew the path ahead wouldn't remain safe for long. Dokja's thoughts were fixed on their progress. They were about half a mile from Cheongmuro, and he anticipated trouble as the distance closed. His instincts proved correct when a notification rang in his vision. A new sub-scenario had appeared. The task was clear: escape the illusory prison within a 1-hour time limit. Before Dokja could fully process the scenario, he warned the group to stand back and keep their minds steady. As if on cue, a thick haze descended upon the tunnel, spreading rapidly. The fog blocked all visibility, creating a suffocating atmosphere. Within moments, the familiar surroundings were replaced with a warped, dreamlike distortion, as though the world itself had turned into a drug-induced nightmare. The party was separated by the overwhelming fog. Dokja tried to focus, but the distorted scenery disoriented him. He could no longer see his companions. His surroundings shifted unpredictably, as if the world was bending and twisting around him. Then, cutting through the eerie silence, he heard a voice. Faint, but unmistakable. It was a voice from his past, one he had buried deep within the recesses of his memory. The illusion intensified. The landscape dissolved entirely, and in its place appeared a figure that Dokja instinctively recognized. His chest tightened as he stared, unable to deny the reality being forced upon him. A bitter smile crept across his face as the weight of the vision pressed down on him. The illusory prison was merciless, dragging out the most deeply buried traumas and amplifying them to break the mind. Just as the illusion threatened to overwhelm him, a system message appeared before his eyes. His personal skill, Fourth Wall, had activated. The message indicated that the skill granted him immunity to the effects of the illusory prison. The fog receded in his mind, and the distorted visions began to fade. He realized that the illusory prison, a cruel space designed to unravel its victims by forcing them to confront their darkest memories and deepest fears. Even someone like Jung-hyuk, the regressor with countless lifetimes of experience, would struggle here. This scenario was designed to exploit the mind's weaknesses, making it one of the most perilous trials for anyone to face. Dokja called out to the group, urging them to remain calm and breathe steadily. However, the fog had already begun to take its toll. Lee Hyun-sung was disoriented, unable to focus, while Hee-won screamed incoherently, lashing out at phantoms only she could see. Gil-yong, trembling and clutching his ears, apologized repeatedly, his voice choked with fear. Dokja cursed under his breath, realizing he was too late to prevent the prison's effects from taking hold. Then, amidst the distorted chaos, Senga's figure emerged. The beads of Samyong dangling on her wrist glowed faintly, creating a small barrier of clarity around her. The relic was working, its power shielding her from the worst of the illusion. Without hesitation, Dokja rushed to Senga. He needed her help to dismantle the illusory prison. He asked her to cover him while he prepared to destroy the zone, and she nodded, steady despite the turmoil around them. Dokja's thoughts focused sharply on the skill he had obtained from the statue of the great monk. Destroying the idol had been a calculated risk, and now it was time to see if it would pay off. Activating his personal skill, Dispel Evil, Dokja unleashed its power. The energy surged outward, cutting through the oppressive fog. Slowly, the illusory prison began to unravel. As the haze retreated, his companions reappeared one by one. Lee Hyun-sung was on the ground, shouting an oath from his military training, his voice trembling with residual fear. Gil-yong was curled up, his knees pressed against his chest as he muttered about his mother. Senga rushed to comfort Gil-yong, her calm demeanor providing him with some reassurance. But Hee-won was not herself. Her eyes glowed a deep, unnatural red, a clear sign of demon slaying. She charged at the group with wild aggression, her blade swinging recklessly. The robe of the great monk Samyong had been given to her to counter such effects, but its protection had failed. Dokja reacted swiftly, stepping in to stop her rampage. A precise strike to the back of her neck rendered her unconscious, and she crumpled to the ground. He instructed Senga to tend to Hee-won, knowing she would need care to recover from the ordeal. A system message appeared in front of Dokja, confirming the successful completion of the sub-scenario. The notification announced that the group had earned a reward of 300 coins. However, Dokja knew better than to relax. The danger wasn't over yet. Unsheathing his sword, Dokja prepared for the next wave. As if summoned by the system's notification, monsters began to materialize. These creatures were a formless mass of liquid, their translucent, eerie shapes resembling ectoplasm. They were 8th grade specters, a ghost species. The specters were not particularly dangerous on their own, but they thrived in the environment of the illusory prison. Now that the prison had been dismantled, their strength was significantly reduced. Dokja moved swiftly, cutting down the creepy, amorphous creatures with precision. Their ethereal forms dissolved into nothingness under his blade. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-sung began to recover from his earlier trauma. His disoriented state faded, and he slowly regained his composure. He groaned as he stood up, confused but alert. Senga approached him, her concern evident. She explained what had transpired, detailing how the group had encountered monsters capable of creating an illusory prison. Hyun-sung listened in disbelief as Senga mentioned that the battle had primarily been handled by Dokja. His gratitude was apparent, though his usual stoic demeanor masked most of his emotions. He thanked Dokja sincerely, acknowledging the effort it must have taken to protect everyone. Dokja dismissed the thanks with a simple reply, his focus already shifting to the spoils of the battle. He picked up a shimmering object from the remains of one of the specters, a rare spirit stone. This valuable item, known as a specter spirit stone, could only be obtained from the remains of these ghostly beings. Dokja inspected it briefly before tucking it away for future use. Gil-yong stirred from his position on the ground, his small form trembling slightly as he woke. Senga quickly turned her attention to him, asking if he needed rest. Gil-yong, however, shook his head, rubbing his temples and murmuring that his head hurt. Dokja gently stroked Gil-yong's hair. He couldn't help but wonder if Gil-yong had endured the most trauma among them. The boy clung to Dokja tightly, his small frame trembling as he sought comfort in the only anchor he had in this harsh world. Senga broke the silence, her voice carrying a hint of relief. She noted that they seemed to be nearing their destination. In the distance, a pale light flickered, cutting through the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Their group was battered and far from ready for another confrontation. He questioned if it was safe for them to proceed, weighing the risks of moving forward against the dangers of lingering in the tunnel. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice that echoed through the dimly lit space. The group turned toward the sound, startled. A blade glinted in the darkness, its presence a warning rather than a direct threat. A girl emerged from the shadows, her posture tense and commanding. She demanded to know who they were and what they were doing in the area. As she stepped closer, the girl's identity became apparent to Senga. Her realization sparked recognition. This was Lee Ji-hae, the sole survivor of Taepung Girls High School. Dokja observed her carefully, his mind already piecing together her significance. He knew her well from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Ji-hae wasn't just any survivor, she was a pivotal character in the story. Ji-hae questioned the group further, her blade flashing as she emphasized her authority. Her disbelief was clear. How could they have defeated the specters when only her master supposedly knew the method? Dokja maintained his calm, silently analyzing her as she spoke. He activated his character profile skill to confirm her details. She was 17 years old, supported by the god of naval warfare, and bore the attribute Scarred Sword Demon. Everything about her aligned with the story. Dokja's thoughts lingered on her importance. She was the reason Jung-yak would later prioritize reaching Cheongmuro. Her role in the naval battle to come was crucial, and Dokja couldn't afford to lose her trust or cooperation. Without further hesitation, Ji-hae gestured for them to follow. As the group complied, a system message appeared before Dokja. Dakja. The notification confirmed that the main scenario, the encounter, had been successfully completed. Dakja and his companions finally arrived at Chungmuro, a place that seemed to pulse with tension. They followed Lee Jae through the chaotic streets, and as they entered the area, Senga took in the scene. Her eyes settled on the shattered screen door of the platform, the damage signaling the unrest that had gripped the world. Dakja, meanwhile, observed the situation closely. The number of Dokkaebi channels had multiplied, a sign that the scenario was becoming more large-scale. He suspected that Baekhyun must be struggling with the overwhelming influx of activity. As they moved through the area, a group of middle-aged men took notice of them. One of them, his tone casual, greeted them, referring to Lee Jae as the Little Samurai. Dakja's thoughts immediately went to Jihei's supporting constellation, a being far more formidable than the man realized. If only he knew who backed her, he would regret that comment. Jihei, unfazed by the remark, simply sniffed and frowned, as if already weary of the man's presence. Another man in the group, with a grin, joked about the state of the world, commenting that there wasn't much else to do when everything had fallen apart. Then, one of them addressed Senga, asking if she had come from Dongguk University, impressed by her appearance. He mentioned that he knew of a cheap room and asked if she was interested. Senga, confused and a little taken aback, asked for clarification. The man, realizing her lack of understanding, laughed even harder, his words implying the harsh realities of the new world. But Jihei, growing irritated, stepped in before the conversation could go further. She ordered the men to stop pestering the newcomers and to get upstairs. The men, not wanting to provoke Jihei further, shrugged and began to move away. One of them muttered that the newcomers would have to learn the ways of the world eventually, but Jihei made it clear that if they valued their lives, they would heed her words. The men disappeared into the transit line, and Jihei finally sheathed her sword. She turned to Dakja, her expression unreadable. She had done her part, but now it was his turn. She didn't want to babysit them any longer. Dakja wondered, with a touch of exasperation, if it would truly be so difficult for her to display just a bit more courtesy. As Jihei turned to walk away, her indifference was clear. However, Dakja stopped her, asking about Junghyuk. The moment his words reached Jihei, a wave of suspicion washed over her, causing her to turn back with a guarded look in her eyes. She questioned him of his identity. Dakja, observing her reaction, quickly pieced together the situation. It was clear to him that Junghyuk had already influenced her significantly. Considering the immense power of the god of naval warfare, Dakja understood why Junghyuk would have sought someone like Jihei, and if he were in Junghyuk's position, he would have sought out someone like Jihei as well. Dakja identified himself as someone who had survived alongside Junghyuk, hoping this would make her drop her guard, but Jihei's expression remained skeptical. Her sharp gaze lingered on Dakja, and she seemed unwilling to trust his words. Dakja reassured her that Junghyuk would recognize him if she relayed his name, but her response did little to ease his concern. She revealed that Master wasn't present at the moment. Hearing her call Junghyuk Master sparked unease in Dakja. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of relationship had developed between them. Jihei turned to a nearby boy, instructing him to watch Dakja and the group while she went to find Junghyuk. The boy hesitated, nervously asking who they were. Jihei admitted she didn't know, only that they claimed to be Master's friends. The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of Junghyuk, his nervousness replaced by excitement. He asked if they were truly Junghyuk's friends, and Dakja, with a calm assurance, confirmed it, leaving the boy both eager and curious as Jihei walked away. The boy enthusiastically explained how Junghyuk had become the leader of their group. His story was long-winded, and Dakja and the others began yawning from the monotony. The boy seemed disappointed, asking if they were even paying attention. Dakja, with a lack of enthusiasm, summarized that Junghyuk had appeared 3 days ago, saved him and Lee Jihei from a pack of monsters, and earned their loyalty. This, he pointed out, was the essence of the story. Dakja reflected inwardly, recognizing that the boy didn't realize Junghyuk's actions weren't out of kindness, but rather because he happened to be near Jihei at the time. Meanwhile, Hyunsong asked practical questions about their food supply. The boy admitted that most of the group relied on Jihei to hunt monsters, which Junghyuk would then cook. Hyunsong meticulously took notes, much to Dakja's confusion. When asked about drinking water, the boy explained that they traded food and coins with a group called the Landlord Coalition. This mention piqued Dakja's interest. As they were discussing, the middle-aged men from earlier returned, their attention once again on the group. They asked if the newcomers were looking for rooms. The boy quickly responded that they were only heading upstairs to use the bathroom. The men seemed disappointed but warned them to be cautious. Leaving the earlier encounter behind, Dakja and his companions continued onward. As they walked, Dakja recalled details about the Chungmuro Landlord Coalition, from 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. He knew their leader held control over all of Chungmuro and was likely one of the notorious 10 evils. This knowledge made him wary of the challenges ahead. Senga, noticing peculiar terms, asked about the rooms the men had mentioned earlier. The boy explained that the so-called rooms referred to designated green zones, areas critical to survival in this scenario. These zones, controlled mainly by the Landlord Coalition, offered a semblance of order amidst the chaos. Other groups existed, but the coalition maintained a dominant monopoly over the lower levels. Curious about Junghyuk's role, Dokja inquired whether he had done anything to challenge the coalition. The boy admitted that Junghyuk had saved them but left them to fend for themselves afterward. This didn't surprise Dokja, who knew Junghyuk's nature well. The man's overwhelming power naturally attracted followers, but it was clear he hadn't asked for their loyalty. Dokja suspected Junghyuk's actions in this round were deviating from the original storyline, and he resolved to uncover what was different this time. Hyunsung's attention shifted to a crowd gathered further down the passage. The boy pointed out that the bathroom lay just beyond the group. As they approached the last passage, their pace slowed. Dozens of people were packed into the narrow space, forming a bottleneck that hinted at some form of tension or conflict ahead. The crowd in the passage was chaotic. Desperate voices pleaded with a figure named Pildu, begging to be allowed back into the green zone. They promised coins and vowed to follow his rules if he let them stay for just one more night. The man, unmoved, ordered them to stand back, his presence exuding control over the situation. Dokja carefully observed the scene, suspecting the presence of one of the 10 evils among the Landlord Coalition members. However, the crowded and chaotic scene made it difficult to identify anyone specific. Amid the commotion, Gilyong slipped through the crowd. Dokja called out to him, but it was too late. Someone pushed Gilyong, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. A system message immediately appeared, warning that Gilyong had trespassed on private property. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Members of the Landlord Coalition near the front turned their attention to Gilyong. One of them approached, eyeing the boy with disdain. The man mocked Gilyong, asking if he even knew where he was. The situation grew tense as the crowd screamed and retreated in panic. Fear rippled through them as they whispered warnings, their reactions hinting at the danger ahead. Gilyong, confused, asked if this was the way to the bathroom. The man smirked, confirming it had once been, but now it was controlled territory. With a patronizing tone, the man stroked Gilyong's head and remarked that trespassing was a mistake. He decided to teach the boy a valuable life lesson. Suddenly, a mechanical whirring sound filled the air. Miniature turrets resembling Gatling guns emerged from the ground, their presence signaling imminent danger. The man's voice was cold and commanding as he demanded payment. A system notification announced that Pildugong's Stigma, militarized zone level 3, had been activated. It demanded a payment of 500 coins for trespassing. The warning was clear. All turrets in the area would open fire if the payment was not made. Pildu's henchmen stared down at Gilyong, his voice cold and demanding. The loaded turrets, menacing and ready to fire, were all trained on the boy. Dokja immediately stepped forward, instructing Senga to look after Heewon. He positioned himself protectively behind Gilyong, drawing the henchman's attention. The man's gaze shifted to Dokja, assuming he was the boy's guardian. With a smirk, he demanded the payment from Dokja instead. Dokja silently noted the absurdity of demanding such a high amount for merely stepping on land. He found it intriguing how Junghyuk had allowed this kind of corruption to fester. Dokja recognized the name Pildugong, known in TWSA as the Armament Lord of Chungmuro, one of the infamous 10 evils. Each round of Junghyuk's regression altered the appearance and ranks of the 10 evils, but their notorious roles as antagonists remained constant. Pildu's dominion over this territory was evident from the size of his green zone, which far exceeded that of others. Addressing the henchmen, Dokja questioned why they were collecting coins in a public facility like Chungmuro Station. The man laughed, explaining that the station had ceased to be a public space 8 days ago. Now it was under their control. Without hesitation, Dokja agreed to pay, but insisted on giving the coins directly to Pildugong. His declaration caught the man off guard. Dokja calmly pointed out that the person in front of him wasn't Pildugong. Inwardly, Dokja assessed the situation. These men were former landlords of Chungmuro, now reduced to being Pildugong's enforcers. Together they formed the Landlord Coalition, serving their leader's ruthless agenda. The man standing before Dokja was taken aback, confused by Dokja's bold demand. Dokja's gaze remained steady as he addressed Pildugong directly, pushing past the henchman's confusion. Suddenly, a message popped up, notifying that Dokja had trespassed on private property. The turrets aimed at him, but Dokja didn't flinch. He called out again, louder this time. From behind a bench stacked with supplies, a middle-aged man, reading a magazine, eyed Dokja coldly. The atmosphere grew tense. This was Pildugong, the Armament Lord. Pildu warned Dokja to stop, threatening him with deadly consequences if he took another step forward. Dokja's mind raced. Pildu's sharpness was clear, and with his 2 personal attributes and high mana level, it was no wonder he was one of the 10 evils. Dokja considered his options. Pildu wasn't just a mindless thug, he was a formidable opponent. Should he negotiate, or was it better to deal with him now? Pildu's smile widened as his troops began to surround Lee Hyun-song. Quick response from Pildu's men made it clear they were prepared for any conflict. Dokja chuckled, raised both hands in a calm gesture, attempting to ease the tension. To him, it was simply the way things worked. Tenants needed to deal with the landlord. Pildu stared at Dokja, a smirk playing on his lips as he posed the question. He had no interest in making room for outsiders in his green zone. When Dokja requested a space for himself and his companions, Pildu refused outright, stating the price was steep, 500 coins per person per day. Dokja's mind boiled with disdain for Pildu's greed. He had hoped for a better response, but Pildu was typical of the landlords in this twisted world. With no other choice, Dokja made a proposal. He couldn't afford the price, but he had something else to offer: intel about Junghyuk. The mention of Junghyuk caught the attention of Pildu's gang. They were clearly unsettled, their eyes narrowed, suspicion rising as they muttered among themselves. Junghyuk's name was not one to be taken lightly, especially especially among the landlord coalition. Dokja's strategy was paying off. He had hit the bullseye. In the original story, Jung-hyuk was in a fierce conflict with the coalition, and Dokja wondered what he could be up to now. Pildu's expression darkened, his gaze turning to Dokja like a predator eyeing its prey. The question came, sharp and threatening. How did he know Jung-hyuk? Dokja remained unfazed, offering a simple explanation. He claimed to have been through life and death experiences with Jung-hyuk, making him a close companion. Pildu's skepticism was clear, but Dokja didn't need him to believe it just to make a deal. Pildu wasn't easily fooled, however. He made it clear that he had been burned by people like Dokja before, those who skipped out on payments after receiving favors. Dokja saw the opening, ready to walk away, letting the tension build. Pildu, unable to resist, called out to stop him. The trap had been set, and Dokja smiled inwardly, but it wasn't about the trap he had set, it was about the money. As Pildu demanded payment, Dokja pressed him, feigning confusion over the amount. Pildu quickly raised the price, changing it to 1,000 coins for both him and the child with him. Dokja cursed inwardly. The situation had taken a turn for the worse, and it all boiled down to money. Pildu was a ruthless bastard, and even the Dokkaebi hadn't scammed him this badly. The greedy landlord had raised the price to an absurd level, showing no remorse. Dokja told Pildu the price was too steep, but Pildu simply grinned, clearly enjoying the confrontation. He issued a final warning, his intentions clear. He was ready to end things. The turret's click was followed by a blazing shot of fire, aiming straight at Dokja. Senga screamed his name in fear, but Hyunsong acted quickly, pushing Gil-young aside and urging everyone to run toward the crowd. The turret's fire was relentless, and as the shot neared, Dokja braced himself for the impact. But just as the fire was about to strike, a shield materialized in front of him. Hyunsong had stepped in, gripping the shield tightly, though it was clear he couldn't hold it for long. Dokja called out to Hyunsong. Hyunsong responded, his voice strained, knowing he wouldn't be able to hold the defense much longer. Dokja's mind raced as he assessed the situation. Hee-won was still unconscious, and if they fought here, someone would likely end up dead. It was clear there was nothing to gain from continuing this fight. He called out to Pildu, trying to negotiate. He warned Pildu that attacking now would be a fatal mistake. Pildu's response was cold, questioning why he should heed Dokja's advice. Dokja delivered his warning with calm conviction. If Pildu decided to fight, he wouldn't leave this place alive. Pildu's expression hardened, and though he didn't say anything, he could sense something had shifted. The presence of someone approaching was undeniable, and Dokja noticed it too. The moment was thick with tension as Pildu's gang began to grow uneasy. Jihei shouted with urgency as she pointed at Dokja, recognizing him as the one who claimed to be a companion. Her words echoed through the tense air, and Dokja saw a figure descending the escalator, none other than Jung-hyuk. A notification appeared in Dokja's mind, reinforcing the unease lingering in Jung-hyuk's thoughts. Despite the gravity of the moment, Dokja couldn't help but smile. He hadn't expected to feel relief at seeing Jung-hyuk again, but here he was. Lee Jihei and Gong Pildu stared at the pair, unable to hide their shock. They had never imagined that Dokja, of all people, would be aligned with Jung-hyuk. It was a moment that left both of them momentarily speechless. Caught in disbelief, Dokja couldn't resist speaking up. He greeted Jung-hyuk casually, but the meaning behind them was clear. Dokja noticed the subtle tension in Jung-hyuk's posture, the way his gaze flickered briefly with confusion. Jung-hyuk was stunned and confused as he stared at him. Dokja's tone shifted as he addressed the stunned onlookers. He turned to Jung-hyuk, asking for his help in proving their bond to Pildu and his gang inside. Dokja knew Jung-hyuk well. Despite his cold and ruthless demeanor, he kept his promises. He could kill without hesitation, but when it came to agreements, he never broke his word, especially now with the eyes of many constellations watching their every move. Dokja could sense their anticipation, messages flashing across his vision. A few constellations, including the demon-like Judge of Fire, were observing Jung-hyuk's loyalty. Jung-hyuk hesitated. He tried to speak, but Dokja, never one to leave things unspoken, added a small but important request. He asked if Jung-hyuk could also make sure they were allowed to use the toilet, a request that seemed almost absurd in the current situation. The onlookers were stunned as he talked over Jung-hyuk. Finally, Jung-hyuk made his move. He drew his blade, a silent decision that spoke volumes. Pildu, sensing the imminent danger, finally relented. He didn't want to fight, and with the blade now pointed at him, he chose to let Dokja and his companions go for the time being, unwilling to escalate things further. Dokja couldn't help but appreciate the turn of events. He turned to Jung-hyuk, a lighthearted grin on his face, acknowledging how fortunate he was to have such a powerful ally by his side. Jung-hyuk's response was brief, acknowledging that Dokja had somehow managed to stay alive this long. Dokja, always quick with a quip, teased Jung-hyuk, wondering if the great hero had wanted him dead. Jung-hyuk's response, as blunt and indifferent as ever, made it clear that to him, Dokja's survival wasn't much of a concern. Dokja's mind churned with irritation as he looked at Jung-hyuk. The thought of socking him square in the jaw was tempting, but the reality of Jung-hyuk's overwhelming stats quickly grounded him. Despite the frustration, Dokja knew better than to act on impulse. Deciding to gather more information, Dokja activated his personal skill to access Jung-hyuk's character profile. With the full version now available, the details startled him. The man standing before him seemed even more formidable than he had been during his third regression in 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. As Jung-hyuk's cold voice cut through the air, questioning Dokja's lingering gaze, Dokja's thoughts deepened. He wondered why Jung-hyuk, despite his immense strength, seemed to be taking even greater risks than usual. There was an underlying scheme, an agenda that didn't align with the Jung-hyuk he had read about about in the novel. What exactly was this regressor plotting in his third round? Jung-hyuk repeated his question, his tone sharp and impatient. Dokja deflected the tension with a sarcastic remark, masking his growing unease. As Jung-hyuk assessed Dokja, his thoughts betrayed a mixture of recognition and irritation. To him, Dokja seemed as determined as ever, but there was something about the man's demeanor that was starting to wear thin. A fleeting thought crossed Jung-hyuk's mind that should he just kill this bothersome companion? Dokja, privy to these dangerous musings thanks to his ability to read Jung-hyuk's thoughts, silently cursed the regressor's unpredictable nature. Still, he maintained his outward composure, quipping with forced lightness. A system message interrupted the interaction, announcing the disappointment of the constellation, prisoner of the golden headband. Dokja brushed it aside, but the exchange only grew more strained. Jung-hyuk shifted the conversation, commenting on Dokja's new companions. Another message appeared before Dokja, revealing that Jung-hyuk too was disappointed in him. The sudden judgment caught Dokja off guard, and his confusion deepened. Why was Jung-hyuk dissatisfied? What had he done wrong? Jung-hyuk activated his skill, Eye of the Sage at level 8, and scrutinized Dokja's companions. His thoughts turned to Lee Hyunsong, whom he had entrusted to Dokja. Hyunsong, despite his potential, appeared far weaker than Jung-hyuk had expected. The regressor's disappointment grew. To Jung-hyuk, it was clear that Hyunsong would have been stronger had he remained by his side instead of accompanying Dokja. Dokja, still reading Jung-hyuk's thoughts, felt the weight of the comparison. He acknowledged the truth in Jung-hyuk's assessment. Hyunsong might indeed have reached greater heights under Jung-hyuk's guidance. Yet Dokja reminded himself of his own role in this narrative. He wasn't a regressor or a hero. He was an ordinary reader who just happened to know the future. At that moment, Jung-hyuk's gaze froze as he scanned the surroundings. For the first time, a hint of confusion flickered in his usually composed eyes. Dokja noticed the shift and tried to discern who had caught Jung-hyuk's attention. He considered the possibilities but couldn't be sure. We were all standing close together, making it difficult to tell. Dokja felt the urge to ask but hesitated. Asking directly would reveal that he was reading Jung-hyuk's thoughts, something he wanted to avoid. He-1 broke the silence with sharpness, her expression defiant as she addressed Jung-hyuk. Her reaction drew the regressor's attention away, and Dokja silently praised her for stepping in at the perfect moment. However, he knew that Jung-hyuk's inner turmoil wasn't over. The regressor's thoughts briefly flickered toward violence, but Dokja quickly interjected to redirect the conversation, turning the focus elsewhere. Dokja asked Jung-hyuk why he was letting Pil-dugong remain unchecked. Jung-hyuk's response was curt, stating that a prophet should already know the answer. Dokja admitted he didn't know everything, and a notification confirmed that Jung-hyuk had activated his lie detection skill. The result indicated that Dokja was telling the truth. Jung-hyuk acknowledged the limits of Dokja's knowledge, explaining that he needed Pil-dugong alive. Dokja pieced together the reasoning, recognizing that Pil-dugong's role was critical for a future scenario. However, Dokja pointed out a flaw in Jung-hyuk's approach. While Pil-dugong might be necessary, his gang was not. It wasn't like Jung-hyuk to allow unnecessary chaos, yet he had left Pildu's group unchecked. Dokja pressed him further, questioning why he hadn't handled the situation more decisively. Jung-hyuk paused for a moment, clearly irritated by the persistent questioning. The tension between them grew palpable, but instead of answering directly, Jung-hyuk dismissed Dokja's concerns as beneath him. He turned to leave, declaring that he was too busy for such trivial matters. Dokja's frustration boiled over as he called after Jung-hyuk, trying to make him understand the stakes. If Jung-hyuk continued to ignore the situation, the people in Chungmuro would pay the price. But Jung-hyuk remained unmoved, coldly stating that it didn't concern him. His indifference struck a nerve, and Dokja clenched his fists tightly, barely containing his anger. For a fleeting moment, Dokja considered confronting Jung-hyuk physically, even asking himself if he could land a punch on the regressor. Jung-hyuk, as if sensing the thought, turned back with a calm yet challenging expression. The silent tension between them was almost unbearable, but Dokja knew better than to act on impulse. Without another word, Jung-hyuk signaled to Lee Jae, and the two began walking away, leaving Dokja standing there with unresolved frustration. As they disappeared into the distance, a system notification appeared, marking the countdown that only 1 hour and 30 minutes remained until the third scenario would begin. Dokja considered the situation, his thoughts swirling with irritation and resolve. The third scenario was set to last exactly 1 week, and Jung-hyuk undoubtedly had his own plans for that time. Whatever the regressor was plotting, it was something that could tip the scales in his favor. Dokja couldn't allow it to happen, yet he felt a twinge of resentment. Jung-hyuk, that insufferable bastard, always seemed several steps ahead. Hee-won's voice interrupted his train of thought. She mentioned that Dokja seemed a little scared while speaking to Jung-hyuk earlier. Dokja attempted to brush it off, laughing awkwardly and denying her claim, but his attention quickly shifted to a more pressing matter, Pil-dugong and his gang. They were a problem that needed solving. From what Dokja knew, Pildu and his followers had claimed ownership of public spaces, charging people rent to pass through or stay. Their greed and exploitation couldn't go unchecked. However, Pil-dugong wasn't just a nuisance. He was also necessary. To complete the third scenario, the group would need Pildu's cooperation, but if he refused to help, it could jeopardize everything. Dokja's frustration grew as he mulled over the situation. Hee-won, on the other hand, had no patience for diplomacy. She boldly declared her intention to confront Pildu head-on, certain they could win if they joined forces. Dokja, observing her determination, dismissed the idea outright. Direct confrontation wouldn't work. His gaze shifted to her weapon, realizing that it wouldn't be enough against Pildu's defenses. The group needed better equipment if they were to face future challenges. challenges. Hee-won, undeterred, activated her personal skill, the Time of Judgment. Her confidence faltered as the skill refused to activate. A notification appeared, informing them that the constellations of the Pure Good alignment remained silent and her request for assistance had been denied. The skill had been cancelled. Confusion filled Hee-won's face. She wondered aloud why her skill had failed. To her, Pildugong and his gang were undoubtedly evil. Their exploitative behavior made them villains in her eyes. Yet the skill refused to acknowledge them as such. Dokja knew the reason. The Time of Judgment skill, tied to her Judge of Evil attribute, was immensely powerful, capable of turning the tide of any battle. But it had a significant limitation. It only worked on individuals who were deemed evil by universal standards. From their perspective, Pildu and his gang were oppressors, but the skill didn't recognize them as such. This disparity left Hee-won visibly frustrated, but Dokja, calm as always, explained the situation. The standards of justice upheld by the constellations often differed from those of humans. Justice was not an absolute concept. It was something defined by the majority's agreement. Hee-won, shaken by this revelation, questioned how such a thing could be true. Dokja reassured her that there might still be a way to deal with Pildugong. Although it would be far from easy, Pildugong's most dangerous asset was his stigma, militarized zone, a defensive skill that allowed him to dominate within a designated area. The turrets within his zone would protect him from any threat, but outside this area, his strength would diminish significantly. The key to defeating him lay in luring him out of this safe zone. However, this was easier said than done. Pildugong had turned his domain into an impenetrable fortress. With blankets, food, and even a makeshift toilet, he had prepared himself for a prolonged standoff. He was effectively staging a sit-in within the largest room in Cheongmuro, refusing to leave the space he controlled. As Dokja pondered their next move, a notification interrupted their discussion, announcing that only 1 hour remained until the activation of the third scenario. The group stood, their minds set on securing a strategy, but their movement caused a ripple of unease among the other survivors in the station. The people nearby flinched, their fear palpable. A man clutching a knife stood guard over a small single-person room on the platform. His eyes darted nervously as he tried to protect his claimed space. The tension in the air was suffocating, but Dokja shifted his focus to more immediate concerns. Pildugong could wait. For now, they needed to find their own safe place. A room where they could survive the coming trials. Suddenly, Bahyong appeared, his lively and mocking tone cutting through the tension. The Dokebi grinned, clearly relishing the scene before him. With a snap of his fingers, glowing message windows materialized in front of every survivor. The main scenario was unveiled. Green Zone. The objective was clear. Occupy a green zone within the station and survive the monsters that would emerge each night at midnight. The scenario would last for 7 days, and the survivors' success would hinge on their ability to secure and defend a safe area. Bahyong addressed the survivors with a mischievous grin, his voice loud and clear. The rules were simple. Occupy a green zone before anyone else or risk losing everything. Stealing another person's green zone was fair game too. The Dokebi's warning was ominous. Anyone left without a green zone by midnight would face dire consequences. With a mocking farewell, Bahyong wished them luck before vanishing. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. Expressions hardened and fear gave way to desperation. Screams echoed across the station, each voice tinged with terror and resolve. Chaos erupted as people turned on each other, shouting and striking without hesitation. One man screamed, his voice cracking as he swung his weapon. This wasn't just a story anymore. The struggle was real, and everyone knew it. Amidst the growing violence, Senga's voice trembled as she asked if they would have to fight like the others. Dokja reassured her, his tone calm and calculated. Fighting wasn't necessary. Not yet. All they needed was to find a green zone large enough to accommodate them. Dokja's thoughts raced. Green zones came in varying sizes, with some barely large enough for one person and others, like Pildugong's, capable of holding up to 70. Finding one suitable for their group would be a challenge, especially with the chaos spreading rapidly. Taking charge, Dokja proposed they split up to search for a room. He paired Senga with Lee Hyunsong and Hee-won with Gil-yong, assigning each pair to different areas of the station. As for himself, Dokja chose to search alone. They agreed to regroup 20 minutes before the scenario began if no one found anything. The group scattered quickly, each heading to their assigned location. Hee-won and Gil-yong descended to the B2 level, while Senga and Lee Hyunsong moved toward B3. Dokja stood still for a moment, watching them leave before pulling out his smartphone. Opening 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, Dokja's eyes scanned the familiar text, and a single line confirmed his worst fear. There were no rooms left in Cheongmuro. His suspicions were correct. Finding a green zone wasn't an option anymore. This left only one path forward, a path Dokja was hesitant to take. Could they truly bring themselves to take innocent lives to secure their survival? His companions were good people. Would they be able to make such a choice if it came to that? The platform on line 3 was already drenched in blood. The chaos left dozens dead or injured as desperate survivors fought over the single remaining green zone. With no strong individuals present, even the weak refused to back down, clawing and striking at one another with whatever weapons they could find. The chilling cry of survival drowning out reason and morality. Dokja observed the chaos unfolding around him with a calm exterior, his mind focused elsewhere. Amid the turmoil, a message appeared in his vision, detached and indifferent. It reminded him there were only 30 minutes remaining before the third scenario would begin. Time was ticking, but Dokja didn't flinch. Instead, he immersed himself in reading 3 ways to survive the apocalypse, a lifeline in a world teetering on destruction. As he read, Bahyong, overseeing the scenario, interrupted his concentration. situation. The dokebi's frustrated voice carried a mix of disbelief and irritation, questioning Dokja's calm demeanor in such a critical moment. Meanwhile, the voices of the constellations echoed around him, their dissatisfaction palpable. The constellation Prisoner of the Golden Headband expressed curiosity about Dokja's seemingly odd behavior, their tone laced with frustration. Dokja instinctively turned off his smartphone, shielding its contents from prying eyes. He knew it wouldn't serve him well if Baehyung or the constellations discovered his secret, that he was a reader of 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. The knowledge he possessed was his greatest advantage, and it needed to remain hidden. Baehyung continued to berate Dokja, questioning why he appeared to be staring at nothing. Dokja turned his phone back on and nonchalantly showed it to the dokebi, pretending to comply. Baehyung's exasperation deepened, as if he couldn't comprehend Dokja's lack of urgency. To the dokebi, it seemed like Dokja was brainstorming without purpose. A dangerous choice in the middle of such chaos. But Dokja's thoughts were elsewhere. Analyzing the situation with precision, he realized that neither the constellations nor the dokebi, who wielded immense administrative power, could see what was displayed on his screen. If they could, they would have already called attention to it. This revelation made him question the source of his unique advantage. Just how powerful was the author who had sent him this novel? The implications were staggering. His train of thought was interrupted by a blood-curdling scream, piercing through the commotion like a final note of despair. It marked the end of the struggle. The owner of the room on platform line 3 had finally been determined. The boy looked at Dokja, bewildered and alarmed, his body language screaming a warning not to come any closer. Dokja, unfazed, calmly reassured him that he had no intention of taking his spot. Lee Jihei, standing nearby, watched the exchange with a sharp grin, her tone laced with amusement. She remarked on how laid back Dokja seemed, almost as if he had no desire to survive. Dokja, matching her energy, noted that she seemed just as relaxed as he was, a comment that only made her smile grow wider. Jihei confidently stated that no one dared approach her room, fully aware of the consequences if they did. Her reputation for strength was well established, and her confidence was not misplaced. Dokja, observing her demeanor, reflected silently. The only individuals capable of challenging someone like Jihei were the members of the Landlord Coalition, or even more likely, Junghyuk himself. Shifting her tone slightly, Jihei admitted she didn't want Dokja to die, surprising him with a backhanded compliment about how he had stood up to her master earlier. Dokja, maintaining his calm exterior, reassured her that he had no intention of dying. He added almost casually that finding a room wasn't necessary to survive the night. Jihei's curiosity deepened. She questioned whether Dokja was truly that strong, even going so far as to compare him to her master. Before Dokja could respond, Junghyuk appeared behind Jihei, his presence commanding the scene effortlessly. Without hesitation, he instructed Jihei to return to her room. Her demeanor changed instantly, her obedience to Junghyuk unwavering as she left without protest. Once she was gone, Junghyuk turned his attention to Dokja. He warned him that facing the monsters without proper preparation would only lead to his death, and the deaths of his companions. Dokja, however, remained unshaken. He simply stated that they would see how things played out, refusing to concede to Junghyuk's grim prediction. Junghyuk, perhaps seeing no point in continuing the discussion, left without another word. Shortly after, Dokja's companions regrouped, Hee-won's frustration boiling over as she ranted about the exorbitant demand of 2,000 coins per night for a room. Her fiery temper flared as she cursed the greed of those controlling the rooms, expressing her anger at their audacity. Sangha followed, quieter but clearly disheartened, admitting they hadn't been able to secure any shelter. Hyunsong, ever practical, directed his question to Dokja, seeking any useful information he might have discovered. Dokja, maintaining his usual calm, admitted that he hadn't found anything either. Dokja calmly explained that they had 2 options moving forward. The first option, he began, was the easier path, one where they could all survive. The idea immediately caught the attention of Hee-won, who, with a tone of skepticism, remarked that in such situations, people often ended up choosing the second option instead. She asked what the other option was. Without hesitation, Dokja elaborated. The second option, he stated, would be much more difficult, and there was a real risk that one of them might not make it through. Lee Hyunsong, pragmatic as always, suggested that if the first option guaranteed survival for everyone, then it was the one they should choose. Hee-won nodded in agreement, but Sangha, more cautious, asked Dokja to explain both options first. Dokja pointed toward a nearby room occupied by another group. He explained that the first option involved taking over that room. The space could house 5 people, and the stats of those inside weren't particularly high. A few of them would be enough to overpower the occupants. Hee-won's frustration flared at this suggestion. She interrupted him, alarmed, questioning if Dokja was seriously proposing what she thought he was. Dokja confirmed without hesitation. The first option was to kill the occupants of the room and claim it as their own. Gil-yong, undeterred by the gravity of the suggestion, boldly declared that he would go along with the plan if Dokja was willing to do it. The boy's determination unsettled Sangha, who quickly tried to dissuade him. Hee-won, visibly frustrated, admitted that the thought had crossed their minds before. She acknowledged the grim reality of their situation, but pushed back against the idea. Dokja reasoned that the current occupants of the room had likely taken it by killing others. If their group didn't adopt a similar approach, they wouldn't survive the scenarios to come. However, Hee-won's voice grew firm as she addressed him. She revealed that she had already killed many at Gumho Station, a decision she had made on her own and didn't didn't regret, but she emphasized that taking a life didn't mean she enjoyed it. She didn't want to become a monster. Hyunsung, maintaining his calm demeanor, asked Dokja to explain the second option in detail. Dokja took a moment, closing his eyes briefly before deciding. He informed the group that they would proceed with the second option. Hee-won, still on edge, reacted immediately, expressing her frustration. She accused Dokja of testing them unnecessarily. Dokja, however, assured her that testing them wasn't his intention. Turning to Gil-young, he spoke gently, saying he would have respected the boy's choice, no matter which path he decided on. With a reassuring gesture, Dokja stroked Gil-young's hair, signaling his support. With the decision finalized, Dokja addressed the group. Now that everyone had agreed on the second option, he stressed that they had to follow his instructions without question. He emphasized the importance of trusting him, no matter how strange his plan seemed. If they failed to follow his guidance, it would mean certain death for all of them. As the countdown ticked away, only 5 minutes remained before the main scenario was set to begin. Dokja began explaining the plan. He predicted that the monsters would spawn in a specific direction. Once unleashed, they would rampage through the station, heading toward the ground floor. Fighting them from their current location would be impossible, as it would only result in their deaths. Instead, Dokja proposed splitting up. He instructed Hyunsung, Senga, and Hee-won to trust him completely and follow his plan precisely. When the monsters spawned, Dokja told them they needed to run directly toward the creatures. This declaration startled Hee-won, who questioned whether Dokja meant for them to head straight into danger instead of fleeing toward the safer area of Dongguk University Station. Dokja confirmed this, emphasizing the importance of timing. They had to begin running only after the monsters appeared. Picking up a stone, Dokja demonstrated the start of his plan. He threw the stone at the barrier, blocking the tunnel, causing it to crackle and vanish, clearing the path. Without hesitation, Dokja hoisted Gil-young onto his back and gave the signal to run. At Dokja's command, Hyunsung, Senga, and Hee-won sprang into action, running straight toward the spawning zone. As they moved, the creatures began to emerge in the red zone. The first wave consisted of grade 9 ground rats, their numbers overwhelming. Soon they were joined by stronger intermediate grade 9 species known as grolls, hulking underground monsters with a fearsome presence. Senga was the first to spot it, green tiles shimmering faintly on the wall ahead. Her hand instinctively reached out, and as her fingers touched the surface, the tiles emitted a brilliant light. The moment of enlightenment came with a notification. Reacting swiftly, Hee-won turned and touched the wall behind her. Another light appeared, followed by another notification. However, Lee Hyunsung hesitated. He was weighed down by the relentless ground rats clinging to his shield, their claws scratching furiously. He struggled to move as the creatures piled on. Senga, quick to act, threw a makeshift rope toward him. With her and Hee-won's combined strength, Hyunsung was pulled forward. He soared through the air, breaking free of the rats, and managed to touch the wall. Behind them, Senga called out to Dokja, her voice filled with urgency. But Dokja didn't respond. He was already sprinting ahead, carrying Gil-young on his back. In his mind, Dokja recalled the crucial details of the scenario. The third main scenario had a hidden layer. Green zones weren't confined to rooms as everyone initially believed. Certain surfaces would reveal green zones once the scenario was activated. Walls of all places were another place they could appear. Dokja's thoughts raced. There were only 2 hidden green zones along line 3, and he had already found one. The second zone had to be close, somewhere up ahead. He couldn't afford to slow down now. Amid the chaos of the station, Dokja's eyes caught sight of a boy standing just a dozen meters away. The boy's expression was frozen in terror, his gaze locked on the relentless wave of ground rats swarming toward him. Dokja's thoughts betrayed a darker practicality. He considered simply taking the boy's room for himself. It was, after all, the easier path. Suddenly, the air shifted as Baekhyung, the dokebi overseeing the scenario, erupted in laughter. His voice echoed through the space, amused by the unfolding events. The system responded to his delight with ominous messages that a scenario penalty has been added. Some existing green zones will be disabled. The effect was immediate. The green zone protecting the boy vanished in an instant. The ground rats lunged at him without hesitation, tearing through his small frame. Blood sprayed in every direction as his agonized cries filled the air. Dokja's steps didn't falter. The horrifying sight had bought him enough time to reach the passage ahead. Carrying Gil-young on his back, he pushed forward, only to find his path blocked by monsters emerging from the shattered screen doors. Quickly, Dokja pulled Gil-young behind him and unsheathed Unbroken Faith. The sword's blade glimmered with a force of pure power as he slashed through the incoming creatures. The monsters fell one after another, but the onslaught seemed endless. Dokja's thoughts drifted to Jung-hyuk. To survive an onslaught like this for even a day, Jung-hyuk must truly be a monster. He wondered briefly if he could do the same, even if he spent every coin he had to boost his stats. But the doubt lingered. He wasn't sure if he could match such a feat. As Dokja fought, Gil-young spoke, his voice breaking through the noise. Dokja dismissed him at first, focused on the relentless monsters. Gil-young's question came hesitantly, but with a weight that struck Dokja. He asked why Dokja was going out of his way to help them when he could have survived far more easily on his own. The answer wasn't clear, even to Dokja himself. For a moment he hesitated, unsure if there was a concrete reason behind his actions. Elsewhere, Senga and Hee-won were fighting their own battles. Senga's concern for Dokja and Gil-young was evident as she wondered aloud if they were all right. Hee-won, unable to see through the swarm of monsters, could only grit her teeth in frustration. Dokja gripped his sword tightly, slashing through the swarm of ground rats. The blade moved with precision, carving the creatures apart as he pushed forward. He paused briefly to lift Gil-young back onto his back. Carrying Gil-young, Dokja's thoughts flickered. He acknowledged that it would have been easier to go alone to keep all the rewards for himself. But a distant memory surfaced of a story he had once read. A protagonist had made the same selfish choice, and it had led to ruin. In his mind, Dokja admitted the truth. He was not a protagonist, nor was he destined to be a hero or savior. But one thing was certain. Gil-young would not die. Not today. Dokja instructed to hold on tight, his voice steady as he activated his personal skill, Bookmark. The ability wrapped his body in Kim Nam-woon's blackening, a dark and fierce power. The aura pushed away the monsters in his path, but it didn't shield him entirely. Fangs and claws bit into his body, and the ground rats tore into his thighs. Pain radiated through him, but he didn't stop. He ran forward, relentless and unyielding. Finally, the original wall came into view. Its surface shimmered faintly, marking the presence of a green zone. Dokja jumped over the remaining rats, landing in front of the zone that could accommodate 2 people. Relief flickered for a moment before the system message appeared of a green zone, but someone was already inside. Dokja froze, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the figure within the zone. It was a man he recognized immediately, a man who shouldn't have been there. Jung-hyuk, the protagonist of the novel, stood within the safety of the green zone. Dokja called out to him, his frustration barely contained. He asked Jung-hyuk to move, reasoning that Jung-hyuk didn't need the protection of the zone to survive. But Jung-hyuk dismissed the plea, feigning exhaustion and indifference. Dokja's thoughts churned with irritation. He couldn't understand how Jung-hyuk, only on his 3rd round, had already discovered this hidden area. In the original story, Jung-hyuk had only used a secret green zone during his 4th regression. Dokja's hands itched to lash out, but he restrained himself. With no other option, Dokja made another demand. If Jung-hyuk wouldn't move, then at least take Gil-young into the zone. After a tense moment, Jung-hyuk agreed, reaching out to take the child. Gil-young resisted, his urgency breaking through his fear as he called out to Dokja. He tried to rush back to him, but Jung-hyuk's firm hand held him in place. Dokja turned away from the green zone and faced the approaching swarm of ground rats. The constellation known as the Bald General of Justice closed his eyes, while the demon-like Judge of Fire observed Dokja with an uncomfortable intensity. Jung-hyuk's gaze wavered for a moment, filled with a mix of surprise and recognition. His eyes fell on the object glowing faintly in Dokja's hand, a stone radiating an ethereal light. It was the Spectre Stone. Even as the monsters clawed at him, Dokja's focus never faltered. He knew the truth about the stone and its power, but he was certain Jung-hyuk, despite his knowledge, could not wield it. With a decisive act, Dokja bit into the stone, ignoring the searing pain in his body. As the stone broke, a strange vapor escaped from Dokja's mouth. The mist expanded, forming a dense fog that enveloped him completely. The system's notification confirmed his gamble that illusory prison has been activated. You have become a ghost species. The world around Dokja began to distort. The solid platform beneath his feet wavered, and the shapes of Jung-hyuk and Gil-young blurred into indistinct forms. Their voices calling out to him became muffled echoes in the shifting reality. Dokja became a ghost. As soon as Dokja heard his mother's voice, he realized it was a dream. He tried to resist its pull, but this time it wasn't easy. The floor beneath him shifted, soft like a quagmire, and swallowed him whole. A notification appeared, cold and precise, that due to excessive immersion, the influence of the 4th wall has temporarily weakened. Scenes unfolded before him, indifferent to his will. Blood soaked the living room floor. A man's lifeless body lay still, and a woman stood over it, staring down in silence. Her back was to him, but the weight of the memory was unbearable. Dokja's mind resisted. He couldn't, and he wouldn't, relive this. Shaking his head violently, the vivid image broke apart and scattered. The remnants of the memory left him breathless. This was his curse, his damn trauma. He reminded himself that some memories were never meant to resurface. It wasn't just the past clawing at him now. The Spectre Spirit Stone he'd acquired on his way to Chungmuro Station was the cause. When consumed, the item temporarily transformed its user into a ghost species, rendering them invisible to monsters. But the cost was steep. It magnified the traumas buried deep within the mind. Dokja had avoided using it for this very reason, yet here he was. The 4th wall, his most reliable shield, had always kept him grounded. Without it, he would have been consumed by the memories. Others wouldn't have lasted as long. They would have lost their sanity. Now, he could only wait for the effects of the 4th wall to return. Then, a voice broke through. For a fleeting moment, Dokja thought the trauma had shifted to another memory, but this voice wasn't his mother's. It wasn't a product of his own mind. It was unfamiliar. Dokja turned, his body tensing. Standing behind him was a woman. She was someone he didn't recognize. Her appearance was striking. Foreign features, blonde hair, and an air of authority. His eyes locked onto hers. In her left eye, there was an ominous red swirl pulsating with unnatural energy. Her piercing gaze rested on him as she spoke, questioning if he was Jung-hyuk. However, Dokja didn't answer. Instead, he quickly activated his personal skill, Character Profile. The familiar system activated, and the barriers surrounding her mind began to crack. Her mental barrier was formidable, level 6, yet it wasn't enough to block him entirely. The results appeared before him. Her attribute was Prophet and Savior. Dokja immediately recognized the woman before him as Anna Croft, a character from 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Her presence here, of all times, confirmed his suspicions. Anna Croft had the ability to enter others' consciousness without being bound by spatial limitations. She was the Prophet, a woman who could see fragments of the future and sought to reshape it according to her visions. Her sharp gaze demanded answers, her red swirl eye glowing ominously as her powers sought to penetrate his defenses. Dokja's mind mind worked quickly, formulating a response, but her skill set made deception nearly impossible. A notification appeared, cold and unwavering. Lie detection level 7 activated. Your words are confirmed as false. Dokja remained composed despite the situation. Her insistence on knowing his identity confirmed something for him. The reduced influence of the fourth wall had allowed her to sense his presence. If his understanding of her abilities was correct, she could only reach him because the fourth wall had weakened momentarily. Still, he tested her, dropping hints that should have clarified his identity. He referenced the ichthyosaur nucleus, a rare and valuable item he had sent her through the auction house. Anna Croft's reaction confirmed his suspicions. Her expression shifted from stern authority to startled disbelief. She realized he was the one who had sent the nucleus, the very resource she had used to implant the Archdemon's eyeball into her left eye. The Archdemon's eyeball, a coveted relic worth a fortune, had augmented Anna's powers, granting her unparalleled insight and influence. But now, it seemed that power was faltering. As the effects of the fourth wall skill slowly returned, Dokja watched Anna Croft's figure begin to blur. Her once intense eyes became unfocused, and the influence of the great demon's eyes that had allowed her to interfere with his consciousness weakened. Her figure gradually faded, disappearing from his sight as the fourth wall reasserted itself. Dokja's mind settled once more into its impenetrable fortress. He waved his hand, a casual gesture of farewell, as her presence vanished completely. The fourth wall skill reasserted its full control. The impenetrable barrier of Dokja's mind returned, shielding him once again. The lingering effects of the illusory prison faded entirely, rendering him immune to its influence. His thoughts raced as he regained clarity. This encounter had taken too long, and time was a resource he could not afford to waste. With his already overwhelming situation, running into Anna Croft only complicated matters further. Concern gnawed at him as he considered the possibilities. How much time had passed? Were his companions safe? Had the third scenario begun? Or worse, were they surrounded by ground rats? The thought of Jung Hyuk crossed his mind, and an uneasy possibility emerged. What if Jung Hyuk had harmed Gil-yong? The anxiety deepened, but before he could spiral further, voices echoed in his head, faint but growing stronger. They pulled him back to reality. The exclusive skill Evil Dispel activated, piercing through the fog, clouding his mind. As his vision cleared, the first face he saw was Senga's, her expression filled with relief. Next to her were Lee Hyunsong and Hee-won, their worry etched clearly into their features. Dokja scanned his surroundings. The scene before him was catastrophic, a blood-soaked battleground, evidence of the brutal fight they had endured. The relief on his companions' faces suggested they had survived, but this victory felt hollow to him. He inquired about the scenario immediately, his voice steady despite his battered state. Lee Hyunsong quickly reassured him, explaining that the scenario had ended and they had succeeded. His words carried excitement, but Dokja's response was tempered. He tried to move his body, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on him. The toll of their survival was clear in the chaos surrounding them, and he knew this was far from over. Their relief, while understandable, felt premature. He reminded the group that this was only the first day of the scenario. Survival would demand more from them, and there were 6 more days to endure. His mind quickly calculated, recalling that the previous day had been the 4th. Lee Hyunsong, noticing his state, insisted that Dokja hadn't slept and needed rest. Checking the time, Lee Hyunsong informed him it was 8:30 a.m., with only 30 minutes having passed since the scenario ended. Dokja acknowledged that his unconsciousness hadn't lasted long, though the exhaustion in his body told him otherwise. His first thought turned to Gil-yong. He asked where the boy was, but before Hee-won could answer, his eyes already found Lee Jae and Jung Hyuk standing a few steps away, looking down at Gil-yong. The two were in conversation, their voices too low for Dokja to catch the full exchange. Jung Hyuk's expression was unreadable, though the faintest trace of irritation flickered across his face. Gil-yong stood firm, his posture steady despite the imposing presence of the regressor before him. Dokja's mind worked quickly, piecing together what little he could discern. Could it be that Gil-yong had startled Jung Hyuk earlier? And if so, what had happened between them in that moment? Jung Hyuk appeared to offer his companionship to Gil-yong, but the boy responded with quiet resolve and declined the offer. Jung Hyuk pressed further, assuring him that he would grow stronger if he accompanied him, but Gil-yong refused again. For a brief moment, Jung Hyuk's eyes locked with Dokja's. His thoughts lingered on the man he had deemed too fortunate, silently deciding that for now, Dokja would remain alive. Dokja wanted to speak, to break the silence that hung between them, but his body betrayed him. He was drained, unable to muster the energy for even a single word. As the moment stretched, Gil-yong noticed that Dokja had regained consciousness. The boy's swollen eyes, red from crying, filled with relief as he rushed toward Dokja and embraced him tightly. Jung Hyuk, standing nearby, observed the scene with his usual detached demeanor. His mind, however, was far from idle. Plans for the night weighed heavily on him, each step meticulously calculated. There was no time to waste. If he didn't act soon, the opportunity would slip away. Dokja, still weak and barely coherent, briefly felt as though he could sense Jung Hyuk's thoughts. His muddled mind struggled to focus, but the exhaustion was too great. Darkness crept over him and he collapsed to the ground, unconscious once more. Gil-yong's voice cracked with panic as he called out to Dokja, shaking him slightly, but Hee-won intervened. She reassured the boy, urging him to let Dokja rest. Gil-yong hesitated, his concern palpable, but he reluctantly relented and stepped away, mumbling under his breath. With that, the third day of main scenario was declared complete. Time passed, and Dokja stirred awake to the sound of an unfamiliar voice. Bi-hyung's cheerful tone rang out, urging him to wake up, while Hee-won noted his return to consciousness with a teasing remark about Lee Hyun-song's thigh. Hyun-song, half asleep nearby, mumbled something incoherent about roll call and an orderly officer, his words a reminder of his military past. Dokja blinked, still groggy. Something about the atmosphere felt strange, as though he were back in the army himself. Bi-hyung, visibly pleased by Dokja's recovery, greeted him with a laugh and handed something over. Before Dokja could react, a flood of messages began to pour into his mind, each carrying the weight of unseen watchers. The constellation known as the demon-like Judge of Fire expressed sadness over the traumas Dokja had endured. The abyssal black flame dragon, intrigued, showed an interest in Dokja's past. Meanwhile, the secretive plotter wondered silently about the mystery surrounding Dokja's mother. Coins began accumulating in Dokja's account as the constellation sponsored him, their curiosity and sympathy manifesting in tangible form. In total, 1,800 coins were added, a stark reminder of how closely they observed his every move. Dokja reflected quietly, his thoughts heavy with the implications of what had just occurred. It seemed that the constellations had caught a glimpse of his past, a violation of his most guarded memories. His frustration simmered beneath the surface, but there was no time to dwell on it. More messages followed, filling his mind with updates and rewards. The system acknowledged his perseverance throughout the night. He had endured Chungmuro's night without the safety of a green zone. This accomplishment unlocked the achievement titled Never-Ending Dawn and rewarded him with an additional 1,000 coins. His coin balance now totaled 22,650. It was a considerable sum, the culmination of his calculated decisions and careful planning. Dokja allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. He had saved enough coins to proceed with his plans. As Dokja gathered his thoughts, Hee-won yawned audibly nearby. She stretched lazily, her tone light as she inquired about the plans for the night. She suggested repeating what they had done the previous night. Dokja dismissed the suggestion immediately. That strategy had been a one-time gamble, and he had no intention of relying on it again. Inwardly, Dokja acknowledged the limitations of his knowledge. The 3 ways to survive the apocalypse hadn't provided any details about the locations of hidden green zones for the 4th day of the scenario. However, his resolve remained unshaken. He announced his decision with calm authority. The 3rd scenario would end today. There was no room for delay or hesitation. Hee-won's surprise was evident as she questioned how they would accomplish such a feat. Dokja's answer was concise and direct. The first step was clear.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe for the next parts.